Chapter 826. The Thought of Being Forgotten. Monday evening, 160 Buckland Street. Klein set up a ritual and summoned himself. He planned on investigating the secret hidden in the sewers. While responding above the gray fog, he was in a dilemma about the card to use, the Black Emperor or the Tyrant card. It was like the selection of clothes before heading out. In consideration of how Buckland was a place where the Church of Storms was a very powerful faction, and being afraid that he would end up attracting high-sequence irascible bros, Klein ultimately chose to use the Black Emperor card. He wore a crown and black armor with a cape behind him. Aside from this card of blasphemy, he also brought Creeping Hunger, Azek's copper whistle, Seigneur's gold coin, and Broken Finger, the Marauder Pathway's mystical item which Katlia had given him 3 hours ago, as well as some ordinary explosives. Of course, Klein didn't bring the entire crate of explosives. For a spirit body, it was just too heavy. He only took out 5 sticks and left Seigneur to hold them in his body. As for Death Knell, he had left it in his room. This was to prevent himself from having the urge to participate in a battle. He had very clear goals, so once he discovered any problems, to avoid danger, he would immediately leave and not stay behind. On the contrary, a powerful weapon would end up making him act bold, making him wish to probe deeper and resolve the matter by himself. This is Buckland. It's best that I don't create too great a commotion. As for what's hidden in the sewers, I have no way of being clairvoyant about it. I can only divine whether it will be dangerous. Klein looked at the wall clock in his room, and he confirmed that there was another hour and a half before Hazel took action like she usually did. His figure suddenly vanished as he passed through the balcony's glass and flew into the streets before entering the sewers. In the dirty and humid environment, Klein took out a lone gold coin and made Wraith Seigneur appear in front of him with his dark red coat and old triangular hat. Following that, he handed over the tweezers that resembled 2 ground-bone fingers to his marionette. Just holding it on him for a short period of time had nearly made him steal the sewer's manhole cover. Seigneur held Broken Finger and walked ahead. Dressed as the Black Emperor, Klein turned invisible and walked behind, allowing his marionette to open up a gap of at least 50 meters from him. With this distance between them, he was no longer affected by kleptomania, and as a dead person, Seigneur also lacked the thoughts of stealing. He didn't even have any thoughts. Turning in at the corresponding fork and passing through the hidden door, Wraith Seigneur held the grayish-white tweezer and appeared inside the half-natural, half-artificial cave. Unlike before, the oilskin-wrapped tools like shovels had changed positions. The hidden passage on the right had deepened a little. That was clearly Hazel's main focus. Right on the heels of that, Klein, who didn't enter the fork, leaned against the water of the sewers, his back facing the target region. He controlled his marionette as he walked deeper into the right passage. Soon, Seigneur came to the end. At this moment, Klein suddenly felt the grayish-white tweezer in his marionette's hand tremble subtly, as though it had been attracted by some unknown object not far away. The unknown item was deep and profound like a calm ocean. It made it difficult to pry into its exact state. A characteristic that's alive, much closer to that of a spirit. Klein was only able to determine this as he immediately let Seigneur use Mirror Leap to return to the half-natural, half-artificial cave, onto a shovel that hadn't rusted. He didn't attempt to head deeper underground via the passage. Then, Seigneur appeared again, took out the 5 ordinary sticks of explosives from inside its body, and placed them in different spots. Every wraith was a demolition expert. After doing all of this, Seigneur's figure phased away, appearing on the surface of the gold coin in Klein's hand. As he stuffed the gold coin into his body, Klein raised his right hand, in preparation to snap his fingers and trigger the 5 sticks of explosives. His idea was very simple. It was to deliver an explosion of a suitable scale in order to destroy Hazel's hard work and traces. It would attract the Nighthawks and resolve everything. This way, regardless of what was hidden deep in the passage, it wouldn't bring him danger. In Buckland, knowing how to ingeniously sound the alarm was more effective and safer than rashly attacking by himself. This was especially so when Klein wasn't capable of determining that the matter involved a demigod. "I'm such a good citizen." As Klein gave a self-deprecating remark, he prepared to snap his fingers to ignite the explosives. Suddenly, his head swayed a little as he lowered his arm, as though nothing had happened. The cautious Klein immediately ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. Then, he returned to the real world and entered his physical body. Just as he was about to busy himself to bring back Creeping Hunger, Seigneur's gold coin, and the other items from the mysterious space above the gray fog, he frowned slightly. He seriously recalled the entire process of his late-night exploration when he was alarmed to realize that he had apparently lost a small portion of his memories. He didn't remember if he had triggered the 5 sticks of ordinary explosives. As he turned his head to sense his surroundings and confirmed that the entire street was very silent, Klein began to believe that he hadn't snapped his fingers. This is a beyonder power of a dream stealer? It seems to be much stronger than Mobit. If not for the gray fog and my habit of doing an after-action review, I might not have discovered that my thoughts of triggering the explosives were stolen away. The other party might have also snapped his fingers, but without the flame-controlling powers to work in concert, nothing happened. Klein's expression turned grave as he thought, prepared to make another attempt. Similarly, to prevent himself from being tracked, he still summoned himself and responded to himself. With the Black Emperor card, Klein left 160 Buckland Street from another side, deliberately circling 2 streets away before arriving at the sewer's manhole. This time, he didn't approach the fork. Staying not far from the manhole, he used his enhanced flame controlling to sense the explosive and lifted his right hand. He raised it and lowered it as Klein rapidly ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog to prevent himself from being attacked by an unknown existence. Not in a hurry to return to the real world, he sat at the chair of the world, doing a debrief of the entire process. I forgot to trigger the explosives again. If I didn't force myself to recall this, I wouldn't have even considered such a problem. Truly quite impressive. The one that steered Hazel to the sewers to dig is probably a demigod. Why didn't he directly parasitize Hazel? Could it be due to particular reasons that he's sealed somewhere in the sewers and can only release some of his powers to drive Hazel to help him via a dream? The one that caused Broken Fingers to react abnormally via the law of beyonder characteristic convergence is also him? He is unable to control the signs in regards to this, Klein thought as he wrapped the corner of the long modeled table. After having a rough guess, he discovered that there was apparently no way of truly carrying out his original plans. This was because his thoughts would be stolen once he entered the distance in which he could use flame controlling to ignite the explosives. Even if he recalled it later, there was no way to make up for it. Considering how Hazel would be affected by her dream, Klein suspected that the limits to the person's powers didn't stop at the manhole. If he discovered that hero bandit Black Emperor was related to Dwayne Dantes, then he would lose his corresponding thoughts and memories even while sleeping in his bedroom. However, he has no way of locking onto me by passing over the gray fog. Does he think it's so easy to stop me from sounding the alarm? Klein thought as he cautiously summoned a paper figurine and used a tiny amount of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. With the ritual that had yet been terminated, he conjured an angel and forcefully created an interference effect. After doing this, he carried the Black Emperor card and entered his bedroom with his door of summoning. Klein's new plan was to head to another street, find a random house, and borrow some pen and paper to write. At the end of the 6th left fork in the Buckland Street sewers, there's a secret passage that's suspected to hide a demigod from the Marauder pathway, or something similar. Then, with the image of Buckland Street, he would plaster the piece of paper on St. Samuel Cathedral's entrance as a public notice. Of course, he would politely knock on the door to let the bishops inside sense it to prevent ordinary people from first seeing it. At times, the most primitive methods are the most effective ones. Just as Klein was about to leave 160 Buckland Street from another area, he suddenly felt a tremor as a deep rumble sounded from afar. It was ignited? The explosives were ignited? Who did it? Klein paused in surprise. It was definitely not done by him, as it couldn't have been delayed for so long. And previously, there wasn't anyone in the sewers. Even if there was someone, the thought of igniting the explosives would be stolen away, unless a demigod happened to come. But how could it be this coincidental? There's another possibility. It was done by the demigod from the Marauder pathway. He had repeatedly stolen my thoughts before, preventing me from using flame controlling. It was to buy time to leave. Now that it's finally done, he triggered the explosives to destroy all the evidence? That adheres to logic, as he should know very well that a powerful being whose origins can't be traced cannot be stopped if he insists on sounding the alarm. The best solution is to drop its tail in order to survive, just like a gecko. However, if he can leave, why did he steer Hazel into digging the secret passage? Doing so will deal tremendous harm to him. Klein thought of certain possibilities, but he was unable to verify any of them. Furthermore, he was certain that the underground explosion was bound to have already attracted attention. Hence, he immediately left creeping hunger and other items behind, terminated the summoning, and returned above the gray fog. After returning to the real world, he stopped the ritual, cleared the altar, and cleaned all traces before getting into bed. 39 Buckland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel, who didn't sleep at all, was alarmed by the tremors and deep humming sound. She walked to the balcony and drew the curtains to look towards the sewer manhole. However, she didn't notice any anomalies. After observing for a while, the uncertain her had decided to cancel her operation for the night and sleep in peace. At this moment, she suddenly heard squeaking as she turned to look at the corner of her balcony. At some point in time, there was a gray rat sitting there covered in sewage water. Chapter 8:27. Plenty of people coming and going. Despite getting in bed, Klein didn't manage to sleep until daybreak. This was because he believed that, with most people stirred awake from the commotion underground, him sleeping too soundly without noticing anything would make him suspicious. Indeed, just as he got out of bed, walked to the balcony, and drew the curtains to pretend to search for the source of the commotion, Walter came knocking at his door. 2 servants with double-barreled hunting rifles were assigned to protect their employer to prevent any accidents from happening. Before long, the police arrived. Based on the descriptions of the residents in the area, they identified the sewers as the target. As for what they discovered or whether they sought backup from the Nighthawks, the ordinary citizen, Mr. Dwayne Dantes, had no idea. After confirming that there wouldn't be any more accidents, he sent his butler and servants away and quickly got some sleep. By the time he woke up again, Buckland Street had been restored to normal. Pedestrians were on the streets, and the carriages were coming and going. The Intis parasol trees that lined the side of the street continued, making the area seem tranquil. Are the results of the investigation out? Klein looked at himself in the mirror as he asked Richardson, who was helping him smooth his clothes. Richardson had already inquired about the matter and was waiting for his employer to ask. He immediately replied. Apparently some gang members were trading firearms in the nearby sewers and accidentally triggered an explosion. What a reasonable explanation. Klein didn't probe deeper, nor did he consider where the demigod of the marauder pathway who stole away his thoughts went to, or if the Nighthawks found him. Firstly, this was because he believed that the demigod's action of igniting the explosives would definitely implicate him in a serious manner. If the demigod had the ability or suitable environment to do so, he would have long parasitized Hazel without going through the convoluted and troublesome hassle. This also meant that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, or even 2 to 3 months, Klein didn't need to worry about the demigod. Secondly, if he continued pursuing the matter and pushed the demigod into a corner, Klein had no doubts that he would be harmed as a result. Once the demigod lost all inhibitions and began affecting the surroundings on a large scale, then, even if he didn't expose himself, he would suffer the demigod's attack, as well as implicate the innocent residents along the street. Apart from the first 2 reasons, Klein was apprehensive over the matter. If anomalies kept happening in the originally normal Buckland Street, it was bound to attract a deeper level of suspicion from the official beyonders. And all of this happened after Dwayne Dantes moved in. Even if Klein's body was covered in mouths, there was no way he could explain himself. When the time came, he would have to give up on his plans and reconsider new ones. I shouldn't head into the sewers for the time being. There's probably a trap laid by the official beyonders. There's one thing to do. Take note of Hazel without leaving any clues. I'll observe to see if there are any abnormalities about her, and once I discover any dangerous signs, I'll immediately turn into Hero Bandit and put up advertisements at St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein went downstairs to have breakfast with a composed look. After doing so, he returned to his master bedroom and got Richardson to wait by the door. As for himself, he took out the almost torn paper crane from his wallet. He planned on using it one last time and inform Snake of Fate while Septon of the choices that Admiral of Stars was offering him, and if he was agreeable or not. Typically, he could complete such matters by visiting his parents. However, without Dr. Aaron's invitation, and him lacking a sufficient reason to pay a visit, that wasn't the best choice, as it easily made others question his motives. He obviously couldn't tell Dr. Aaron that he wasn't there for him, but for the fetus in his wife's womb. After carefully unfolding the paper crane, Klein glanced at the pencil marks left on it. His intuition told him that, as long as he used an eraser, the paper would definitely tear. However, this didn't stump him. He got a black fountain pen and directly wrote on it. The other party has made their offer. The black ink was a lot more obvious than the pencil marks. Therefore, although the text overlapped, it didn't affect anyone from recognizing the words written on it. There are always more solutions than problems. Klein nodded in satisfaction as he folded the unfolded piece of paper according to its crease marks. This time, he suspected that unfolding it again would result in it tearing. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, ever since the tarot gathering ended, Derek was like a petrified statue who sat by his bed, motionless. After an unknown period of time, he was awakened by the noise on the streets outside. However, the feeling that he was still in a nightmare continued enveloping him. It made his footsteps towards the window appear especially heavy. God might already be dead. God might not return again. Such thoughts kept resounding inside Derek's mind as he felt an irresistible sense of despair and pain. Back when he had to kill his parents with his own hands, he had already suspected if God would return or show his blessings to his forsaken people of the dark. He later thought of relying on Mr. Fool, allowing himself to become the true sun and help the people of the City of Silver to escape their cursed fates. However, having been educated from a young age and the environment constantly affecting him, he still looked forward to the return of the Creator. He held expectations that sacrifices and the repentance of the City of Silver would earn them a response. And now, all his hopes had been dashed. The tiny sliver of hope that was left had now been engulfed by the darkness. The City of Silver will continue in this state until it disappears into the darkness. There will be no one remembering that we once existed and struggled. Derek cast his gaze out the window and saw many of his neighbors gathered together. They were praying and seeking forgiveness from the Lord that created everything. This wasn't a ritual organized by the six-member council, but a tradition that took form in the City of Silver after 2,000 to 3,000 years. They would pray for almost anything: good developments, unstable emotions, an injury in the family, and the birth of new life. Lightning streaked across the sky and illuminated the streets. Derek stood motionless in the darkness of his room, staring outside in a daze. Unknowingly, he clenched his fists. By the time his neighbors dispersed, he finally retracted his gaze, his expressions somewhat warped. He reached out to touch Thunder God's roar as his gaze gradually focused. He planned on following Mr. Hangman's advice to befriend others to help him. Soon, he felt a little stumped because he had no idea how to make friends. Nor did he know how to warmly greet others or find a topic of conversation. This was in violation of his own character. After some thought, Derek decided to head to the training field and use combat to re-establish ties with people he was familiar with in the past. That was a gathering ground for the residents of the City of Silver, where he often met people he found familiar. It was late at night once again. Klein once again saw the pitch-black steeple and desolate plains in his dream as he had desired. Passing through one obstacle after another, he arrived at the region with the scattered tarot cards. A black pram was already waiting there. Willow Septon, who was wrapped in silver silk, asked with a bright voice, "What are the choices? You are being very proactive this time. What happened to your reservation as a sequence one? However, kids are like that. It's good that you maintain such a state of mind." Klein silently chuckled as he said, "Two choices. Choose either one. 1. It's to take one look at the Wheel of Fortune card. 2. It's the method to regain a certain amount of strength during your weak stages." Willow Septon fell silent for a second and chuckled. "So it's Bernadette on the other side. My intuition was right after all. I'll be able to obtain something good this time." Following that, he asked, "Which choice do you think I'll choose?" Klein's subconscious idea was, "I have a chance of posing a question once." Then, he said with a self-deprecating laugh, "2. Willow Septon sked and said, "Do I look like a mythical creature that doesn't have such methods? I've already restarted so many times. I definitely have the right state of mind to make preparations." "Reasonable." Klein nodded and said, "You wish to take a look at the Wheel of Fortune card? Or do you want them to switch the choices?" Willow Septon sucked at his thumb and said, "I choose 2. Klein's expression froze. Willow Septon smiled and said, "Knowing one more method means one more trump card. Isn't that the right thing to do?" "Yes, whatever you say is right." Klein replied in exasperation. "All right. When can you complete the transaction?" Willow Septon waved his short arms and said, "Of course it's when I'm born and have the placenta blood. This will probably be in early July, but it might be brought forward." Having said that, he relaxed his limbs as he chuckled. "I wouldn't mind it either if they wished to hand me the method ahead of time." "They?" Klein subconsciously asked, unsure how the Snake of Mercury knew that it was they and not her. "Queen Mystic, Bernadette." Willow Septon sucked at his thumb and said indiscernibly, "Bernadette has already passed that stage. The stage, that needs a drop of mythical creature blood, is likely being prepared for her subordinate." "Is that the case?" "Ma'am Hermit needs it?" Klein asked thoughtfully. "What is that drop of mythical creature blood for? The main ingredient of some potion?" He connected it to the fact that a drop of divine blood from the eternal blazing sun could be used for the unshadowed potion's main ingredient. "No. Isn't it suicidal for other pathways to consume the blood of a fate pathway mythical creature?" Willow Septon said with a scoff. "I heard that to advance from sequence 5 to sequence 4 for the mystery prior pathway, there's a need to completely analyze a drop of a mythical creature's blood and, from there, obtain complicated and massive amounts of knowledge. This is part of the ritual. As the mythical creature blood used is different, what they will be proficient at during the mysticologist stage will also differ. To think that's possible, the rituals of the different pathways and different sequences all have their unique traits." Klein bowed in enlightenment and said, "Thank you for your answer." Willow Septon waved his hand and said, "Stop disturbing me. Letting me be born in peace is the greatest form of gratitude." Without waiting for Klein to answer, he added, "Giving me that method doesn't count." With that said, the black pram retreated and entered the shadows before vanishing. Klein watched the surrounding walls collapse as he silently heaved a sigh of relief. He planned on escaping to sleep again. At this moment, he froze because he discovered a new power infiltrating his dream. Another one is coming just after one left. This is more lively than in the day. As Klein changed the dream according to his wishes, he pretended to look around in a daze. Chapter 828, Movement of the Night. Klein had set the dream to be that of 160 Baclunt Street. He produced many beauties that circled around Dwayne Dantes. He did this to perfectly create the image of a knowledgeable and experienced tycoon who could only let go in his dreams while holding back in the real world to uphold his reputation. Sitting on a sofa and receiving a cup of red wine from a young lady, Klein found his surroundings suddenly change before he could even taste it. It turned from his brightly lit villa filled with elegant beauties to a dark, humid, and dirty sewer. Following that, he saw 5 familiar explosives in his hands. Aren't these the ones I placed earlier? Klein was first taken aback as he pretended to jump in fright, throwing away the explosives as he looked around warily. Noticing that there weren't any other abnormalities, he retreated one step at a time until he felt his way to an upright metallic ladder. He decisively climbed up, moved the manhole cover away, and left the sewer. As he returned to Buckland Street, his dream shattered as he woke up. Klein opened his eyes and found himself in a dark room. As he looked at the ceiling adorned in gold, he recalled his encounter. This was done by that Marauder Pathways demigod? He escaped the pursuit of the Nighthawks and is still hiding nearby. As he's afraid that the Black Emperor who exposed his whereabouts would appear again, he began steering dreams to seek out his target? Very possible. If it wasn't because I can maintain my reason and lucidity when others infiltrate my dreams, I might have been driven by my subconscious to place the explosives again. After all, this is something I've done before, and the memory is still fresh in my mind. Thankfully, I concluded the principle that a marionettist should try to hide behind the scenes. Be it my exploration of the sewers or meeting with Trissy, I had relied on my marionette. Even if it's because of the distance, I didn't choose to do it personally and had instead used my spirit body with the gray fog as a proxy while carrying items that can interfere with the prying of secrets and divination, making it impossible to determine who is the true mastermind. I would have long been discovered and targeted. Even if I didn't die, I would have to flee Backland in a pathetic manner. Upon thinking of this, Klein felt relieved. In the beginning, he wasn't certain of the secret hidden in the sewers. He had never expected it to be a demigod, but he had abided by the marionettist's principles and followed his strict requirements. Hence, he avoided the tragic outcome of having his act exposed. Backland really is a dangerous place. Any mistake can result in trouble. As Klein reflected over the matter, he felt that his marionettist potion had unknowingly digested a little. After he composed himself, he chuckled inwardly. It appears that Demigod is still in Buckland Street. He's probably hiding in Hazel, or maybe even by her side. Haha, if that demigod had infiltrated my dream a minute or two earlier, he would have met Snake of Fate, Septon. Although this Sequence 1 angel is still in a weak phase, that's only relative to other angels like Ouroboros. Faced with a sneaky demigod who can't even parasitize Hazel, there likely won't be any trouble. Ignoring the other powers, just revealing a full mythical creature state would be enough to deal tremendous damage to a demigod who's equally weak. I dare to bet that Septon must have sensed it ahead of time to choose that time window to come out, thus successfully avoiding an encounter with any other demigods. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that marauder demigod understand how dangerous it is to randomly infiltrate dreams in Backland. Leonard definitely knows this very well. Klein reined in his thoughts and pretended as though nothing had happened. With cogitation, he fell asleep again. It was only when the sun rose high in the sky that he woke up naturally. He sat up, transformed into Gehrman Sparrow, and prayed, "Please inform Ma'am Hermit that the angel has accepted the method to regain a certain amount of strength during one's weak stages. He has agreed to complete the transaction in late June or early July. You can also ask Bernadette about when I can meet her." After completing the prayer, Klein transformed back into Dwayne Dantes, got out of bed, and entered the bathroom to wash up. After brushing his teeth and washing his face, thus becoming abnormally alert, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the gray fog. He then threw the scene of the prayer into the crimson star representing the hermit. On the docked future, Catlia watched Frank Lee step on the dock while filled with anticipation. He planned on finding some place to sell his items and save up £8,000 to purchase the Druid Beyonder characteristic. She couldn't help but raise her hand to her forehead, feeling an inexplicable lack of confidence. Although she believed that she could suppress Frank Lee, even if he was a druid, thanks to her strength, mysticism knowledge, and mystical items, just the thought of his strange ideas, as well as his terrifying ability to put them into action, made her feel that the problem wasn't that simple. She didn't wish for a watermelon to grow on her head or participate in the tarot gathering above the gray fog while covered with ears of wheat. Thankfully, he still doesn't have the druid potion formula. For now, I don't have to worry about him advancing to Sequence 5. Catlia nudged her glasses as she comforted herself. At this moment, an illusory fog emanated in front of her as Gehrman Sparrow's voice sounded in her ears. That angel agreed. Catlia's expression softened as she couldn't help smiling. Once she obtained that drop of mythical creature blood, it meant that she was very close to the realm of a demigod. She already had the mysticologist potion formula. She has also completed the necessary conditions to exchange for a main ingredient from the Moses ascetic order. She also knew of the channel to obtain the other main ingredient, as well as the method to obtain it. I just need to wait until July. July? Katlia pursed her lips as her gaze penetrated the thick glasses while she surveyed her captain's cabin. Thursday afternoon. Just as Klein finished a class on ancient literature, he heard the illusory, stacked pleas. After heading above the gray fog, he discovered that the supplicant was the hermit Katlia. Admiral of Stars had requested Mr. Fool to inform the world that Queen Mystic had agreed to his request. If he was in Backlund, they could meet near the entrance of the bridge on the south bank of the Tussock River at 11 in the evening. Bernadette is still in Backlund. Klein conjured Gehrman Sparrow and gave a confirmatory answer. At 10:58 p.m., he entered his bathroom and took out a paper figurine from his pocket. Klein shook it and made the paper figurine turn into a Dwayne Dantes who sat on the toilet with a book in hand, as though he was daydreaming. Then, he shortened himself by about 4 centimeters. His face turned thin as his facial contours became more pronounced. He had transformed into Gehrman Sparrow. Right on the heels of that, the glove on his left hand turned transparent as countless illusory figures appeared within. Following that, Klein saw the surrounding colors saturate before turning well separated and stacked. His body then phased away from the real world. He quickly traversed the spirit world and, based on his location, kept adjusting his trajectory. In just a few seconds, he appeared at the south bank of the Tussock River where the Backlund Bridge entrance was. At that moment, it was already late at night. There was no one on the bridge, and it was extremely silent. The only thing that could be seen was a platoon of soldiers guarding the bridge a short distance away. Klein was just about to find Queen Mystic Bernadette's traces when he suddenly saw green pea vines droop down from the sky, interweaving to form a lush forest. This forest didn't have a peak as the veins formed different paths that either intersected or spiraled before extending high into the sky. Klein was taken aback for a second as he casually found a pea vine and hung over a tiny trail in midair before taking steps forward. After an unknown period of time, he saw that the green plants were connected to a seat that resembled a hammock. It was gently shaking above him. Queen Mystic was sitting there, wearing a white Intis-styled shirt and a dark black jacket. By her waist was a thin rapier. Other than not wearing a triangular hat, she was dressed like a standard pirate captain. She didn't only reveal her black leather boots like she did back when she interacted with Sherlock Moriarty in Backlund. At that moment, her chestnut hair cascaded down as her blue and deep eyes looked over. She gently said without any emotion, "Thank that existence behind you on my behalf. So you are still quite respectful towards the fool." The few answers I previously gave her had likely resolved some of her confusion. With the mask of Gehrman Sparrow on, Klein politely replied, "All right." Bernadette's eyes didn't shift as she continued looking at him. "Is there something this time?" Klein paused for a second as he said the words he had already prepared. "I wish to receive your help in reproducing the prolonged state of being contaminated by the core seal's power behind Cheney's gate of the Church of Evernight." As he spoke, Klein made Wraith Seigneur appear beside him. Bernadette looked deeply at the upright Admiral of Blood. Without asking Gehrman Sparrow how he knew that she had the means, she calmly said, "The core seals in the different cathedrals of the Church of Evernight are different. The state of contamination will also be different. Is it the Evernight pathway, the death pathway, or something else? Is it a main diocese cathedral, or a typical central cathedral in a city?" She had directly eliminated the option of the Church of Evernight's headquarters, the Cathedral of Serenity. This was because even a king of angels wouldn't cast their sights on it. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Diocese Cathedral, Evernight pathway." Bernadette nodded gently and said, "Then, I can allow him to suffer the corresponding contamination, but doing so will basically destroy this marionette of yours. It can still be used normally in the beginning, but with the passage of time, the contamination will worsen. He will slowly fall asleep, never to awaken." "Can the time it takes for the complete contamination be pushed back?" Klein asked, holding back the pain of potentially losing a marionette. Seigneur was one of the most valuable assets he had. Bernadette said with a calm expression, 2 months is the limit." Klein struggled inwardly for 2 seconds before replying in a deadpan manner, "All right." He then pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. "Thank you for your help." Bernadette didn't say a word as she retracted her gaze. She extended her right hand as words that were written in Jotun, Dragonese, Elvish, and ancient Hermes appeared in midair. These words interwove into strange symbols with a star-like radiance, as though they were opening a secret door that led deep into the spirit world. With the secret door opened, a gust of wind blew, conjuring the upper body of a man that was covered in white cloth. "Sleep bugle," Bernadette said gently but sternly. The man who had a torso and wind for his bottom replied reverently, pulling out a human skull from the white cloth. The skull's eye sockets were deeply recessed and dark. It was impossible to see the bottom. The rest of the skull was covered with holes of different shapes and cracks. It was white like a piece of jade. Bernadette took the sleep bugle and glanced at Gehrman Sparrow. Go back at least 50 meters. Klein didn't ask why as he left Signor in his original spot, and he quickly distanced himself along the pea-vine path. After exceeding 50 meters, he suddenly heard a distant and serene melody that was filled with sorrow and gloom. Subconsciously, Klein looked up at the area covered by the pea-vines. Bernadette was sitting with her back slightly hunched. Her chestnut hair was fluttering as her head was bowed. She had placed the human skull to her mouth, letting the orifices produce an air stream that appeared like the orchestrated movement of the night. The movement brought with it the power of calmness and faint melancholy. Bit by bit, it spread out without alarming the soldiers guarding the bridge beyond the pea-vine forest. Klein stood there and listened seriously when he suddenly had a pining for home. That was home, something that a traveler who had been drifting for a long period of time yearned for the most, but was unable to touch. Chapter 829, Arrival of June. Chapter 829, Arrival of June in the dark night, and within the green vine forest, Klein closed his eyes as he listened to that musical movement that was emitted from the sky. He felt calm in both body and mind, but he felt a faint sense of depression and sadness grow, emanate, and resonate. After an unknown period of time, the soothing melody finally disappeared as the hanging pea vines gently swayed in the night wind. Klein sighed silently as he opened his eyes and looked up. He saw that Queen Mystic Bernadette had handed over the orifice-filled human skull back to the servant that was half man, half wind. It's done. Bernadette's gentle and calm voice sounded. Thank you for your help. Klein bowed once again as he controlled Wraith Signor to return to his side. At this moment, the pea vines retracted upwards and slowly turned faint. Soon, the green forest vanished. Klein and Signor simultaneously landed at the entrance to the bridge. There was no one around this silent area, apart from a platoon of soldiers whose backs were facing him. There was nothing different from before. The fairy tale-like scene from before was like an illusion. Only then did Klein have the time to observe his marionette. He discovered that his marionette appeared more like a dead man than before. His face was pale and his aura cold. He gave off an obvious sense of gloom. This is likely the result of a single high dosage of contamination. If it's just guarding Cheney's gate for 1 to 2 times a week, with each duty happening during the day, it wouldn't be this serious. It's impossible that 2 months is the limit. If that's the case, even if it's the church of an Orthodox deity, it won't be able to afford such losses. I expect a normal keeper to live for several years, or even more than 10 years. However, it's easy to mutate midway and lose control. Sigh, they likely already know of the outcome when they chose to become keepers. Klein felt poignant as he made Signor project himself onto the gold coin inside the iron cigar case. Following that, he used traveling to head out to sea. After selecting food for creeping hunger, he returned to his master bedroom's bathroom in 160 Buckland Street. June 5th, Sunday. Inside the Hall family castle, Audrey was sitting in front of a study desk as she admired the sight of the mystical item she had just acquired. Its outer appearance was that of a black fishnet glove that reached the elbow. It appeared to be a product of the royal family that came with a sense of magnificence and elegance. This was the item the artisan had made after some time, using the mentor of confusion beyond her characteristic she had obtained from the world Gehrman Sparrow. Audrey had previously asked her father, Earl Hall, and obtained the answer. You can buy it and use it for yourself. Having such filial thoughts is already good enough. Hence, she specially instructed Mr. Hangman to get the artisan to make it into an item that could be carried around by a lady. This also made her suspect if her father had better mystical items, or if the Church of the Goddess provided him rather high-level protection. Based on the Hangman's description, this fishnet glove gave the wearer several beyonder powers. One of them was the enhancement of one's dignity and body, making surrounding beings lower their own standing to submit themselves without realizing it. Another was distort, the ability to distort a target's words, actions, and intent. It allowed one to formulate a certain order that provided them with an advantage. The third was bribe, which bribed them via a symbolic gesture. It allowed the target to feel a great sense of fondness, making it difficult to have any thoughts of animosity or even wish to fight the wearer. If the conditions were suitable, the person who received the bribe had an extremely small chance of attacking their companions. Audrey heard from Mr. World that this was one type of bribe beyond her powers that was known as bribe charm. The last was to produce a chaos effect on a target or surrounding area, making it difficult for attacks to land on the wearer and making the enemy easily choose to make the wrong judgment. Audrey was very satisfied with these effects. However, what vexed her was that the artisan's level was lacking. The Sequence 5 mystical item he created had relatively serious negative side effects. First, it would make the wearer's psyche slowly grow dark, making them often wish to take shortcuts, use schemes, or dishonorable methods to complete matters. Second, the wearer would enter a state of chaos after wearing it for more than 3 minutes. Audrey had tried it previously, and she had made a mistake without realizing it when she was bathing. The normal procedure was to let her maidservant fill the bathtub with water and adjust the temperature before she took off her clothes, enter the bathtub, and then finish washing up. However, Audrey had first entered the bathtub, filled it with cold water, and waited until her clothes were wet before she remembered to take them off. The only thing she was thankful about was that she had eventually controlled herself and hadn't called her lady's maid in to witness such an embarrassing matter. This makes me feel like a curly-haired baboon, Audrey thought in embarrassment and anger. She found the first negative effect acceptable because she was a psychiatrist. She could often check on herself and eliminate her dark thoughts. Furthermore, she had Susie to provide her with help as an onlooker. However, the second negative effect was completely unacceptable. The second negative effect is just too problematic. All I can do is bring it with me. I'll wear it at critical moments. Right, I still have lie. It will amplify my emotions, so combined with the glove, it will only worsen the darkness in my heart. The current me might not be able to withstand it. Audrey's green eyes darted around as she tried thinking of a solution. At this moment, she heard knocking at the door. Her maidservant, Annie, said from the outside, "Miss Audrey, the Lord wishes to talk to you about something." Audrey left the black fishnet glove on the door as she stood up and came to the door to open it. Earl Hall, who didn't wear a coat at home except for a shirt and matching vest, touched his beautiful beard and said with a chuckle, "Are you not ready? We'll be returning to Backland in a while. Tomorrow night will be your 18th birthday party." As he spoke, Earl Hall looked at Annie and company, indicating that they should retreat. "Sigh, it's the annual socializing season again." Audrey nodded, feigning her maturity. Earl Hall glanced at his daughter and asked with a laugh, "Have you thought of how you can make use of that item yet?" Audrey pursed her lips into a smile. "Of course. I plan on folding it up and putting it into a bag. Susie will carry it. This way, as she didn't wear it or use it, Susie wouldn't find herself in any situations of chaos and confusion, and its dark psychological problems could be treated by Audrey with placate. More importantly, without lie's amplification, Susie, who was also a psychiatrist, could also check on herself inwardly and regulate her mental state from time to time. Earl Hall was taken aback as he praised with a surprised smile. "That's a smart solution." Audrey felt smug, but she said in a reserved manner, "I plan on calling it the Hand of Horror. Dear Earl, thank you for the birthday present. In a few more days, I can concoct the potion and attempt an advancement." Audrey added inwardly in joy. Sunday night, 160 Buckland Street. Klein stood on his balcony as he peeped at the street through the gap in the curtains. He couldn't help but feel somewhat nervous. If nothing unexpected happened, he planned on beginning his plan of stealing the Antigonus family's notebook in a while. With Queen Mystic Bernadette's help, he had made his marionette enter a contaminated state. From his frequent visits to the cathedral, for praying, Bible studies, and donations, he had figured out the keeper's duty roster. There was only one thing left that was necessary for the preparations of Klein's theft. That was to secretly replace his target without anyone noticing it. Based on Klein's understanding of the situation, the keepers would head underground at daybreak, and it was during such times when the cathedral remained close. To directly infiltrate inside ran the risk of being discovered by a demigod like the diocese's archbishop. It could be said that there was no chance of success. Therefore, Klein's plan was to infiltrate the cathedral one day earlier and patiently wait for an opportunity. This undoubtedly needed a sufficient disguise, but this didn't stump a faceless. After observing for some time, Klein discovered that the church held a major mass on Sunday night. This was because Sunday and the night were symbols for the goddess, and after the mass ended, the servants would be busy clearing the trash and throwing them outside. Klein's plan was to seize this opportunity to knock a servant unconscious and enter the cathedral while disguised as the servant before sleeping in the servants' quarters. For this, he had even purchased a dosage that was able to let a person fall into a deep sleep for 10 hours without causing any physical harm. He bought it from Emlyn for £5. Phew. After a few minutes, Klein slowly exhaled as he drew the curtains. He walked back to his bedroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's chair, he thought in silence for a minute before conjuring a pen and paper. He wrote the divination statement. This theft of the Antigonus family's notebook will be dangerous. After putting down the dark red fountain pen, Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist. Using his left hand to hold the chain, he let the topaz hang down over the paper in close proximity with it. He entered cogitation, closed his eyes, and silently chanted the divination statement. After repeating it 7 times, he slowly opened his eyes and saw the spirit pendulum spinning clockwise with an ordinary amplitude and frequency. There's danger, but it's within an acceptable range. Klein quickly made an interpretation. In fact, He was a little worried if his divination was being interfered with, just like how the Mother Tree of Desire had done so. However, he had no way of verifying it, much less falsify the possibility. Therefore, when the divination outcome, plans, and preparations satisfied the required conditions, Klein had made up his mind. He looked at the hanging topaz that slowly came to a halt. In Chinese, he said in a heavy voice, "A strong bow is poised to strike." Before he finished his sentence, Klein let his spirituality envelop himself as he simulated the feeling of falling, and he returned to the real world. This time, he planned on only bringing 3 items with him: Creeping Hunger, Seigneur's gold coin, and Azek's copper whistle. The characteristic they had in common was that they could be stored inside an iron cigar case. He could use Paper Angel and a wall of spirituality to provide a double layer of screening. As for the other items, there was a high chance that they couldn't pass through Cheney's gate, as they could easily trigger an anomaly at the core seal. Therefore, Klein had left the rest of his items, as well as his money, above the gray fog, prepared to immediately flee if anything went wrong. It's just that the 3% coin company shares worth £12,800 is tied to Dwayne Dantes' identity. Klein quickly reined in his thoughts, picked up a mirror, and placed it on the pillow. Following that, he drew the mysterious symbol used for summoning erodes. Chapter 830, Infiltration. Chapter 830. Infiltration. The mirror on Klein's pillow glowed with an aqueous luster as silver points of light gathered to form Loanese words. Exalted Great Master, your loyal and humble servant, Erodes, is constantly at your service. Klein stood beside the bed and looked at the mirror before calmly asking, "Where is the Antigonus family's notebook located behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate?" He wanted to confirm the location so that he could directly head for his target and complete his plan in the shortest time possible. Through this, he could avoid all kinds of accidents. Silver text distorted and changed on the mirror's surface, forming a new line of text. It's a grade 1 sealed artifact. It will be on the right in basement 2. I can't see anything more specific. Klein tersely acknowledged as he said, "It's your turn to ask." Erodes immediately dispersed the silver words and presented a new question. "What other instructions do you have?" If this were any other time, Klein definitely would have secretly sked, but his high-strung mind made him nod. "Just watch over my illusion like before to deal with any accidents." "All right, Master." Erodes didn't hesitate to give an answer as it hurriedly added, "I will hold back my instincts. I swear to you, the great ruler above the spirit world." Klein nodded gently, took 2 steps forward, and made the mirror look like Dwayne Dantes. The image became clearer and bigger until it looked real. After some slight adjustments, Klein made it lie in bed as though it was already sleeping. At this moment, he saw Dwayne Dantes turn his head over and smile at him with a toady look. At the same time, he reached out his hands and pulled the blanket towards his head. Without a word, Klein transformed into the cold and crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, as Creeping Hunger on his left hand turned transparent. His body rapidly phased away as he traveled to the other end of Phelps Street where St. Samuel Cathedral was. Following that, he walked to the square filled with pigeons in the day, and he hid himself in a corner under the guise of the shadows. A short while later, a batch of believers who had attended Mass came out of the cathedral. Before long, servants began leaving the cathedral with all sorts of miscellaneous items, walking to the trash bins in an alley. A number of people were dealing with the feces that was found at the spot where the carriages parked at. At this moment, a servant's body suddenly trembled before he bowed his head. He seriously began cleaning the area, and he even proactively walked towards the square as though he wanted to clean the trash there. He slowly opened up a distance from the others until he came to a shadowy area. When the other servants stopped placing their attention on him, a hand suddenly outlined itself and reached out of the void, grabbing him by the shoulder and causing his body to phase away into nothingness. Klein had directly traveled to a cheap 2-bedroom condominium in East Borough. He had teleported over a few days ago with another identity to rent it. A traveler's ability is really convenient. The only problem is that I need to have a pirate sacrifice his life every time. Klein lampooned to relieve his anxiety as he made the servant lie in bed. Then, he took out a long metal vial and threw it at him. The servant caught it and pulled out the stopper before gulping down the soporific medicine in it. In a few seconds, he fell into a deep slumber as Seigneur surfaced to the side. Klein observed the servant on the bed as his body suddenly softened like he had transformed into a slime monster. However, he didn't collapse into a pool. After some swaying, he instantly shortened his height by 15 centimeters as his skin darkened in color. His facial features moved, and soon, he had transformed into the servant. And at this moment, Seigneur had already taken off the servant's clothes. Without wasting any time, Klein quickly changed into those clothes and moved the items from the iron cigar case over. Picking up the broom and surveying the area before confirming that there weren't any problems, He made Senior return to the gold coin before Klein lowered his left arm and spread his fingers. He watched as creeping hunger produced an indescribable transparency effect. After teleporting back to the shadowy corner, Klein bent his back and began cleaning the area seriously. Step by step, he approached the busy servants but maintained a distance from them to prevent anyone from chatting with him, which would increase his chances of being exposed. After about 30 minutes, the servants gathered together and entered St. Samuel Cathedral and turned into a side door. At a distance away from the priests, a servant stretched his arms and said, "How tiring." Klein pretended to look uninterested in the conversation due to his fatigue as he tersely nodded without participating in the conversation. Soon, they returned to the servants' quarters. It comprised of 2 rather big rooms, with many bunk beds inside. Beside each bed was a wardrobe and chest. Klein was immediately at a loss. He didn't know whether to head left or right. Thankfully, he was a seer. He could solely rely on his spiritual intuition on matters that didn't involve beyonders or mysterious domains. Furthermore, he was still holding onto a broom. Hence, he pretended to have his hand slip and secretly did a dowsing rod seeking. He received a revelation that he should head right. When he entered the room on the right, Klein deliberately slowed down a little, observing the actions of the other servants. Then, he mimicked them by placing the broom in the region behind the door. Then, he went outside to the common bathroom to wash his face, rinse his mouth, and wash his feet. After he completed all of this in a slow manner, the bed that belonged to him revealed itself, the bed that wasn't occupied. Lying in bed, Klein finally felt relieved as he secretly sighed in relief. The servants were all exhausted, and before long, they fell asleep, producing a symphony of snores. Klein maintained his consciousness and very slowly removed creeping hunger. Folding it up into a tiny shape, he stuffed it inside the iron cigar case, putting it together with Azek's copper whistle and Senor's gold coin. Seconds turned to minutes as he found it impossible to sleep due to anxiety. All he could do was rely on cogitation to force himself to sleep for a few hours. He woke up at a specific time and released Senor. This marionette's cold aura rapidly melded with the surroundings as the spirit-body threads collapsed inwardly, gradually turning black without any origins. It can still be controlled. Klein nodded indiscernibly and made the wraith use the stained glass windows high above and the bright stone floor tiles to arrive at the staircase that led to the keepers above. He believed that if Senor hadn't been contaminated ahead of time, making Cheney's Gate's core seal think of it as one of its own, it definitely would have reacted and cleansed it. How could a wraith have the ability to move freely in an Orthodox Church's cathedral? And due to the tacit approval from the core seal and the disruption from the paper angel, the demigod-level archbishop that lived somewhere in the cathedral wasn't alerted. Under Klein's control, and using the sensations from the contamination, the invisible Senor slowly walked to the second floor before turning left and finding the residence of the keepers. It's Monday tomorrow. This week's Monday shift is likely done by the keeper I met first. Klein had long figured out the roster, so he made the dark red-coated wraith stealthily pass through the wooden door and float into different rooms to identify the target. As there were only a few people inside, he quickly found the pale elder with loose facial skin, sparse hair, and a big nose. Senor immediately took out a sedative vial and placed it to the side. Then, before the keeper sensed anything, it possessed him. The keeper, who was in deep sleep, lost control over his body before he could even wake up to resist. All he could do was open his grayish-blue eyes and watch himself slowly pick up the vial and pull off the stopper. Then, he downed the liquid inside. His body convulsed abnormally as his organs seemed to be engaged in a violent struggle. After a full minute, he slowly went limp and closed his eyes again, entering a dreamless sleep. After doing all of this, Senor left the body of the keeper and used all kinds of mirror surfaces to leap back to the servants' quarters before entering Klein's body. Klein immediately emitted a cold, dead, and distant aura. Even showing an expression appeared to be difficult. He slowly got out of bed and silently left the servants' quarters. In the shadows and murals that weren't illuminated by the moonlight, he walked to the second floor and entered the target's room. Standing by the bedside, Klein, whilst in the appearance of a servant, slowly grew taller as his hair turned gray and sparse, while his nose enlarged significantly. In just a few seconds, he looked identical to the keeper who just drank the sedative. Even his aura was identical. Changing into the black clergyman's coat that was placed to the side, Klein moved the keeper's and servants' clothes underneath the bed and laid down as he kept note of the time. At 5:30, he woke up ahead of time, finishing the white bread he had prepared the night before and drank a cup of water. He then looked quietly out the window. Just as day broke, Klein maintained his deadpan state and walked out the door. He went to the first floor, and following the path he had previously verified, he took a left turn. After walking for a moment, he wasn't surprised to see a priest. This was his experience as a former Nighthawk. Therefore, Klein wasn't too worried that he couldn't find the path. The priest stood outside a secret door that led underground. As he raised his right hand, he tapped 4 times clockwise on his chest and said, "May the goddess bless you." "Praise the lady," Klein replied hoarsely and similarly drew a crimson moon. He didn't stay any longer and walked past the priest. Under the lamps that lined the walls, he walked down the staircase and arrived at the crossroads. Based on his understanding of his environment, Klein believed that turning right would leave the cathedral, and it would likely lead to the disguised security company or other organization belonging to the Nighthawks. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to turn left. At that moment, he saw a man wearing a red glove walk over. The casually dressed man had black hair and green eyes with handsome looks. He was none other than Leonard Mitchell. Chapter 831, Just Inches Away. Chapter 831, Just inches away. Upon seeing Leonard, Klein's back muscles instantly stiffened. His nerves tensed up like a fully drawn bow that could snap at any moment. He remembered very clearly that Leonard had a marauder pathway angel, Pallas Zoroast, parasitizing him. He could sense the uniqueness about his body and, from that, see through his disguise. If that grandpa were to inform Leonard of the problem with the keeper in front of him, that would be troublesome. "I'll just have to hope that my dear poet is afraid that his secret will be exposed and that he would feign ignorance." Back in Tingen, although he often said that everyone has their secrets and that there's no need to worry about it, that's all regarding matters pertaining to the church. Who knows if he suddenly feels the need to uphold justice and decides to be loyal and take the risk to expose me. After all, this matter is very similar with Ensanguils. At that moment, Klein's forehead nearly broke out into a sweat. To be frank, he never expected to encounter Leonard while heading to Cheney's Gate because he was a red glove and not an ordinary Nighthawk. There was no need for him to be on duty, so there wasn't a need for him to be here at that moment in time. However, Klein immediately thought of a crucial point. The one who could detect his uniqueness was Pallas Zoroast and not Leonard Mitchell. The former's attitude was more important. The grandpa knows that I know of his existence. Once he exposes my disguise and pushes me into a corner, he has to be prepared to be exposed by me. When the time comes, we will definitely be trading blows with each other, benefiting no one. And for an angel from the marauder pathway who doesn't believe in the goddess, there's no need for that. If I were him, I would pretend that nothing had happened. I wouldn't even remind Leonard Mitchell, leaving my safety to be decided by my host. As he quickly cleared his train of thought, Klein composed himself and walked over towards the red-gloved Leonard Mitchell. Leonard indifferently looked at the keeper with grizzled sparse hair. He couldn't help but raise his right hand to cover his mouth and yawn. He has nothing better to do because he doesn't sleep at night, so he'd gone to the duty room to play cards with the person on duty? What a perfect sleepless. Klein roughly understood the reason for the red-glove poet appearing. He recalled the reactions of the keepers when they met Nighthawks in Tingen. He silently nodded his head at Leonard and drew a moon with his right index and middle finger, tapping his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner. Leonard used the same action in response as he passed by the keeper without noticing anything. Klein silently exhaled as he maintained his usual pace and gait until he reached his destination. The iron-black double door was heavy and cold. Engraved on it were 7 sacred emblems appearing as though nothing could stir it. Klein turned his body to the side and took 2 steps to the side. He knocked on the keeper's door, and under the gaze of the Nighthawk on duty, he opened Cheney's Gate. The darkness deep inside immediately surged out. Even though there were silver candles with engraved patterns burning silently inside, they were unable to disperse such a feeling, and the ghostly blue flame accentuated the deathly silence. Meanwhile, Klein felt that something invisible in the darkness was grazing past his skin and entering deep into his body. It passed through the boundary of reality and illusions, connecting to Wraith Seigneur. Suddenly, without even activating his spirit vision, he saw black threads covering the area behind Cheney's Gate. They were gently swaying, either bundled or extended out as though a lady was spreading out her hair or some monster was flailing its tentacles. Klein walked forward with a deadpan expression. After entering the sealed land, he turned around and closed Cheney's Gate. At that moment, all the sounds outside were completely cut off. The silence inside was like a kingdom of the dead. It made him imagine and feel fear. Klein was reminded of himself occasionally watching the darkness in bed with his eyes open. He didn't dare to sleep, even though he hadn't heard any ghost stories. It's no wonder the goddess has the title of Empress of Horror. Klein cast his gaze to the side and raised the lantern in the corner, lighting it with great familiarity. Dim yellow light immediately poured out before being tainted with a ghostly blue. Klein, who was wearing a black clergyman's robe, wasn't in a rush to head for basement 2 to search for the Antigonus family's notebook. Instead, he stayed behind the gate and patiently waited. He was doing so in the event that the Nighthawks were in urgent need of something, but could only wait until daybreak since they were unable to retrieve them at night. Based on his experience, keepers were most easily disturbed in the first 5 minutes of them entering Cheney's Gate. As long as he survived that period, and as long as there weren't any additional accidents, the normal retrieval process of materials would happen after 8. That was the standard working hours of the Nighthawks and civilian staff. In other words, once Klein lasted the first 5 minutes, he wouldn't be disturbed by the Nighthawks for the next 2 hours. Of course, he didn't have that much time for his operation. The Church of Evernight opened at 8, and the servants would wake up an hour or an hour and a half ahead of time to get down to work. After 6:30, the other servants could realize that one of them was missing. Time ticked by as Klein's heartbeat couldn't help but speed up. He found the 5 minutes excruciating. Finally, his countdown ended as he cast his gaze towards the stone stairs in the darkness. It was the passage that led to the second floor. At that moment in time, there was no one in here that could restrict him. At this stage, Klein believed that he had overcome 70% of the difficulties. The remaining 30% consisted of how he would leave after obtaining the notebook. Of course, there was always a certain chance for all kinds of accidents to happen. Klein didn't wish to be careless as he raised a lantern and walked to the stone staircase. To other Beyonders, the first level behind Cheney's gate was actually a lot more attractive than the sealed artifacts. There were all kinds of Beyonder ingredients, potion formulas, and secret knowledge here. There were even captured heretics that had been apprehended, as well as unaffiliated Beyonders. Be it trying to be rich, to advance, or to rescue their companions, an infiltrator just needed to search around this level. However, Klein needed to head deeper inside where the dangerous items were sealed. Passing through a few tightly locked stone chambers, he clearly sensed people inside. However, they weren't making a fuss or roaring, nor were they pleading for mercy or shouting for help. They were silently lying there or sitting there. Their auras had already turned cold. The lantern's light flickered as it illuminated the staircase that led down. Klein focused again and steadily walked deeper underground. He didn't run, afraid that he would trigger a negative reaction from the core seal. As it became darker, the ghostly blue flames from the elegant candle stands on the two ends had weakened. They appeared as though they were about to be extinguished at any moment. And at that moment, the pure darkness might bring about unimaginable horrific changes. Klein repressed his instinctive fear as he finally walked down the stairs and came to basement 2. With a wraith's night vision, Klein discovered that there were strange walls made of steel, bricks, mud, and silver. They were sectioned off into different regions, with certain spots open and other rooms tightly shut. All of them had a sealed artifact. With the lantern in hand, he turned left as the scene before Klein's eyes lit up. He saw a burning flame and a glowing red and black anthracite and charcoal. The region was in a half-open state. Inside was a bathtub-like object made of steel. The area beneath it was dug open and was stuffed with anthracite, charcoal, and other flammable objects. They kept burning, making the steel bathtub produce bubbling sounds, letting the steam emanate out, condensing on the ceiling and dripping down like rain. An artifact that needs to be soaked in hot water for the seal. And the keepers need to periodically add anthracite and charcoal to prevent the fire from extinguishing. If there's a sealed artifact that can constantly emit high temperatures, they can be placed together, making the seal easy. Klein glanced at the steel bathtub. Hoping that no accident spoiled his plans, he approached it and used a tool to add some anthracite into the fire pit. When he looked up, he noticed something through the corner of his eye. Immersed under the hot water in the bathtub was a silver metallic object. Together, they seemed to form a heavy full-body armor. And a part of it had unremovable dark red blood stains and splattered red spots. 1-42. An ancient god's blood. So now it's permanently stored in the Backlund Diocese. Klein had seen this sealed artifact before as the corresponding information surfaced in his mind. Just as he was about to retract his gaze, he saw the Spartan silver helmet. The helmet's visor had been pulled down, making its interior appear dark. At that instant, Klein felt that a gaze was penetrating it and casting itself on him. He trembled as he hurriedly took 2 steps back, his heartbeat racing erratically. Not daring to observe it any further, Klein composed himself and cast his gaze forward as he steadily walked forward and left the area. After passing through a few sealed areas, his spiritual perception was triggered. He felt that something on the right was summoning him. Furthermore, it was producing the beating sounds of an expanding and contracting heart. Indeed, the Antigonus family's notebook has been waiting for me all this time. Klein silently confirmed his earlier theory, and following the illusory summoning, he changed direction and approached it. In just 2 or 3 minutes, he saw a room with an ajar stone door. It was dark inside without any source of light. With the lantern's illumination, an empty bookshelf formed from white bone appeared in Klein's eyes. On it was an ancient notebook in a black hardcover. It was the Antigonus family's notebook. Hornacius, Phlegria, Hornacius, Phlegria. Illusory voices drilled into Klein's ears as he confirmed his target. Things happened very smoothly, but Klein didn't dare to be careless or rash. He carefully entered the room as he slowly approached, afraid that the mechanism that sealed the Antigonus family's notebook would inflict harm to him. Hence, when he closed in, a hand in a dark red sleeve suddenly reached out from his abdomen. It was Wraith Seigneur's hand. One of the principles of a marionettist: use as a marionette as much as possible in situations that a marionette could be used. If anything were to happen, the marionette would bear the brunt. At this moment, there was a slam from the direction of the door as though someone had walked in. Klein's pupils dilated as he lunged for the bone shelf without any thought, making the marionette's hand by his abdomen grab the Antigonus family's notebook. At the same time, his right hand reached into his clothes and opened the iron cigar case and wore creeping hunger. He was attempting to teleport directly outside before the core seal reacted. During this process, a scene of the door naturally appeared in his mind. A figure wearing a hooded classical robe was standing there. The figure had a pretty face that wore a lifeless expression. The deep black eyes lacked any spirituality. That high-ranking member of the church that directly wiped Mr. A out of existence and ended the great smog of Backlund? Why would she be hiding underground? That's not logical. Just as a sense of horror emerged in Klein's heart, he instinctively lowered his head to look at his body. His body was rapidly being wiped away like an eraser erasing a pencil drawing. Before he could touch the Antigonus family's notebook, he had completely vanished. Chapter 832, Town. Chapter 832, Town. Before his brain short-circuited, Klein only had time for two thoughts. How powerful. There's no way to resist. I wonder if I can be revived from such a death. As his thoughts resonated, Klein's vision turned pitch black. He lost all his senses as he entered a dreamless slumber. After an unknown period of time, the silent darkness suddenly stirred. He vaguely felt a sense of grogginess as he felt a cold wind blow at him. As his thoughts thawed bit by bit, Klein slowly opened his eyes and saw fog everywhere above him. The crimson moon was hidden in it, occasionally showing itself. Did I just resurrect again? Or have I entered the underworld? Even if it's the latter, that's not too problematic. I might even be able to get the skeleton messenger to contact Mr. Azik. However, I'll have to become an undead creature or spirit world creature. Klein's mind was still a little heavy, as though someone had injected glue into his brain, preventing him from expanding on his thoughts. Slowly, he sensed his body and heard his heart beating. His mind quickly turned lucid as he believed that the possibility of him resurrecting was higher. Perhaps he had been thrown out into the wilderness. Klein's joints produced a crack as he jumped to his feet. Without checking his physical condition, he first observed his surroundings and confirmed the type of environment he was in. The first thing he saw was a fog that permeated the area and the dark and stillness of the night. And close by was a tiny town. The most striking building in the town was an extremely ancient spired cathedral. It was completely black in color. There wasn't a bell tower, and at the top of it were pitch-black ravens spiraling around it. Around the cathedral were many buildings. They were normal two-story residences and simple wooden huts. There were bread shops with hanging signboards and grayish-white mills using water wheels for power. However, there wasn't a single pedestrian. They seemed to be asleep in the quietness of the night. As a seer, Klein instantly found the town very familiar, as though he had seen it somewhere in the past. After a brief recall, he remembered what it represented. This was the source of danger of the nighttime in the ruins of the Battle of Gods. After entering the easternmost region of the Sonia Sea, if one didn't sleep and enter a dream world when night fell, it would be discovered that the person would have gone missing once it was daytime. Klein had once been jolted awake in a dream with the Saint of Darkness, and he saw in the distance a place which was enshrouded in the tranquility of the night. There was a mysterious and bizarre foggy town. He even suspected that all the living beings that vanished at night in the ruins had entered the town. Now he was there himself. He was less than 100 meters from the foggy town. It's related to the night. The target vanishes like it was erased. The power of that high-ranking member of the church doesn't directly kill her enemies, and she instead sends them here? Do the living beings that vanish at night in the ruins also encounter such situations? But it's said that there's no way to obtain their whereabouts via divination. The only interpretation they can conclude is that they might still be alive. Of course, it's also possible that I can be resurrected, thus appearing here. Amidst his thoughts, Klein retracted his gaze and used his ability as a clown to observe his physical condition. He had already changed back into Klein Moretti, but he was still wearing the keeper's black clergyman robe. He didn't have any signs of an injury on him. Filled with experience, Klein quickly calmed down. His right hand reached into his pocket and opened the iron cigar case. He took out the folded human skin glove and wore it on his left hand. After confirming that creeping hunger could still be used, Klein lifted Azik's copper whistle and blew into it. However, the skeleton messenger didn't appear in the spirit vision he quickly activated. Klein wasn't too surprised with such an outcome. Instead, he found it normal. After all, the people who had vanished on the eastern front of the Sonia Sea had yet to be found. After all, Over the years, there was likely no lack of beyonders here who could summon messengers, such as the members of the numinous episcopate. This place is directly isolated from the spirit world. From the looks of it, traveling can't be used. As expected of a high-ranking member the church sent to deal with the great smog of Backland. She sends her targets here as a form of eternal exile or imprisonment. It's impossible to use ordinary or simple means to contact the outside world. To escape from this place, even saints will find it difficult. Klein didn't lose himself to anxiety, as he still felt confident. He placed Isaac's copper whistle back into the iron cigar case and prepared to take 4 steps counterclockwise. He wanted to head above the gray fog to escape the imprisonment of the fog town. Blessings stem from the immortal Lord of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the sky, Lord of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the exalted arch of heaven and earth. Blessings stem from the celestial worthy of heaven and earth. With 1 sentence per step, Klein rapidly completed the ritual. However, he didn't hear the familiar, frenzied ravings. Nor did he see the endless emanating grayish-white fog. Klein's pupils constricted as he fell into a momentarily daze. This place was isolated from the mysterious space above the gray fog. This made his greatest trump card unusable. Klein had relied on the area above the gray fog to escape danger many times in the past. But this time, this solution was ineffective. This was the first time he was encountering such a situation. Man, it feels as though my cheat has been blocked. Klein lampooned to relax his tense emotions. Based on his knowledge of mysticism, he suspected that the foggy town was likely related to a true deity because this was the only explanation as to why he couldn't head above the gray fog. This place has close ties to the night. I was sent here after encountering a high-ranking member. Could it be a prison that the goddess created herself? But she is the mother of concealment. Perhaps she can directly make people or items enter a concealed state, making people in the real world never able to find them again. Klein seriously contemplated and decisively decided to explore the foggy town. This was because the method to leave this place was most likely to be there. At this point, he was no longer worried about not being able to convene the tarot club. Of course, there was no need for him to worry about it for now. He had canceled the coming tarot gathering ahead of time because the operation of stealing the Antigonus family's notebook was fraught with danger and variables. Klein suspected that he might end up dead and be unable to resurrect in time. Therefore, he used a reasonable excuse to get everyone to make additional preparations for a week. After making up his mind, Klein immediately got the wraith inside him to float beside him. The marionette's condition was already in a terrible state. The dead and cold aura was something substantial, making his control of the spirit-body threads somewhat rough. Thankfully, I can still use him for a few more days. Also, Mr. A was erased by that high-ranking church member. He might be living nearby. I have to be careful about this person who's equivalent to a lunatic. Klein transformed into Gehrman Sparrow as he made Senior walk ahead and enter the foggy town. Following the marionettist principle he had concluded, he stood in the back with a distance of at least 110 meters between them. Over time, his digestion had increased his control over his marionette to 120 meters. There was also a reduction in the time needed to gain initial control of spirit body threads and completely change someone into a marionette. Faced with an enemy whose spirit body was equally strong, the former took 16 seconds, and the latter took 4 minutes. In the silent foggy world, Senor, in his dark red coat and old triangular hat, didn't take long to enter the bizarre and mysterious town. Many of the building doors were still open as though they were welcoming guests from afar. With his marionette's vision, Klein saw that there was a half-chewed loaf of white bread on the table. There were wine glasses for red wine and messy silver cutlery. It looked like someone had been enjoying dinner, but there was no one present. The owners of these different houses seemed to have suddenly vanished into thin air. Vanished. This term suddenly surfaced in Klein's mind as he hurriedly made Senior cast his gaze towards the grayish-white mill. Inside the mill, the wind-powered mill was rotating silently, but other than the floor that was scattered with flour, no flour came out again. This scene feels familiar. I seem to have heard of it before. Klein frowned bit by bit. As he relied on his marionette, he continued surveying his environment while carefully recalling the similar situation. Just as he was considering using dream divination to question his spirituality, he found the corresponding answer. A similar scene had appeared in the ancient ruins that appeared at the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Based on the literature, the buildings there had every arrangement and decoration well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates. In some rooms, there were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water. The discoverer mentioned that when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. There's some relation between this foggy town and the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range? No way. After trying to avoid it, I ended up coming to it. Klein's facial features twitched involuntarily. For a moment, he couldn't believe what was on his mind. Of course, the scene was just similar and wasn't enough to make him come up with such a conclusion. After taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling, Klein forced himself to calm down. He controlled Wraith Senior and made him venture deeper into the foggy town. At that moment, he heard light footsteps. Klein's heart tensed up as he hurriedly hid inside the mill and made his marionette stop. In just a few seconds, Wraith Senior saw a woman walk out from a nearby alley. She wore a pure white robe, and her hair was pulled back, revealing her long, white neck. She looked extremely beautiful. Chapter 833, Things to Take Note of. Chapter 833, Things to Take Note of. Inside the dark, foggy town, the woman who walked out of the alley seemed to be out of place with her surroundings. She was pure, stately, and untainted. She was so gorgeous that it lit up the eyes of anyone whose gaze landed on her. As for her pure, simple robe and her loosely pulled back hair, they added to her bearing and languidness. That gorgeous woman also noticed Senior. Her expression froze for a moment before she smiled. Using a sweet voice, she said, "Senior, when did you become a marionette? If not for the powers of Evernight contaminating you this badly, I wouldn't have recognized you." Although she looked like she was talking to Senior, she was actually conversing with the controller through the marionette. "Sigh, this kind of dead and cold aura can't be hidden at all. I can't fool beyonders of higher sequences. I was still hoping that I could hide somewhere inconspicuous and use Admiral of Blood Senior to make contact with her, so as to maximize my own safety. This place screens away the power of the gray fog, so if I were to die, I likely won't be able to resurrect." Klein hid inside the grayish-white mill and made his marionette speak hoarsely. "If you could leave, you'd easily find out that I've been serving my master more than a month ago." He used Admiral of Blood's tone and experiences to answer as though he was still alive. This was the acting principle of a marionettist, to let each marionette have their unique identity and setting. Meanwhile, Klein also buried a keyword, leave, in preparation to broach the topic of leaving. In this bizarre and mysterious town, he didn't have thoughts of instantly killing any demoness that he saw. Ignoring the question of there being any good demonesses and whether he was equipped with the strength to do so, just the fact that they were trapped in here had made it imperative that he communicated with her for intelligence to seek a way to get out. This was enough to make him choose peaceful coexistence for the time being. The woman in a simple white robe chuckled and said, not forgetting to constantly act. "From the looks of it, you will quickly digest the marionettist potion. A member of the secret order? She's very familiar with the seer pathway." The Demonist sect was a secret organization that was active in the Fourth Epoch. Even if they didn't have close ties with the Zeradol or Antigonus families, they should be quite familiar with each other. It's very normal to understand the seer pathway. Of course, the premise to that is that this lady is a Demoness. Klein's heart stirred as he deliberately asked, "Aren't there other possibilities?" He tried to sound her out to see if other organizations might wield control over the seer pathway. The beautiful and pure lady walked forward and leaned towards Admiral of Blood Senior as she said with a smile, "It doesn't matter which organization you belong to. We have been exiled here, and it's practically eternal imprisonment. The past no longer matters. What matters is the future, whether we can cooperate to find a way of leaving." I failed to sound her out. Klein made the wraith reply, "That's exactly what I was thinking. How may I address you?" As the lady approached Senior, Klein caught a whiff of a refreshing fragrance with his marionette's sense of smell. Due to her words, he suddenly had a baffling thought to help each other in such a perilous situation while abandoning all morals, to help warm up each other's souls with their bodies. "She's like a Demoness. Her voice sounds more familiar the more I listen to her. But why can't I put my thumb on it? What a pity, there's no way to use dream divination in such a situation. She will be able to seize the opportunity while I'm unconscious, and it's hard to predict what will happen." Klein frowned slightly. This beautiful woman with a tinge of languidness raised her hand to stroke her hair, accentuating her petite ear. "Panatia, what about you?" Klein had originally planned on randomly choosing a disguise, such as the Aurora Order's Mr. X or Death Announcer's second mate, Curtius. After all, he could use creeping hunger to simulate their powers, but he ultimately gave up the disguise and directly said, "Gehrman Sparrow." He didn't know when this suspected Demoness had entered the foggy town, so he was unable to eliminate the possibility that she knew about Admiral of Blood's disappearance. Panatia nodded and asked, "How did you get in?" Klein didn't keep the truth from her as he said with the marionette's mouth, "I encountered an unknown lady. She wore a hood, and her eyes were like the night, but it lacked any spirituality." Panatia fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "So it's her." Heh. She didn't continue in detail as she said with a smile, "What did you actually do? You actually managed to get the Church of Evernight to send her to deal with you?" Panatia had changed the pronoun she used. "Her? That lady is an angel? An ascetic from the church?" Panatia seems to know much about her. Klein's thoughts whirred as he said vaguely, I infiltrated St. Samuel Cathedral and attempted to steal a sealed artifact, but in the end, he didn't go into the details because he had no idea how he encountered the lady. Klein believed that as an angel, it was impossible for the lady to keep living behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Chinese gate. There was nothing in there that required an important figure like her to keep watch on the entire time. Is that so? So she is indeed in the basement of Samuel Cathedral. Panatia seemed to confirm something. In secret organizations, the word saint is not used when talking about St. Samuel Cathedral. I should take note of this detail in the future. Klein ruminated over her choice of words. Panatia didn't continue on the topic as she said with a smile, All right, let's not bother with the past. Just as I said, what's important is the future and how we can escape. Klein used this opportunity to make Senior ask, What do you know about this place? Panatia glanced at the spired cathedral in the middle of the town and said, This place isn't the real or spirit world, nor is it the astral world. It's in some kind of secret, hidden state. I've explored most of this area, including the area outside the town. I didn't manage to find any clues. All that's left is that cathedral. Perhaps all the secrets are hidden inside. Why don't you explore the cathedral? Klein asked with his marionette's mouth. Panatia yanked her pure white robe. On it were signs of wear and tear. My intuition tells me that there's extreme danger inside. Upon saying that, she switched topics. And now, there's a solution. Your marionette can help us scout. Even if it's lost, it wouldn't deal you any harm. Don't worry. As long as we gain an understanding of the situation inside, I'll find a chance to give you a better marionette. After all, it doesn't look like it can last long. There's nothing unreasonable about that, but I don't trust you. After all, you are most likely a demoness. Klein didn't agree or object to it as he took the opportunity to get Senior to ask, Are there any things to take note of while in here? Panatia pursed her lips and said, Due to various reasons, a sizable number of people end up here, but they have all vanished. All vanished? Klein's heart palpitated as he asked, What happened? Panatia sighed and said, There are things I'm not sure about. Some entered those buildings and ate some of the food inside. Then, they vanished instantly. And this time, the results of divination indicate that they've lost their lives and are undergoing eternal sleep. There will be erasure and vanishing events in this foggy town. Furthermore, they will no longer exist. Klein was horrified before he thought of another matter. He nearly blurted it out. Won't you feel hungry? Afraid that it would result in an anomaly, he forcefully held his tongue and made Senior ask her indirectly, How long have you been in here? As though sighing and laughing, Panatia said, Perhaps it's been half a year. I've witnessed many people cannibalize others for sustenance. Thankfully, I don't need much and can live very long with a bit of food. And on a human's body, there is food that won't damage the body too significantly. As she spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at the crimson moon hanging behind the fog. Another thing to take note of is that once the crimson moon turns clear, there will be changes here. It will become extremely dangerous. I've been severely injured as a result. As she said that, she turned to point at a tear in her pure white robe. Klein subconsciously made Senior cast his gaze over, and he saw that at her collarbone underneath the tear, there was a deep wound that exposed her bone amidst fair, supple skin. At this moment, the skin transformed, producing dense patterns of mystery and colors of darkness and evil. Klein's mind seemed to explode as ravings and cries resounded in it. Meanwhile, his breathing became difficult as his body rapidly weakened. He couldn't help but collapse backward as he broke into a coughing fit. Then, he saw the pure white robe and the two long female legs, Panatia. This lady had already entered the grayish-white mill, and as she watched the struggling German sparrow, she cracked the corners of her lips and revealed blood-colored tendrils in the gaps between her neat, white teeth. She softly said, Got you. Chapter 834, Good luck. Chapter 834, Good luck, got you. Invisible threads emanated over as Panatia said that. They quickly wrapped around German Sparrow as though she was binding him into a cocoon. At this moment, the figure in a black clergyman robe suddenly turned thin, transforming into a paper figurine covered in metal rust. Klein's figure appeared outside the grayish-white mill as he ran frantically towards the depths of the town. He was a person who had seen the eternal blazing sun's true body and lived. He had a certain level of resistance towards a spirit-body impact and the inclination of a loss of control brought about by a mythical creature form. Furthermore, Panatia wasn't a complete mythical creature. Therefore, even without the gray fog's help, Klein was able to recover from the racking headache. As he suppressed his body's mutation, he sensed that he had been inflicted with ailments. While collapsing, he used his violent coughing as a cover for him to use paper figurine substitutes. Paper figurines weren't mystical items, nor did they have any spirituality. Hence, Klein wasn't afraid that it would trigger a reaction from the core seal behind Cheney's gate. Hence, He had brought quite a number with him. As Klein ran forward, he rubbed his right thumb and middle finger and lit up the flour piled inside the mill. Boom! The flour burst into flames as the mill was sent flying. The windmill outside collapsed to the ground as Panatia's figure crumbled bit by bit in the intense blast and scarlet flames as though she was a mirror. Almost at the same moment, her white-robed figure appeared behind Klein. Her loose, pulled-back hair instantly flared up and wildly extended in Klein's direction. Ha! As Klein snapped his fingers to ignite a tree leaf beside him, he controlled Senor to use mirror leap to appear in a window on a two-storied residence beside Panatia. Then, he attempted to make the terrifying woman's eyes reflect Senor's figure to complete the wraith possession. Scarlet flames suddenly leaped up and enveloped Klein's body, making him vanish from where he was as he appeared in a flame tens of meters away. As for Panatia's gem-like eyes, they seemed to hide mirrors that reflected figures wearing an old triangular hat and dark red coat. They overlapped one another and descended into chaos. Klein didn't hesitate to let Senor leave the window, transforming into a werewolf state to charge the demoness. Yes, Klein had already determined that Panatia was a demoness, and she was a demoness at the demigod level. The strands of black hair, as well as the invisible transparent threads, flared up, forming a ludicrous spiderweb that enveloped Senor, whose body was covered with thick, short hair. However, just as they made contact, Admiral of Blood's figure instantly phased away, causing the black hair and illusory demoness threads to pass through it. Without being able to touch him, it was obviously unable to bind him. He had taken his wraith form. Humph. Panatia's expression didn't change at all. All she did was produce a harumph. Suddenly, the thick hair strands and illusory threads that made contact with Senor burst into dark and silent black flames. They used spirituality as fuel, turning the wraith into a torch. Pa! 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 Senor turned back into a werewolf from the burning as his limbs fell to the ground from the flame injuries. With that, a Sequence 5 wraith perished completely. And at this moment, Klein had repeatedly snapped his fingers, jumping into different columns of fire and using his marionette sacrifice to escape deeper into the town. With a few flashes, he had pulled open a gap of hundreds of meters from Panatia. Suddenly, Klein felt his forehead burning hot. His lungs began to heave as he panted loudly and emitted heated air. As he had been hit by the impact of seeing an incomplete mythical creature's form, he had been a little too slow at using paper figurine substitutes. He had failed to swap out his ailment, and he had suffered some of the damage. Klein had originally imagined that he just needed to persist until he escaped Panatia's range of influence. But to his surprise, his condition was worsening faster than he expected. Furthermore, despite having opened up a gap of hundreds of meters, he didn't escape the signs of being infected. Thud! Just as he was about to continue using Flaming Jump, Klein's knees buckled as he collapsed to the ground without successfully snapping his fingers. Immediately, he heard Panatia's pleasant laughter in his ears. Even if you were to escape to the other side of town, there's no way to escape my ailments. You ought to know that back in Backlund, the entirety of East Borough was immersed in the plague fog I created. Apart from the most distant Empress Borough and West Borough, all the other areas were significantly affected as well. She's that Lady Despair who cooperated with Mr. A. She's one of the true murderers behind the great smog of Backlund. Klein felt his mind go adrift as he found himself become very sick while reeling in pain and despair. Although it still wasn't lethal, the irresistible coughs prevented him from using most of his Beyonder powers. Panatia walked over as her beautiful eyes were stained with an indescribable color of bloodthirst. It was like a tramp finally seeing a sizzling steak after starving for days. In her hands were what was left of Senor's torso and 2 broken limbs. This was apparently meant to be her stockpile of food. Your finger snaps sounded good. I believe the taste of those 2 fingers should be pretty good. Panatia looked at Gehrman Sparrow as he coughed in the distance, speaking with the tone of a raving lunatic. Just as she finished her sentence, she raised her hand and stuffed Senor's index finger into her mouth. She bit down on each segment, producing crushing sounds. Klein watched this scene with a blurred vision. In his grogginess, he felt his fingers also suffering such excruciating pain. At this moment, he knew that Lady Despair Panatia was already partially mad because she had eaten too much flesh from other Beyonders. Although with her knowledge of mysticism, she would have definitely waited for the Beyonder characteristics to seep out before partaking in her meal. The deceased had been trapped in here without any food, making them each other's targets. It was inevitable that they slowly lost their minds as they approached insanity. How could she remain fine eating such meat? Just as Klein was reeling in despair and wondering what method he could use to save himself, he saw the crimson moonlight suddenly turn bright. He saw Panatia's face colored with a look of horror. Without hesitation, she turned around and charged into a nearby building and slammed the door. As Klein felt his illness alleviate significantly, he hurriedly looked up into the sky. He saw that the crimson moonlight was already penetrating the fog, appearing clear as it illuminated the town. His heart stirred as he recalled what Panatia had previously said. He immediately struggled and hobbled into another building beside him without forgetting to lock the door. Once the crimson moon turns clear, there will be changes here. It will become extremely dangerous. Chapter 835, The Figures Coming and Going. Chapter 835, The Figures Coming and Going. After rushing into the building and closing the door, Klein realized that the curtains behind the windows were constantly in a drawn state. Only some faint crimson moonlight seeped in, lighting up the room slightly. He didn't bother making any additional observations as he found a wooden chair and sat down. He attempted to enter cogitation to calm his inclinations towards mutating. Since he had witnessed a saint-level Beyonder's incomplete mythical creature form, how could he survive it that easily? This wasn't the mysterious space above the gray fog that came with recovery effects. As Klein was able to withstand mental blows relatively well, he was able to straighten his thoughts out early and prevent himself from losing control, thus allowing him to successfully escape. However, this didn't mean that the problem had been resolved. He sat there, relying on cogitation and his control over his emotions to resist the waves of insane thoughts. During this process, he heard his cheekbones produce crunching sounds. He saw his black hair turn long and thick in an uncontrollable manner as his chest bulged through his clothes, while his skin produced granules in the form of meat tendrils. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally exhaled and relaxed significantly. He had completely recovered from the effects that Panatia's incomplete mythical creature form brought. He even gained some new knowledge. The level she was at had despair at its core, making her good at creating and spreading plagues. The insanity and mutation from witnessing a mythical creature not only produced the symptoms of losing control of one's pathway, but it also comes with the traits of the other party's sequence. Back then, I was nearly baked by the eternal blazing sun, and this time, I nearly became a demoness. Klein looked down at himself, restoring his skin, chest, and hair to normal. If he wasn't a faceless, aside from letting those meat tendrils sink into his body, he would have to rely on external forces to resolve the problem. Without the time to poignantly sigh or analyze the situation, Klein slowly stood up and cast his gaze towards the tightly drawn, dark-colored curtains as he attempted to figure out his current situation. His expression suddenly changed because he heard rowdy murmurs outside the street. At that instant, he felt that, apart from him and Lady Despair Panatia, the uninhabited town suddenly had many residents. They were loitering across the streets and alleys, greeting one another as they discussed whether to only buy bread or be extravagant and buy a pound of beef. The foggy town suddenly seemed to come to life. However, none of the figures entered the buildings that lined the streets. They seemed to keep coming and going across the street, producing voices that one would find difficult to believe to be conversations, as they sounded more like the deep growling of savage beasts. Klein couldn't imagine the scene outside. All he knew was that even a demigod-level demoness had to hide from the danger. He retracted his gaze and thought deeply for a few seconds, silently muttering, "I can't head out, but I can't stay in here either. Who knows when that crimson moon will be covered by fog again, allowing Panatia to regain her freedom of movement. When the time comes, with us being so close, there's no way for me to escape. But how do I move without heading out?" In his silence, Klein slowly turned his body and faced the pitch-black spired cathedral. According to Lady Despair Panatia, that cathedral was the only place she didn't dare explore. It was as though entering the cathedral was the only way to escape her hunt. Of course, a demoness like Panatia wasn't necessarily speaking the truth, but Klein believed that she wasn't likely to lie regarding such matters. After all, to her, he was her prey, her delicacy. Besides, Panatia back then was using her speech and charm to entice him bit by bit, designing a trap for him, so as to capture her prey. With a demigod's confidence, it was unlikely she would reveal information as a bluff. In addition, at such times, speaking the truth was the safest and most reassuring option. There was no need to worry about the prey escaping ahead of time due to the detection of a lie. Unless her half-mad state causes her to habitually lie. Otherwise, it shouldn't be a problem. Klein, who was out of options, quickly made up his mind. He lowered his left hand and made creeping hunger turn transparent. Although he knew that traveling was useless, he still held out hope because this was the point when the crimson moon was at its clearest. There was no obstruction, and it was round like a silver plate. During such times, Mr. Dorr could transmit his shouts into the ears of his descendants from where he was lost. Traveling was enhanced, and anomalies happened, so it wasn't something impossible. Klein's figure rapidly phased away, but seconds later, his body outline appeared again where he stood. I can't enter the spirit world, to the point of not even sensing it. As a beyonder power, traveling only has a third of its uses. It can barely be used as invisibility. Klein muttered silently as he concluded his experiences and lessons. However, he was puzzled about one point. Traveling's phasing away and turning transparent is due to the unique traits of the spirit world, so why would it be effective? Klein pondered for about 10 seconds before he came to a rough idea. Every person must be connected to the spirit world because one's astral projection is located there. It can obtain all kinds of abstract information, which is the reason why revelations can be obtained from divination. Therefore, when we are converted into a hidden and secret state, our connection with the spirit world becomes part of it. This can explain why I can still use the unique traits of the spirit world, but am unable to enter it. This is because the former had a portion of it hidden away. I didn't have the time to consider it before and had attempted flaming jump. I was met with success, and this also requires the unique traits of the spirit world. After confirming this point, Klein raised his right hand and snapped his fingers, attempting to ignite a half-melted candle in the neighboring building. He wanted to use flaming jump to pass through the neighboring buildings and slowly approach the spired cathedral. Once the crimson moon was hidden by the fog, he would reassess the situation to decide if he would take the risk and hide inside. A scarlet flame was set ablaze in the neighboring building as it slowly expanded and illuminated the surroundings. At that moment, the streets outside suddenly turned abnormally silent. All of the beast-like growls disappeared. The figures that loitered on the streets seemed to turn to face the building, using their gazes in an attempt to penetrate the windows. Klein instantly broke out into a cold sweat. He didn't dare to leap over as he instinctively snapped his fingers and extinguished the flame. After a brief silence, the rowdy murmurings sounded again. The indistinct figures continued walking here and there. Only then did Klein heave a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. He discovered that he had unknowingly made several mistakes after entering the foggy town. In such a dangerous and bizarre environment, he hadn't divined if he should light the candle in the neighboring building. My spiritual intuition should have warned me, but it didn't. From the looks of it, after the gray fog was screened away, my spiritual intuition and sense for danger are no longer enhanced. Now, I'm just a little stronger than a marionettist of the same level. I'm far from being crazy powerful. It's because of this that I was incited by Panatia's instigator powers to look at her wound. I didn't receive any premonition for danger and subconsciously believed that it wouldn't be a problem with a marionette in between us. Klein temporarily didn't have time to have an after-action review of his previous battle. He placed his attention back onto approaching the cathedral without heading out. He began scrutinizing himself and his mystical items beyond her powers. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he found a solution. This solution stemmed from a traveler's door opening which he thought was useless. This beyonder power was completely overshadowed by teleportation under normal circumstances, but in this mysterious and bizarre foggy town, just its usage of the unique traits of the spirit world became more useful. Klein wasn't in a rush to take action as he took out the gold coin, which Senior used to reside in. Using divination to question his spirituality, he obtained the answer that he should penetrate the wall. And without any way to obtain a revelation from the spirit world, he could only choose to trust himself. He then walked to the wall that was shared with the neighboring building and pressed his hands on it. Silently, Klein passed through the stone wall and entered the next building. He followed the terrace houses until he arrived at the final one. According to his initial impressions of the town, he was already very close to the spired cathedral. He didn't need more than 2 flaming jumps to reach it. At that moment, the crimson moonlight that penetrated the dark-colored curtains didn't weaken. He could vaguely see figures coming and going like they were leading a normal life. Without being capable of moving further away, all Klein could do was sit down on a wooden chair that was a distance away from the windows. It was almost completely dark here with deep, dark shadows. Only at this point did he have the time to recall the details of his encounter with Demoness Panatia. She's actually the murderer that caused the Great Smog of Backlund. Tens of thousands of people died because of her. Even more people suffered the pain of losing their loved ones. Old Kohlert, who worked hard to live. Ma'am Liz, who worked hard to raise her 2 daughters. Klein closed his eyes as he lifted his head and took deep breaths. He forced himself to extricate himself from the anger and hatred that suddenly surged in him as he calmly observed the turn of events. Unfortunately, I didn't let Senior wear that flower of blood. Otherwise, he should still be able to put up a struggle. However, there wasn't a choice. While possessing me, wearing a ring corresponding to a rose bishop while entering Cheney's Gate would be equivalent to blasting myself apart. Now, the only mystical item I can use is Creeping Hunger. There's Zombie, Baron of Corruption, Desire Apostle, and Traveler inside. Yes, I should try to see if I can contact the gray fog by praying while the crimson moon is clear. It doesn't work. I can now confirm that even with a marionette between us, I'll still be affected by a demoness charm and incitement. Since Panatia can release a plague on a large scale, why didn't she attack me in secret in such a concealed manner? Instead, She waited until I nearly lost control from witnessing her incomplete mythical creature form and exposed my location before spreading the ailments? She can definitely do it. The Great Smog of Backlund is the best proof. There are two explanations. First, it's because I was personally sent here by the angel. This made her place a great deal of attention on me, worried that spreading the plague in advance would be detected by my spirituality. Second, she's afraid of something, so she doesn't dare to blanket the area with her plague. If it's the latter, there are other dangers here. As Klein thought over the matter, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as a chill ran down his back. Almost at the same time, he saw that a deep shadow that blanketed him and the surroundings suddenly shrank, drilling towards his nostrils, mouth, and ears. Chapter 836, Tossing Food. Chapter 836, Tossing Food. At that moment, the shadow seemed to turn corporeal. It was ice-cold and moist, and it instantly bound Klein within it like he was a mosquito in amber. Klein's figure was squashed and compressed as he regressed into a piece of paper, rapidly turning into mush. Paper figurine substitutes. Having sensed the danger ahead of time, he had made timely use of paper figurine substitutes. His black-robed figure appeared on the other end of the dining table as he opened his mouth, producing a bang sound. At this moment, Klein's mind suddenly turned adrift as he found his surroundings blurry and unclear. He instantly understood what was happening. He had been forcefully pulled into a dream. And with this, he determined one point. His abnormal ability of maintaining his lucidity and rationality in dreams had already solidified and become one with him. There was no need to use the gray fog to do so. After a brief struggle, Klein suddenly snapped awake and saw the shadows in the building slowly surging at him like a tidal wave. Bang! He opened his mouth and produced an extremely mighty air bullet. This bullet struck the shadow, producing a huge swath of white. The shadows around the whiteness immediately receded and filled it to the brim, returning everything to normal once again. Klein took this opportunity to roll to the side and turned his left glove pale with a tinge of dark green. With a clap, the spot he stood at was smashed by a lump of flesh and blood that flew out from the shadow, covering the dark red carpet that was covered with strange mold. In an unobvious manner, Klein had a feeling that he was being weakened. Without any time to think deeper into the matter, he immediately made his feet produce an icy layer that emanated cold air. White frost crept up and rapidly froze the shadow. Underneath the crystalline frost was a squirming and warping pitch blackness, like oil that had its own life. Zombie's eye stun. Klein did another flip and changed his position while making his glove produce black granules that were profound and dark. Right on the heels of that, he straightened his body, and facing the shadow beneath the layer of ice, he said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language, slow. Suddenly, Klein saw the shadows squirming slow down. Clearly, it was in an extremely sluggish state. However, his thoughts had also turned sluggish, preventing him from dealing any follow-up attacks. His language of foulness had been distorted, and although it was clearly directed at the shadow, it had been distorted to target the entire living room, hence, affecting himself. In just seconds, Klein extricated himself from the slowed state, and without any thought, he lunged for the dining table, picking up a plate with half a piece of steak and throwing it at the shadow. During this process, his left glove remained dark black, but it had a sinister and noble vibe. Bribe. He had used the steak to bribe the enemy, weakening the other party's offensive, defensive, and controlling abilities. At this moment, the figure suddenly shrank back into the corner of the wall, allowing the dining plate to smash and shatter into the melting ice. Then, the figure surged upwards, taking the form of a pitch-black figure with a hooded robe. In the palm of the figure, a transparent and blurry book appeared in front of him. It was accompanied by a distant and indistinct chant. I came, I saw, I record. Just as the chanting sounded, the book rapidly flipped through the pages and produced a burning white spear. Mr. A? Has he gone completely mad? He dares to use fire-related beyonder powers in such an environment? Klein's heart tightened as his thoughts raced. He hurriedly rushed towards his opponent and held his left hand behind him. Creeping hunger was quickly tainted with the dark colors of corruption before condensing a ridiculous great sword that seemed to be combined from scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. Thump! Klein's footsteps were heavy as he bent his back, pulling his shoulder back as he forcefully delivered a strike with his left arm. The muscles on his arm bulged as he swung the sword of lava. Uft! The resplendent great sword cleaved down on the fiery spear, sending sparks of white, blue, and red scattering in every direction as they ignited the chairs and curtains. The murmurs outside the street had long vanished. All the indistinct figures had turned over, and there was extreme silence. After shattering the fiery spear with a cleave, Klein bent his knee and genuflected, snapping his fingers with his right hand. The flames in the entire room were extinguished. Klein didn't move any further. He had a nagging feeling that a dense array of gazes were trying to see through the curtains to seek out any abnormalities. The hooded man, formed of shadows, didn't take any action as well. Although he was acting crazy just moments ago, he seemed to have sensed the inexplicable horror that was slowly approaching. In the dark room with tiny hints of crimson moonlight, Klein was genuflecting while the other was standing close to the wall. It was as though the two of them had turned into stone statues. In the unbearable silence, time passed by abnormally slowly. All Klein did was count 10 seconds, and it felt like an hour had passed. Finally, the beast-like growls sounded once again in a staccato, disjointed manner, and the indistinct figures outside began walking again, returning back to the streets. Almost at the same time, Klein obtained initial control of his target's spirit-body threads. The hooded man's actions of pouncing forward instantly turned sluggish. Without any hesitation, Klein bent his body and circled the area, preparing to take advantage of his opponent's delay to disrupt any of his subsequent counterattacks and slowly turn him into a marionette. At this moment, his nose suddenly felt an itch as he couldn't help but open his mouth. Achoo! Klein sneezed and lost his control over the spirit-body threads. Furthermore, his throat began to hurt as mucus began to take form. He had caught a cold. He actually caught a cold in the intense battle. After suspecting that his opponent was Mr. A, Klein had actually been wary against a demoness ailment based on his past experience when fighting Mr. A. He had been placed at a significant disadvantage back then, but in a battle that didn't give him time to think, he had made a mistake. His constitution had long weakened due to the plague from the actual demoness, Panatia. He had no way to wait until the marionette conversion completed. He didn't even have a chance of obtaining a deeper level of initial control and use air bullets to deal a lethal strike. Achoo! As Klein sneezed, he rolled away. Meanwhile, he switched creeping hunger to the Baron of Corruption state and attempted to use his distortion powers to reduce the effects of his cold. Of course, thanks to his bribe from before, his condition wasn't too serious. All it did was affect his control over the spirit-body threads and not make him incapable of fighting. While rolling away, Klein noticed from the corner of his eye that his opponent was leaving his shadowy state. The hood slipped backward, revealing a face that looked beautiful like a female. It was none other than Mr. A. This Aurora Order Oracle had actually managed to survive this long despite the harsh environment. However, his eyes were already bloodshot. He looked at Klein as though he was looking at a delightful delicacy. The hunger that was innate and instinctive wasn't concealed at all. At that moment, Klein's mood didn't wane because he still had sufficient strength to do battle. What he was most worried about wasn't Mr. A, but that their escalating battle would produce flames and attract the danger outside. When that happens, there was no way the two of them could escape death. Hunger. The immense hunger has made Mr. A lose his rationality and no longer care about the loitering figures. If I can slightly alleviate his hunger, he should stop attacking and patiently wait until the crimson moon is once again hidden by the fog. Give him some food. As his thoughts raced, Klein nearly sliced off a piece of his flesh to throw at Mr. A. Thankfully, he thought of something in the nick of time. He had food on him. They were the dried mushrooms that Frank Lee had produced. It was said to be a crossbreed between beef and the flesh of a rose bishop. As long as there was fish and water, it could keep reproducing. As this was a new species in a subtle sense, making it not directly related to a rose bishop, Klein had placed it with herbal powders he often used like slumber flower, without removing them. He wasn't afraid that it would trigger any anomalies within the core seal behind Cheney's gate. Achoo! With another sneeze and another roll, Klein had taken out the dried mushroom and thrown it at Mr. A. Perhaps the smell of beef had attracted him, or perhaps it was the mutual sense shared between rose bishops. Mr. A immediately stopped attempting to flip through his illusory book. As he caught the mushroom, he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed, and swallowed it. The hunger pangs that were written in his eyes gradually lessened, but the way he looked at Klein remained the same. Klein threw the remaining dried mushrooms at Mr. A, who caught them. Without any hesitation, he cleanly ate them. His vision finally turned for the better. Glancing at the indistinct figures loitering outside the windows, he stepped back into a corner, fusing into the shadows. Phew! Klein heaved a sigh of relief and retreated to another corner of the wall. Mr. A actually isn't dead. I have to say that in such an environment, a rose bishop's abilities can provide immense help. Just using the stored flesh and eating himself can make him last quite long. Of course, the fact that Mr. A hasn't been killed by Lady Despair Panatia implies his strength. However, the demigod-level powers he recorded must have been used up. As Klein thought, he deliberated over his words, wishing to sound out Mr. A for more information. Have you found any clues on how to leave? There was silence as Mr. A didn't give an answer. His insanity has made it impossible to talk to him? Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said a name, Leo Master. This was the name of the Aurora Order's Saint of Darkness who had dissociated personalities. After a brief silence, Mr. A's slightly hoarse voice sounded again. He has been sent in here as well. Indeed, only matters regarding the Aurora Order elicits a response. Klein frankly said, "No, he is trapped inside the ruins of the Battle of Gods." Without waiting for Mr. A to say a word, he continued, "Why don't you enter the cathedral?" Mr. A said in a muddled manner, "It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. It's also dangerous outside. All the dangers stem from there. All the people who vanished would reappear during the crimson moon." Before he could finish his sentence, the tiny bit of crimson moonlight that passed through the curtains suddenly turned extremely dim. Chapter 837, The Hangers. Chapter 837, The Hangers. As the crimson moonlight dimmed, a thought surfaced in Klein's mind. The crimson moon is about to be covered by fog again. Just as this thought appeared, the indistinct, loitering figures outside vanished as though they had evaporated into thin air. The beast-like growls also came to a halt. The environment has been restored to its previous state. Demoness of Despair Panatia can move about freely again. Mr. A will no longer have any qualms about the danger outside. He can unleash a barrage of attacks to capture his prey. Klein instantly came to a conclusion as he raised his right index finger and snapped, igniting the leaves of a tree tens of meters away. He wanted to open up a gap with Mr. A to prevent himself from getting sicker. At the same time, he wanted to determine if he should take the risk of entering the ancient cathedral. With respect to his present situation, Klein already had a plan in mind. It was to use Mr. A's potent and multifarious abilities to draw Panatia's attention. After all, to her, a shepherd and a marionettist weren't any different when it came to meat quality. They could both fill her stomach, so her priority was definitely on who was easier to deal with. When the time comes, both parties would definitely engage in a battle, and Klein needed to find an opportunity to strike down Panatia. Just as the scarlet flames soared and engulfed Klein, he saw Mr. A turn into a shadow and meld into the surroundings once again. It was unknown where he hid himself. He ran. "Aren't you the crazy Mr. A? Shouldn't you continue pursuing your prey? Why did you run?" Klein's gaze froze as he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. His figure vanished amidst the flames before appearing in flames tens of meters away. Just as Klein leaped out of the fire, he felt his forehead burning once again. His lungs felt heavy as his breathing became rapid and difficult. Plague. Demoness of Despair Panatia had spread her plague once again. To Klein, this beautiful lady in a pure white robe had already floated somewhere in midair at some point in time, walking towards him. Beneath her feet were countless transparent and thin lines that formed a spider's web. They were connected to the surrounding buildings and trees, fully covering half the street. In the eyes of this demigod-level demoness, the intense hunger pangs were gone. The obvious bloodshot look in her eyes wasn't there, and the way she looked at Gehrman Sparrow was one of insanity and teasing. It was as though she wanted to drain his ability to resist, bit by bit, making him feel the deepest, most heavy, and most painful despair. Klein held back his urge to cough as he snapped his fingers again, causing the tree beside the cathedral to burst into flames. His figure was immediately engulfed by the fire as he rapidly faded away and appeared above the tree. He had appeared amidst the gorgeous flames. Right on the heels of that, Klein hurriedly jumped to the ground, somersaulting to the side of the ancient cathedral. At this moment, his body suddenly turned cold as he found that his feet, thighs, and waist were covered in thick layers of ice. And surrounding him was an accumulation of frost as the temperature declined rapidly. Klein clenched his teeth, holding back the horror within him. He followed his plan, and he reached out his arms in an abnormally rigid fashion, pressing it straight onto the wall. The creeping hunger on his left hand turned transparent. In silence, Klein passed through the thick, pitch-black wall and entered the spired cathedral. The spot where he was standing had a black fireball smash into the wall, just a little too slow. It splashed out like water, burning away the nearby frost and weeds. At this moment, at the top of the ancient cathedral's spire, swirling ravens opened their beaks. Wah! 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 Panatia halted as she looked at the dark cathedral. Bit by bit, her face was dyed with a look of fear. Inside the cathedral, Klein found himself unable to see anything, as it was darker than the outside. As the frost melted, and with him getting accustomed to the dim lights, he finally saw the scene before him. As far as he could see, there were figures being hung up in midair. They were all humans. Some of them were dressed in black classical robes, others in brown jackets. Some were wearing very fluffy skirts, while others had tattered clothes, making them resemble beggars. Some of them had boorish looks, others handsome with cut facial features. Some of them were beautiful, others tender, adorable, and looking youthful. None of them looked the same. No, there was something that they had in common. They were like meat that was undergoing a curing process. They hung from above, swaying gently as their heads were bowed and their eyes rolled back. Klein felt his scalp tingle as he no longer doubted that this place was extremely dangerous as described by Panatia and Mr. A. He held his back to the wall, planning on using door opening to leave to avoid danger the moment anything happened. He would then pass through the wall if he was discovered by the demoness of despair to avoid her attacks. By repeatedly doing so, he could ensure his safety. Whoosh! A cold air blew through the cathedral as the figures and corpses turned around, facing Klein. Their collars were like ropes that left their heads drooping. Klein nearly drew a gasp as he pressed his left palm onto the wall. At this moment, the figures began to sway like wind chimes. They opened their eyes and produced raving-like voices. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. The voices resounded into one, drilling into Klein's ears as he found it abnormally familiar. This was the raving that he had heard during his advancements in the past. It actually originated from here, from the foggy town. It came from the corpses that hung high in this ancient cathedral. At that instant, not only was Klein's scalp tingling, he even felt his body trembling. Could it be that this foggy town actually originates from the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range? That nation of the Evernight, which vanished? Don't tell me that I really am on the mountain. However, why would it be inside this cathedral? These same ravings don't bring about a headache or push me towards losing control. Klein hissed as he spread his hands and clenched it again repeatedly, resisting the urge to pass through the wall. Since he was already inside and had seen the source of the ravings, he believed that escaping probably didn't resolve any problems. Regardless, it's necessary to do a simple search. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know the reason when something abnormal happens to me. After using a gold coin to quickly do a divination, Klein tapped his molars gently and activated his spirit vision. He looked up at the hanging figures and found their spirituality converged. The aura colors looked normal, but they exuded a stiff appearance. There are aura colors. They aren't dead yet? Klein frowned slightly and deactivated his spirit vision. Right on the heels of that, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger, planning to observe the spirit body threads. Upon sweeping his gaze across, Klein's pupils dilated because the spirit body threads of the swaying figures looked extremely special. The illusory black threads that corresponded to their bodies were extended in the same direction, the peak of the ancient cathedral. There wasn't a single exception. In Klein's vision, they were like corpses being hung up by their spirit body threads. Before Klein could figure out what all of this meant, he caught a scene from the corner of his eye. His spirit body threads were automatically reaching upwards to the peak of the cathedral, to the source that hung up those figures. This was the first time Klein saw spirit body threads moving autonomously. It was as though they were metals that had come into contact with magnets. They floated upwards uncontrollably, and the fastest thread had already reached its destination. Klein didn't dare imagine the outcome if all his spirit body threads gathered up above. He suspected that he too would become a piece of cured meat that would be hung up to be dehydrated, producing the ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria, along with the wind. For most Beyonders, they could only consider leaving the cathedral in a bid to sever the process of having their spirit body threads attracted, but Klein was different. He was a marionettist. Quickly, he controlled his spirit body threads and pulled them thread by thread. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally completed this task. However, his spirit body threads continued floating upwards. He had to constantly pay attention and resist this upward drift. This is one of the dangers lurking inside the cathedral? Klein slowly drew a breath as he no longer leaned close to the walls. Step by step, he ventured deep into the cathedral. Above him, the figures swayed as though they were watching him. After proceeding nearly 30 meters, Klein finally saw something different. It was the pitch-black altar of the cathedral. On the altar was a stone statue. Klein identified the statue when he took a few more steps. It was in the shape of a female human. However, her hips and ribs had two beast legs growing out from each one of them. These limbs were covered in short, thick, and firm black fur. In addition, the statue was surrounded with black bands that seemed to reach out like tentacles. At the statue's feet, there were souls sleeping as though they were holding her up on a pedestal. Klein shifted his gaze and looked at the statue's head and saw a beautiful face. Klein's gaze froze. That face wasn't unfamiliar to him, because he had been sent in here by that entity. This stone statue's appearance was identical to the Eraser, angel under St. Samuel Cathedral. She is actually related to this place. That's right. The people she erased are sent here, so it would be odd if she's not connected to this place. What's the connection between her and the fourth epic's nation of the Evernight on the Hornacis mountain range? That mother of the sky? But if that's the case, why would she be working for the church? Furthermore, such an image does have its resemblance to the demonic wolf that Little Sun mentioned. Many thoughts instantly surfaced in Klein's mind. During this process, he slowly shifted his gaze away in another direction, in the hopes of finding any possible clues. A few seconds later, Klein discovered a figure. It wasn't hung in midair, but was seated diagonally behind the statue. Chapter 838, Scene from the Historical Void. Chapter 838, Seen from the historical void, the figure sitting diagonally behind the statue was an elder in a black robe. He wore a hood, and his head was bowed with his eyes closed. By his mouth was a thick, long, and white beard. It was as though he hadn't had it trimmed for years, preventing anyone from telling what he originally looked like. And in Klein's eyes, this hoary elder was even more bizarre than the figures hanging in midair. After his spirit body threads extended out from his body, it didn't drift up to the spot, which seemed to hide magnets. Instead, they coiled around his body and back on themselves, making the source and destination one and the same. Ordinary spirit body threads stemmed from inside a spirit body, extended outwards in different directions into infinity. As for the figures that hung from above, the sources of their spirit body threads was no different. The destination which they extended out to was gathered at the top of the cathedral. Thus, it was obvious that there was something wrong about it. This is the reason why he hasn't been hung up? Or should I say, this is how he avoids the danger inside the cathedral? As Klein controlled his spirit body threads to resist the continuous upward drift, he silently muttered and guessed at the reason. Suddenly, he saw a pair of eyes, a pair of pitch-black eyes that looked like an unlit water surface. The elder sitting behind the statue opened his eyes. He was still alive. Klein subconsciously took a step back as he bent his back slightly, holding out his left palm in front of him. Amidst indescribable silence and anxiety, he saw the hoary elder's eyes move slightly, open his mouth slightly, and speak in a muffled manner. Finally, another seer has come here. Another? Beyonders from the seer pathway have entered this cathedral? That's right. Apart from eraser angels, a racing of people, sending them to this foggy town, and those who vanished in the night at the Battle of God ruins would also appear here. Amongst them, there might be a few seer pathway beyonders who attempted to seek out mermaids in those waters, or had successfully advanced and were looking to leave. Seeing that the other party had no intention of immediately attacking him and had the intention to converse with him, he forcefully composed himself and said after some thought, "Why do you say that?" The hooded elder with black eyes and white beard didn't immediately reply as he asked with a muffled voice, "Do you wish to escape?" "I can tell you how." Klein wasn't moved as he immediately asked, "Then why are you still here?" Since the method to escaping this foggy town was known, why would one stay inside such a dangerous cathedral? The elder drooped his head and chuckled in a throaty manner. "It's because I've died long ago." The hair on Klein's back stood on end as he broke out into a cold sweat. He was speechless. He could tell that the elder wasn't in existence in the form of a soul. Seeing no response, the elder slowly lifted his head and swept his glance at Klein in his Gehrman Sparrow appearance. "I've used special Beyonder powers to seek out the void in this world's history and fate. I sliced off a portion of my projection and left it here. It has been maintained to this day. As for my body and my spirit, they have long died and dissipated. This is such a fascinating power." Klein was unable to verify the claim, so all he could do was ask, "Then why are you giving guidance on how to escape to seers who enter?" The elder's voice remained muffled. "After you open the door, the history and fate in here will experience a change. The projection I sliced will also vanish, and when the time comes, you will see an urn of ashes. I only wish that they could be scattered in the Srenzo River near Intis's capital, Trier. That is my hometown, the place where I was born. Do you know the place I'm referring to? I've no idea how much time has passed in the real world. He's been imprisoned for at least a century?" Klein frankly replied, "They still exist." "Excellent," the elder said with a nod, his throat apparently filled with phlegm. Although Klein didn't fully trust the person before him, he believed that knowing more made it beneficial for him to make a judgment. Hence, he decided not to waste any time, for fear of being interrupted again. "Then, how should I escape?" The elder remained sitting in his spot and said without any obvious movement, "See that wall behind the statue? Do you see an inset?" Klein actually didn't wish to follow his instructions. After all, he had been led by Panatia to do so, resulting in him seeing her incomplete mythical creature form and, hence, suffered from shock and damage. However, he had previously planned on surveying the surroundings in search of clues. Therefore, he ultimately carefully shifted his gaze to look at the wall behind the statue. Engraved on it were short and ancient symbols, but there was an empty spot in the middle, preventing it from being connected as one. The blank area was the size of 2 palms and was obviously indented. It was as though someone had dug away a brick on its surface. As long as you find the corresponding obsidian rock and insert it, this wall will tentatively be released from a concealed and secret state. It will showcase illusory colors. When the time comes, I'll tell you of a complicated special symbol. It will be the key to opening the door on the wall, allowing you to escape." The elder didn't turn his head as he looked straight ahead and spoke in detail. A complicated special symbol. A key to opening the door. Klein listened to the ravings of Hornacius. Phlegria resound with the wind behind him as a symbol suddenly came to mind. It was the vertical eye formed from many secret symbols. It was the information that the Antigonus family's notebook had passed to him by corrupting the misfortune cloth puppet. And the Antigonus family appeared to have a deep connection with the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Could this be the so-called key? Klein retracted his gaze in a calm manner as he asked, "Why did all the seers from before fail?" The elder chuckled and said, "Some of them are as naggy as you are, failing to leave this cathedral before the crimson moon turned clear. They ended up being hung up. It's the case for that fellow who gave himself a handsome face. Likewise for the lady with flawless features." Klein was nearly rendered speechless by the elder's jibe. However, he also learned something. The danger inside the cathedral would greatly increase once the crimson moon turned clear. Even marionettists were unable to control their spirit-body threads. I'll have to constantly take note of the changes in light. Once the crimson moon turns clear, I'll pass through the wall. Klein looked around him and confirmed that the wall closest to the pitch-black altar was 6 to 7 meters away. Then, he quickly came up with an emergency plan. The hooded elder didn't look at him as he continued. The rest weren't very lucky. They encountered enemies that had lost their reasoning and only wanted them for food. They were then devoured. You have to know that there aren't many beyonders from the seer pathway to begin with. The ones that can become marionettists are even fewer. The number that can come in here due to various reasons are only a handful. Of course, there are a lot more that were attracted and enticed in here, but it was difficult for them to come all the way here as they. He didn't finish his sentence as he slowly looked up and glanced at the top of the ancient cathedral. He then said with a muffled voice, "Their outcomes were equally tragic." "What do you mean?" "If I didn't attempt to steal the notebook, I would have to rely on the ravings from these hanging corpses inside this cathedral and climb up the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure. Will I be considered as one of those that got attracted or enticed? It's difficult to come in here, and the outcome would be equally tragic?" Klein's mind stirred as he began suspecting that the so-called treasure of the Antigonus family was nothing but a trap based on the dilapidated palace and translucent worms he had previously seen from his divinations. He didn't bother asking in more detail, as he tried to sound out more important information. "Do you know where that obsidian rock is?" The elder chuckled. "It's in the hands of that demoness of despair." Demoness of despair. So Panatia really is a demoness of despair. Klein had previously addressed Panatia inwardly as such, but that was because he knew that she was called Lady Despair, as well as him being certain that she was a demoness. Hence, he had simplified the two tidbits of information and given her such a nickname. He never expected that the sequence 4 of the demoness pathway was demoness of despair. "That will be very difficult for me to obtain that obsidian rock. She's a true demigod." Klein didn't conceal the difficult position he was placed in as he waited to see if the elder had any suggestions. The elder shook his head and said, "I'm a person who is long dead. There's very little help I can provide." Didn't you have a marionette when you came in?" "Yes, but it has already been eaten by the demoness of despair," Klein replied in a seemingly calm manner. The elder sighed and chuckled. "I can help you summon him from the history of this world." Just as he said that, Klein saw lines quickly outline themselves beside him, drawing out Admiral of Blood Seigneur in his triangular hat and dark red coat. Furthermore, the spirit-body threads were still under his control. Klein's pupils immediately constricted as he heard the hooded elder add, "It can only be maintained for 30 minutes. Make good use of the time. I'll help you strengthen some of the connections, enhancing your control of the marionette. This way, you can let the marionette use your beyonder powers, and also allow you to swap locations with him instantaneously. Haha, the controllable distance and traits of him looking alive will also be boosted. Allow my marionette to use my beyonder powers? Doesn't this mean that I can use the powers of a faceless to make my marionette turn into another me? A perfect body double. This is a demigod of the seer pathway? This is one of the powers of a Bizarro sorcerer? The enemy never knows if the one killed is the real Bizarro sorcerer? Also, summoning a marionette from history. This is completely inconceivable." Thoughts surfaced in Klein's mind as he could hardly compose himself. The elder looked up and glanced at him before continuing. "Give me a paper figurine." Klein frowned slightly and hesitated for a few seconds before taking out a paper figurine and handing it over. The elder reached out his wrinkled hand and took the paper figurine before swiping across it casually. Klein's headache, fever, and enlarged tonsils suddenly disappeared. The paper figurine was tainted with spots of red rust as it quickly cracked after becoming brittle. "Using my paper figurine to transfer my ailment?" Klein thought and finally asked, "Sorry for my breach of etiquette. How may I address you?" The elder didn't immediately reply as he said with a sigh, "I can only provide you a little help." He paused as he gave a muffled laugh. "You can call me, Zeratul." Chapter 839, Descendant of an Ancient God. Chapter 839, Descendant of an Ancient God, F***CK. At that instant, Klein, who heard the elder's reply, had vulgarities resound in his mind. Apart from that, no other thoughts appeared. "Zeratul, The leader of the Secret Order, a descendant of the Fourth Epoch's Solomon Empire aristocracy, the former owner of the Antigonus family's notebook and the Beyonder Guide for Emperor Roselle. He was a true high-sequence Beyonder of the seer pathway, a miracle invoker who was a secret existence about 2 centuries ago. He was believed by Rhodes to have lost control, turning from an angel into a monster during his attempt to advance to Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries. No matter which description was used, he was a heavyweight that the present Klein was unable to resist. He had the feeling of shock that a figure from history textbooks had jumped out of it and walked in front of him, alive. He also felt the air around him appear to congeal as they piled on top of him, crushing his body and stifling his breathing. Klein had once imagined that perhaps all his encounters, including his transmigration, had stemmed from Zeradol's setup, and he suspected that he would be akin to the final boss he would encounter in games. And now, he had met him ahead of time. "I'm only a Sequence 5. Klein couldn't help but shout out inwardly as he suspected if the person opposite him was the real Zeradol. Zeradol is a last name. It represents an aristocratic family in the Fourth Epoch's Solomon Empire. In theory, there should be many Zeradols over 2,000 years of history. Perhaps the one in Roselle's diary is the grandfather, father, brother, or son of that secret order's leader. Also, he mentioned that he has been dead for years, while Rhodes and Septon have testified that the secret order's leader, Zeradol, is still alive. He has just lost control and turned into a monster, turning extremely crazy. Klein tried to convince himself that the situation might not be as terrible as he imagined. This quickly calmed him down as he began to carefully contemplate. The Beyonder powers that this Zeradol showcased doesn't seem like much, but all of them exceed the realm of normalcy. It's even more so for those that's related to history and fate. He's definitely not only a Bizarro sorcerer. He might even be a Sequence 3 or Sequence 2. And this pathway's angels are few to begin with. This place is intricately tied with the nation of the Evernight, which disappeared from the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, and it produces the ravings that reach the ears of low and mid-sequence Beyonders of the seer pathway. Back then, the secret order's leader, Zeradol, had fewer appearances after he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook via Emperor Roselle. It's unknown what he was plotting. Does this mean that I can believe he had come to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the treasure left behind by the Antigonus family based on the notebook and obtain the corresponding potion formula and ingredients of Sequence 1 Attendant of Mysteries? In the world of mysticism, repeated coincidences usually imply problems and a confirmation. If it is that Zeradol, could it be that splitting himself to store himself inside the foggy town is the reason that caused his ultimate loss of control? As for being long dead, there's an even more reasonable explanation. The secret order leader, Zeradol, had said so himself. What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead. And he was already a miracle invoker. As Klein's mind churned, the hoary elder who claimed to be Zeradol chuckled. From your reaction, you seem to know me? Klein quickly probed. I've heard of this last name. I once met Queen Mystic and learned of the secret order from her, and also know of its leader. The elder nodded gently without giving any confirmation or denial. He smiled and vaguely asked, what other help do you need? Help. Klein recalled the Beyonder powers he had showcased and said after some hesitation, are you able to summon a fish from the outside world from this concealed world's history? It's okay if it has already been turned into food. From his point of view, it wasn't an impossibility. After all, most people that entered the town had come from Sonia C's easternmost front, the ruins of the Battle of Gods. Perhaps some fish that had been reared there had been brought in. They could be used to be stored as food and also used to observe the changes in the environment. There could also be explorers who vanished from not being able to sleep in time when night came after eating their fill of fish. It wasn't unreasonable that fish meat could be found in the history of the foggy town. Zeradol raised his head and looked at Klein. He didn't immediately give him an answer. After a few seconds, he leveled his gaze and said indistinctly, yes. Just as he said that, a blob made up of ground fish meat appeared in Admiral of Blood Signor's hands. It can only be maintained for 45 minutes. Once it's over, it's as though one has never eaten it before, Zeradol added. That actually worked. Klein increasingly found the high-sequence Beyonder powers of the seer pathway to really be bizarre and terrifying. He had planned on saying that he didn't need any help, but considering how Zeradol was well known to be deceitful, with everything he said and did being questionable, he felt that he needed to make some preparations. Amidst his thoughts, Klein decided to appear a little greedy to lower Zeradol's appraisal of him and believe that he could easily lead him to do his bidding. After letting his marionette put away the fish meat, his eyes rolled a little as he indiscernibly drew a breath and said, I still need the Bizarro sorcerer potion formula. Zeradol didn't change his posture as he fell silent for a few seconds. He then said with a chuckle, no problem. As long as you trust that I'll give you a real formula. After you return with the obsidian rock, I'll hand over both the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula and the symbol needed for opening the door to you. Sigh. That isn't something that I need to care about. All that matters is that you scatter my ashes back into the river in my hometown. After Klein listened in silence, he couldn't help but ask, you have a very high level. The ashes you leave behind will contaminate the river and create countless monsters. Zeratul laughed upon hearing that. Very meticulous. However, there's nothing special about my ashes. I've lost them long ago. As he spoke, he looked up again and glanced at the peak of the ancient cathedral. He's hinting that his beyonder characteristics and body specialness had been absorbed by the magnet above? Klein pondered over Zeratul's meaning as he pressed on matters regarding his beyonder pathway. What's the sequence 3 potion name after Bizarro Sorcerer? Zeratul's beard moved slightly as he said, Scholar of Yore. Scholar of Yore. Although it sounds like a relic that's already dead and dug out from a tome, Zeratul has repeatedly mentioned history. The corresponding beyonder powers are fascinating. Klein thought in glee as he asked again, then what's the corresponding sequence 0? Zeratul lifted his head again and glanced at him. Finally, he chuckled and said, You will likely know when you open the door to escape. I hate people like you, saying things midway, often just smiling without giving an answer. Klein immediately understood the feeling Emperor Roselle once had as he turned his gaze to the statue beside him and asked, Who is this? Zeratul's head didn't turn as he said in a muffled manner, She is a descendant of an ancient god. A descendant of an ancient god. A descendant of annihilation demonic wolf Phlegria? This ancient god seems to wield the authority of Evernight. His descendant established the nation of the Evernight? Before Klein could ask a question, he heard Zeratul chuckle and say, She also has a brother that you wouldn't be unfamiliar with. Who is it? Klein tried hard to recall who, but he couldn't find an answer. Zeratul chuckled. He gave himself a new last name. Antigonus. Antigonus. Nation of the Evernight. Hornaces. Phlegria. Klein's eyes lit up slightly as he pieced together the fragmented pieces of information. It's very easy to understand the Church of Evernight destroying the nation of the Evernight, as it's a battle of authorities. However, to completely eradicate the Antigonus family for having inherited the seer beyonder paths of the divine doesn't make sense. There's no need to go that far. After all, the pathways that can be interchanged with the sleepless pathway are the death and giant pathways. Furthermore, Klein was still puzzled to this day. Why would the Antigonus family place their treasure on the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range? Why did they trust the people of the nation of the Evernight that much? Now he finally understood something. Just as Klein was about to ask more questions, he suddenly saw the crimson moonlight shining in from the cathedral's windows brighten. It drew out shadows of the corpses hanging in midair. The crimson moon has turned clear. Klein's heart tightened. Without any additional thoughts, he followed his emergency plans by raising his right hand. Snapping his fingers, he lit a candle by the wall that was a distance away from him. At the same time, he got Senor to possess him as he leaped out, somersaulting in the process before arriving at the wall closest to the outside. And this time, the entire cathedral had turned abnormally silent. There were no longer any resounding ravings. Klein's spiritual intuition didn't give him any indication of danger, but he could tell from the shadows on the ground that the corpses hanging in midair had turned towards the flame. Without any hesitation, Klein pressed his left palm down, passing through a wall and arriving outside the cathedral. Then, without even daring to even raise his head, he borrowed the driving force of a wraith to tumble and run towards the nearest building. The distance from wall to wall was only about 10 meters. During this process, he didn't hear the beast-like growls nor detect the loitering figures. However, his back felt like it was being pierced by a sea of glares. In just a second, Klein had appeared outside the building. Pressing down with his palms, he passed through the wall. Then, he snapped his fingers and remotely used flame controlling to ignite a candle inside the cathedral. After a brief moment of silence and anxiety, the feeling of being stared at vanished. Beyond the tightly drawn curtains, figures began to appear as they began loitering. Chapter 840. Using his advantage. Chapter 840. Using his advantage with all the abnormalities vanishing, Klein heaved a slight sigh of relief. He began to observe his surroundings. Then, he selected a shadowy spot that wasn't too dark due to the faint moonlight. This was to prevent himself from suffering any sudden attacks. And the few seconds from before had made him come up with a theory about the faint figures and beast-like growls. They were previously corpses that were hung inside the cathedral, producing the ravings of Hornaces. Phlegria. When Klein passed through the wall and left the cathedral, the corpses that hung from above had turned to face the lit candle, and there weren't any figures on the street until Klein remotely used flame controlling and extinguished the flame. Everything was the same as before. When the crimson moon is clear and one's spirituality is enhanced, the magnet at the top of the cathedral will have a stronger influence on the foggy town. It will be able to control those corpses to loiter around and pretend that everything is normal. If that really is the case, the light might actually be attracting the controller's attention. Under such circumstances, if the flame isn't extinguished and the source is locked on, it might result in an extremely terrifying outcome. I can't rely on flame controlling to repeatedly divert the attention of those figures, Klein reminded himself. Then, he turned to use his spirit body thread's vision that he didn't deactivate to size up the bread, stewed beef potatoes, and red wine on the dining table. He suspected that the food here was part of the magnet at the top of the cathedral. If it was consumed, one's spirit body threads would be corrupted, and it would cause them to be unable to resist floating towards the cathedral. This also explained why eating the food caused them to vanish. They ended up being hung up to dry in the cathedral and be let out to walk when the crimson moon turned clear. This matched Mr. A's description of the vanished people's reappearance under the bright moonlight. At a glance, Klein discovered that the food was like living beings. They had spirit body threads extending out, reaching towards the ancient cathedral. The most special point about them was that they had only one spirit body thread, obviously being different from the dense, countless spirit body threads of a normal living creature. Indeed, it's close to my theory. After obtaining some validation regarding his theory, Klein retracted his gaze and considered how to deal with Demoness of Despair Panatia. Beside him, Wraith Signor in his ancient triangular hat and dark red robe appeared. This marionette's bones cracked as his face squirmed. Soon, he turned into Gehrman Sparrow. This was a marionette using the powers of a faceless. Klein observed his double for a moment and realized that there were some flaws. The clothes couldn't be changed, and if he concealed them with an illusion, it wasn't possible for him to fool a demigod-level Demoness of Despair. Even Mr. A might not fall for it. After some thought, he made Wraith Signor take off his clothes. As for himself, he took off the black clergyman robe, and they switched clothes with one another. While wearing the clothes and hat, Klein's expression turned odd. Over the past 2 months, the marionette had been wearing the same outfit. It had been down the sewers and experienced an explosion, so there were all sorts of smells mixed into the clothes. It wasn't a pleasant smell. Sigh, my present suffering is all a result of my laziness prior to this. Klein sighed silently as he completed changing his appearance. He had turned into Gehrman Sparrow dressed as a pirate captain. At this moment, Signor had also changed into the black clergyman robe. His aura was spirited and no longer cold. He looked no different from a living person. Klein deliberated for a moment and took off Creeping Hunger, allowing Admiral of Blood to wear it on his left hand. This way, the marionette was the perfect copy of Gehrman Sparrow. One must go all the way when putting on an act. Besides, if Creeping Hunger were to revolt at this moment, then it will be eating the marionette. Haha, once the marionette lapses, will it feel cheated? It's like it ate a placebo. As Klein got Signor to get used to his state and take away the fish meat, he seriously began formulating plans. Relying on a marionette that can use my beyonder powers wouldn't be able to defeat a Demoness of Despair. Even stealing the obsidian rock from her is nearly impossible. She's a genuine demigod after all. Even though this extremely convincing marionette gives me a chance of achieving success in battle, such as letting it draw her attention while I complete a sudden sneak attack and constantly swap positions, thus confusing Panatia so that she can't make an accurate judgment, I can't make up for the disadvantage that stems from the difference in our levels and strength to achieve my goals. I can consider using the marionette to engage in close combat and attempt to control Panatia's spirit body threads. He's already a corpse, so he wouldn't be affected by the plague. I can catch her by surprise using this method. But there are too many problems. First, the mysticism, viruses, and germs that a Demoness of Despair creates will grow in strength. At its peak, will it be able to affect a zombie? Second, does she still have other beyonder powers I'm not aware of? There's a high chance that it's the case. I'll first make a list and write down my advantages or things that are on par with the Demoness of Despair. Let's see if I can get any ideas. I can disguise myself. A marionette using its beyonder powers can be considered at the level of a demigod. Instantaneous swapping is also one. Apart from them, there isn't anything else. Yes, considering Demoness of Despair's current state, I seem to have something that I'm better at than her. She's in a half-crazed state. Her reason comes and goes at random, and she does extreme things. She's easily led around by her instincts. Although she's still good at incitement and allurement, that's an innate quality for catching prey. As for me, I'm in a normal state, and I haven't had any problems with my rationality yet. I'm still able to think and analyze. Don't tell me I need to come out on top using my wit. An idea came to Klein as he gradually formulated a new train of thought and plans. Why must I fight Demoness of Despair Panatia to the death at this moment? She definitely yearns to escape this foggy town. Deep down in her heart, this will be something that beats her instinctive need to eat. Furthermore, She's still full at the moment. I can try to cooperate with her. She can provide that obsidian rock, and I'll draw the special and secret symbol, putting together the conditions for opening the door. Besides, I'm not too sure about Zeradol. Who knows what schemes he might be up to? He might be secretly plotting something. By pulling a demoness of despair into this, it can effectively make the situation chaotic and restrain him in some way. Cooperation is a diplomatic choice, not a militaristic choice. The effects of an intact stand-in at the demigod level will definitely be better than directly engaging in battle. This is equivalent to me obtaining benefits from both sides. Klein rapidly made a decision. As he pondered on the details of him negotiating to cooperate, he patiently waited for the crimson moon to return behind the fog. After a while, the crimson moonlight that seeped through the dark-colored curtains dimmed. Klein immediately made his marionette pass through the wall and leave where he was hiding. Then, Senior walked onto the streets with the appearance of Gehrman Sparrow, walking straight towards the pitch-black cathedral. In about 10 seconds, Klein discovered that Senior was being affected by an ailment. To the dead, this was completely ineffective, but Klein could foresee that, with the passage of time, the ailment would worsen and turn stranger. It might even affect one's nerves and spirituality. This would make the zombie's actions turn stiff. In the end, even its knees would be unable to bend, making movement only being possible by hopping. Thankfully, I didn't choose to use the plan of letting my marionette control the spirit-body threads. Klein immediately made Senior say out loud, "I was inside the cathedral for a while, and I'm not dead. I found a way to escape from this place." After saying that, Gehrman Sparrow sniffed as though his resistance to the ailment had weakened due to the declining state of his body. And at this moment, the white-robed Panatia suddenly appeared at the door of the cathedral. Her hair had been tied up once again, looking neat and tidy. Her slightly crazy-looking but beautiful eyes looked at Gehrman Sparrow as she took out a strangely profound obsidian rock. The contours of the obsidian rock was identical to the inset on the wall behind the cathedral's statue. "You need it?" Panatia asked calmly. Klein discovered that the demoness of despair had dispelled her plague and ailment as he hurriedly made Senior nod. "Yes, as long as you place it in the correct location in the cathedral and match it with a special symbol, we will be able to open a door that allows us to escape. I know that the cathedral's interior is very dangerous to you, but this is mainly a result of spirit-body threads. And as a marionettist, I can control spirit-body threads to prevent you from suffering the fate of being hung up." Panatia fell silent for a few seconds as she curled her lips. With a bright smile, she returned with a question. "Then, I'll become your marionette? Or you can stop helping me at the critical moment, making me turn into a loitering figure under the moon." Klein was long prepared. He immediately made his marionette reply earnestly. "What should I do to make you feel at ease?" Panatia didn't immediately reply. After some careful thought, she said, "Give me your hair and flesh." Curses that demonesses are good at? Using Senior's hair and flesh to curse Gehrman Sparrow? Count me as the loser if that works. As Klein felt grounded, he made the marionette appear in a difficult position. "Then wouldn't you be able to kill me at any moment?" Panatia replied with a smile. "You can hand me the hair and flesh only when entering the cathedral. When inside, if there are any signs of me cursing you, you can give up controlling my spirit-body threads. It will be the same the other way round too. If anything abnormal happens to me, I'll immediately curse you. Once the door is opened, I'll leave first. And at the same time, I'll return the flesh and hair to you." Gehrman Sparrow hesitated for a long time as he discussed the details with the demoness of despair. Finally, he nodded and said, "All right, let's do it." Just as Panatia wanted to say something, her eyes suddenly narrowed as she slowly said, "For some reason, I'm still a little worried." Chapter 841, Keeping Each Other in Check. Chapter 841, Keeping Each Other in Check. What terrifying intuition. Despite not realizing that the Gehrman Sparrow in front of you is a double, you still feel that something is amiss. Hidden in a faraway building, Klein inwardly drew a gasp. His mind raced as he quickly came up with a corresponding strategy. He controlled Senior and made the marionette reply in a deep voice. "I'm also a little worried. After opening the door, if you leave first, you can ambush me from the outside once I'm out. You don't even need to ambush me. You can just wait outside. I believe that I should be the first to leave. And before that, you need to return to me my flesh and hair. When the time comes, you can be closer to the door. This way, you will have enough time to pass through the door before your spirit-body threads drift to the top of the cathedral." Panatia listened in silence and returned with a question. "Then how do I prevent you from destroying the door after you leave?" "This is also a problem for me," the marionette answered without giving any signs of weakness. "When I obtain that special symbol, I'll show it to you. That way, even if I close the door, you will still be able to open it again." Panatia closed her mouth as though she was thinking through the details, but she appeared somewhat irascible and could hardly compose herself. It was as though her inclination for insanity had filled her mind. After about 10 seconds, she said again, I think a pure curse might not be able to harm you. Seers do not lack the means to avoid harm, just like the paper figurine substitutes you used before. She really isn't leaving behind any loopholes. Thankfully, the person in front of you is a fake from top to bottom. As Klein lampooned, he made Senior take out one paper figurine after another. Then, he burned them all in front of the demoness of despair. I can't be sure that you haven't hidden one, Panatia said in suspicion, still somewhat neurotic. Gehrman Sparrow twitched the corners of his mouth in a deadpan manner and said, You can try divination. Aren't witches good at that? Panatia smiled impatiently and said, The spirit world cannot be communicated with in here, and my spirituality. She didn't finish her sentence as the look in her eyes turned somewhat dangerous. Klein knew what the demoness of despair was getting at. Her spirituality had been corrupted due to half a year of eating. It was somewhat chaotic and crazy, making it give unreliable answers, especially against a beyonder that was best at divination. The two reached a stalemate, momentarily unable to resolve the problem of trusting one another. At this moment, on the roof to the left, a hoarse and muffled voice sounded. I can be your witness. Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia turned their heads at the same time and looked over. Mr. A's figure grew out from the shadows as he wore a blood-red hooded robe. How will you bear witness? Klein made Senior ask. Mr. A pulled down his hood and said with a deep chuckle, I'll use flesh and blood magic to drill into your body and control your condition. Once you stop controlling the spirit body threads, or if you try to use paper figurine substitutes, I'll immediately give a warning or attempt to stop you. Once that door you speak of opens, I'll leave your body and pass through the door before my spirit body threads are affected. Do you think Gehrman Sparrow is an idiot? Klein made his marionette curl his lips. Based on what I know, rose bishops can hide in the bodies of others, but the host will immediately die once they leave. No, using that method is to evade investigations. Therefore, there's a need to fuse with the host's flesh and blood. But there's no need to do so in this situation. I'll silently wait inside your stomach, Mr. A explained in detail. No, it's not my stomach. It's Senior's stomach. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow take out a gold coin and pretend to attempt a divination. This crazy adventurer muttered under his breath as the gold coin in between his fingers was flipped. With a ping, the gold coin flew into the air and landed in his palm. Gehrman Sparrow carefully glanced at it. From the looks of it, you aren't lying. However, you will have to leave my body before I show the special symbol to Lady Despair. If this wasn't done, Gehrman Sparrow might end up being murdered by their collusion. After all, if Panatia obtained the door-opening symbol while wielding the obsidian rock, given enough time, she didn't need to worry about any anomalies with her spirit body threads. Then, she wouldn't need help from Gehrman Sparrow at all. Mr. A's existence was only to prevent the use of paper figurine substitutes. However, Gehrman Sparrow didn't need to be too worried if Mr. A came out ahead of time. He wasn't even afraid that Panatia would lose decorum after knowing the door-opening symbol, because if that happened, he could rely on paper figurine substitutes to avoid certain death. On the other hand, Panatia wouldn't carry out a pursuit in the cathedral. This was because she would end up being hung up with the passage of time. Hence, she needed to seize the opportunity to escape immediately. Besides, there was no way to take the obsidian rock. Gehrman Sparrow would then have no chance of any subsequent escape attempts. Although the details of this plan were still flawed, it fully considered the situation of all three parties. Panatia raised her hand and grabbed at the hair that was sliding down her sideburns when she suddenly asked, If I were to escape first, aren't you afraid that I'll ambush you? This was also a problem that Gehrman Sparrow was previously worried about. Klein immediately made his marionette curl his lips and say, I'm afraid, but I still have other means of escape. I'll take the risk. Panatia took 2 steps in an irritated manner before finally saying, We shall do it as agreed then. After making up her mind, her smile became extremely relaxed. You really are a special man, a man that made me see hope. After we leave, I don't mind letting you experience what extreme pleasure is if you aren't afraid. Gehrman Sparrow shifted his gaze away with great effort before looking at Mr. A. I have no more questions. With the sound of howling wind, Mr. A flew down and landed not far from Gehrman Sparrow. His figure, along with his clothes, rapidly melted away, turning into a sticky glob of flesh and blood. Right on the heels of that, the flesh and blood piled onto one another and kept compressing into a tiny stream that had the thickness of an arm. Then, it flowed towards Gehrman Sparrow. Far away in a building, Klein felt somewhat disgusted as he retched. Then, he made Gehrman Sparrow open his mouth. The flesh and blood stream climbed up the marionette's body and drilled into its mouth. The slightly warm but slippery feeling passed through the gullet and entered the stomach. It's heavy. However, Mr. A's flesh and blood is helping to hold up the stomach, preventing it from sagging too much. Klein inspected the marionette and made him look up at the shrouded crimson moon and say to Panatia, "Let's begin." All right. Panatia, who could hardly withstand her urges, impatiently walked towards the cathedral's entrance. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow follow by her side, and first plucked off his hair before making 2 meat tendrils grow out from his arm before ripping it out. It made blood gush out. If someone very familiar with me were here, they would definitely notice a problem, because I can't deal harm to my own body so decisively. Perhaps in the eyes of others, the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, can probably do such a deed easily. As Klein noticed a problem and gained experience from his conclusion, he made the marionette pass through the ajar main door of the ancient cathedral. He then handed the hair and flesh to Panatia. Panatia slowed down her pace as she took out an ugly, palm-sized puppet and wiped the flesh over it and tied the hair around its thin neck. She held the cursed puppet in one hand and finally stepped through the cathedral's door. Klein immediately got Gehrman Sparrow to control their spirit-body threads. As for Mr. A, as he had overlapped with the marionette, it wasn't too much of a hassle. Even I can do it. With the powers showcased by Zeratul, he totally has the capability to help Beyonders that are not from the seer pathway to resolve the loss of control over spirit-body threads in the cathedral. This way, as long as he wants the demoness of despair to enter, he could have opened the door a long time ago. Why didn't he do it? He is unable to communicate with others beyond the cathedral. That's why seer pathway Beyonders who aren't marionettists or higher can't walk to him. Klein used his marionette senses to analyze the situation remotely. And inside the cathedral, the corpses remained dangling in midair. Their heads were bowed, and their eyes were rolled back. From time to time, they would sway with the wind, producing the ravings hornaces. Phlegria, when Panatia saw this scene, her body instantly stiffened, but she quickly composed herself. Together with Gehrman Sparrow, they walked under the gazes of the hanged. Before long, they saw the pitch-black altar and the statue of the ancient god's descendant. Zeratul remained sitting diagonally behind the statue, wearing a hood and sporting a white beard. When Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia approached, he slowly lifted his head and chuckled. Very good. Beyonders from the seer pathway need to know how to use their brain and not always think of fighting. He seemed to have foreseen that all of the paper figurines of Gehrman Sparrow would be destroyed. He directly reached out his wrinkled palm and grasped at something. His grab pulled out a yellowish-brown goatskin and a quill filled with ink and a bottle of ink. This made Panatia involuntarily twitch her brows. Zeratul picked up the quill and scribbled words and symbols before rolling it up and handing it to Gehrman Sparrow. That's the door-opening symbol, as well as the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula you want. They can only last for 45 minutes and cannot be taken out. Klein avoided the demoness of despair and unfolded the goatskin, allowing the potion formula and the door-opening symbol to appear before his eyes. Suddenly, his pupils constricted and nearly froze. The door-opening symbol and the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook via the misfortune cloth puppet were mostly the same. It was a vertical I made up of many mysterious labels. However, there were tiny differences in the details. A crescent pattern had switched spots with a dotted line label. Chapter 842, Behind the Door. Chapter 842, Behind the Door. At that instant, the first thought that surfaced in Klein's mind was, as expected, Zeratul has a ploy. Right on the heels of that, he was thankful that he had obtained the correct door-opening symbol from the Antigonus family's notebook ahead of time. With this newfound confidence, he didn't panic and become at a loss. Zeratul returned the quill and ink bottle to the past, and he lifted his head. Scanning Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia, he said with a sigh, "All the conditions are in place. You can now open the door." Upon saying that, he fixed his gaze on Gehrman Sparrow and chuckled. "Don't forget to take my urn with you." Just as he said that, his entire body suddenly crumbled into countless points of light and scattered into the surroundings, fusing into the void. It was as though he had long rotted and turned to dust. Left in the spot where he was sitting, there was a tin urn. Its surface had ancient patterns that didn't look anything special. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow take 2 steps forward, bend down, and pick up the tin urn. He found it heavy, nothing like something that was fake. He used the hand holding the goatskin to open the lid and saw that it was filled with grayish-white powder and particles. It didn't have a lustrous glow. It really is just ordinary ashes. Then who helped cremate Zeratul? He cremated himself? After Gehrman Sparrow closed the lid, he casually used this goat-skin-wielding hand to take out a piece of flesh from a pocket and swallowed it. Panatia noticed this action as she squinted her eyes at him as though she was asking what he was doing. Klein stuffed the fish into the marionette's mouth as he deliberately adjusted his breathing and said, "I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure if this door-opening symbol works." Panatia had already confirmed that he was eating ordinary fish meat. Although it looked somewhat disgusting, The half-crazy her had lacked the patience to make a further distinction. She moved her gaze away and looked at the urn and smiled. If it's useless, we can share it. I'll have 1 scoop a day, and it will last a very long time. This demonist mental state is really abnormal. Klein silently sighed. Passing by the eraser angel statue suspected to be the mother of the sky, Gehrman Sparrow came in front of the wall. Then, he turned his body to the side and pointed to the inset, and said to Panatia, "Place that obsidian rock inside." Panatia smiled gorgeously as she said with dull eyes, "Let me see the door opening symbol first. There's no need to be so wary of me. If I really wanted to harm you, I can immediately give up my marionette, and you wouldn't have the time to escape this cathedral. You'll definitely be hung up. When the time comes, I'll saunter in, pick up the obsidian rock, and open the door to leave. However, the symbol given by Zeradol is really problematic. It's best I find a person to bear the brunt of it." Klein's mind whirred as he made Gehrman Sparrow lift his palm and pat his abdomen while opening his mouth. A blob of indistinct flesh and blood surged out, piling up ahead and turning into the beautiful feminine Mr. A. Upon seeing this scene, Gehrman Sparrow flicked the goatskin and unrolled it. The special symbol was with the Bizarro sorcerer potion formula as they were reflected in the eyes of Panatia and Mr. A. Panatia's eyes darted about before she smiled coquettishly and said, "Open the door. You leave first." She had confirmed that Gehrman Sparrow was still helping her control her spirit-body threads, so there was plenty of time for her to wait. As she spoke, she threw the ugly puppet stained with blood and tied up hair at him. She's also afraid of an accident. As Klein got Gehrman Sparrow to catch the puppet, he watched the demoness of despair take a few steps forward and insert the obsidian rock into the recess. The two fused together perfectly, not leaving any protrusions. The wall rapidly emitted light and gradually turned transparent. It could be seen that the outside was paved in stone slabs. There were walls with holes and clouds floating in midair. As Panatia took a step to the side, Gehrman Sparrow held the puppet, goatskin, and urn in his left hand and reached out his right palm. He then used his finger as a pen and drew the vertical line made up of several secret symbols on the transparent wall. During this process, Klein was in a dilemma. He wasn't sure if he should draw Zeradol's symbol or the Antigonus family's one. Although he believed that Zeradol was problematic and had a scheme, he felt that he had belittled this powerful figure after calming down. If Zeradol's sole purpose was to harm him and everyone else with him, there was no need for him to mention the opening of the door. All he needed to do was wait patiently to achieve his goals. Furthermore, with the gray fog's aura completely severed and screened from Klein by the foggy town, he couldn't figure out why Zeradol would target him. Therefore, his final judgment was that Zeradol's goal was to coax someone into opening the door to allow him to obtain something or escape something. As for whether there was danger after the door opening, that wasn't within his considerations. If scattering the ashes was genuine and rather important, it was likely to be relatively safe after heading out. In short, danger was at every turn. That also meant that Zeradol's door-opening symbol was real, and the probability that it didn't carry any danger was 50%. And on the other hand, the Antigonus family's notebook wasn't necessarily kind-hearted. The scene that Klein had seen from the divinations he did above the gray fog, and the information he obtained from Zeradol, and the fact that Zeradol had lost control and gone mad, he could basically determine that the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range's Antigonus family's treasure might very well be an enticing trap. Then, whether there was any latent risks in the complex picture provided by the notebook, that was something that needed consideration. On the one hand, it's a tiger, and on the other hand, it's a wolf. It's the ultimate choice of the lesser evil. Also, the Antigonus family symbol is for entering the treasure trove. It doesn't mean that it can be used to leave. As Klein contemplated, he didn't stop drawing while he quickly approached the part which was different. At this moment, he stole a glance at Panatia and discovered that her eyes had a glint in them as she wore a smile. It felt like she had the urge to try. If she's normal, as a senior instigator, she should be able to control her expressions. Besides, she just saw the door-opening symbol as well. Klein's heart stirred as he let the marionette draw the symbol provided by Zeradol. Soon, the complicated vertical eye was drawn. Pure light enveloped the area as they traversed the patterns and finally gathered together. Amidst a spectacular blast of light, an illusory, double door filled with secrecy appeared on the wall. Due to the push from Gehrman Sparrow, it slowly opened. Behind the door was the ancient stone tiles and hole-ridden walls they had previously seen. Everything was very silent, and there were zero abnormalities. At this moment, Panatia's figure suddenly shattered, turning into mirror fragments. At the same time, the lady in a pure white robe appeared in front of Gehrman Sparrow and passed through the door. And in her hand, there was an additional ugly puppet stained with blood, its neck coiled with a strand of hair. As for the one in Gehrman Sparrow's hand, it had degenerated into a piece of glass. In terms of magical illusions, a demoness of despair was several times superior to Klein. After Panatia passed through the door first, she half turned around and faced Gehrman Sparrow, revealing a crazy and teasing smile. Black flames soared from her palm as she ignited the puppet. At that moment, it was as though she was saying, "Despair. Plunge into the deepest pit of despair, just as hope arrives." Only then did Klein realize that the curse couldn't be diverted or weathered by paper figurine substitutes. Panatia immediately turned around, preparing to depart from the foggy town and the ancient cathedral, afraid that an accident would happen. At that moment, her eyes suddenly froze. Her body crumbled, transforming into one mirror after another. However, she wasn't able to put a distance further than 10 meters between her and the door. In just a second or two, Panatia let out a sharp cry as invisible threads and thick, black hair curled around her, binding her within. Her exterior was covered in black flames as she froze into layers of ice. Suddenly, all of this disintegrated. Demoness of despair, Panatia's eyes effused clear, deep despair and regret. Her expression rapidly turned stiff as her neck seemed to be held up by an invisible hand. Her entire body rose into the air and hung there, her eyes rolling back bit by bit. But her looks remained immaculate. On the side of the door, Gehrman Sparrow's body had been enveloped in black flames and began melting like wax. As for Mr. A, who had planned on flying through the door, he began retching, vomiting one fresh mushroom after another. His body began to sprout mushrooms as if a drizzle had just passed. Before Gehrman Sparrow lost his vision, the scene behind the door pulled close, presenting an empty foyer. No, it wasn't empty. Hanging in midair were even more corpses. They were of all ages and sexes. Some were dressed exquisitely, others gorgeously, ancient, or casually. These corpses were like the ones hanging in the cathedral. They all floated up as they came and went as though they were acting in a grand musical, accurately reflecting a musical of the daily lives and details a town should have. Klein saw that, behind these hanged corpses, there was a transparent and slimy tentacle. It was covered in complex patterns with secrecy hidden within. It was as though it could drive anyone crazy. Countless tentacles extended deep into the foyer, and there sat an ancient, huge stone chair. Its surface was inlaid with dull gold and gems. Klein tensed up as he didn't hesitate to close his eyes and cut his connection with the marionette. In his mind, the scene that he had seen from his previous divination surfaced. Seated on the huge chair were countless translucent maggots that clustered together. They squirmed slowly as they grew freely, extending out nearly invisible tentacles. And the final scene that was embedded in the marionette's vision was at the bottom of the ancient chair. A tarot card sat there silently. Its surface was also that of Roselle. The emperor was wearing a gorgeous head accessory and colorful clothes. It held a stick with luggage hanging from it, as though he was on a long trip. He had a visionary look, and beside him was a puppy. At the corner were shiny words, Sequence 0. The Fool. Chapter 843, Magical Mushroom. Chapter 843, Magical Mushroom, Sequence 0. The Fool. After discerning the words on the tarot card, Klein once again felt the same feeling he had when he heard Zeratul say his name. At that moment, he felt the strong call of destiny. He felt that everything had been arranged from the beginning, just like 0-08. He began to suspect that his original judgment, believing that the female beast tamer from the traveling circus that had visited Tingen and performed a tarot divination for him wasn't an ordinary person. As his thoughts raced, Klein viewed it from another angle and came up with a new idea. Gradually, he stopped being that horrified, fearful, and depressed. Perhaps it wasn't a machination, but the changes that I brought about myself. This is because of the ritual that resulted in my transmigration. I had a connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog. Fate would naturally be affected as a result. More precisely, as a visitor from another world, I never had my fate here. The current trajectory I've taken is a result of my character, the encounters of the original Klein, the influence of the gray fog, and the surrounding environment. The mysterious space above the gray fog is clearly strongly tied to the seer pathway. And this pathway, Sequence 0, is the Fool. When projected into reality, and in front of a divination, I'll definitely get the Fool as my card. Similarly, this resulted in me later using the Fool as my name. Klein's mood calmed down bit by bit, believing that this was the most plausible explanation. Using Occam's razor to eliminate all presently unknown factors, I can still obtain a reasonable explanation. That means that it's quite likely to be the case. Klein forced himself to stop thinking about questions he couldn't provide certain answers to. He then turned his attention to what had just happened. That huge chair and that cluster of translucent maggots were what I saw when I made a divination above the gray fog. From carefully considering and inferring things from this harrowing scene, it might very well be an angel from the seer pathway, an angel that had lost control and turned into a monster. Zeratul himself? or the powerful entity from the Antigonus family from the fourth epoch? If it's the former, that corroborates with Erodes and Septon. Zeradol is already sequence 1 and has lost control and gone made. He broke down into a monster. This matches. This can also explain why Zeradol only wishes for the door to be opened. It's because once the door of secrets is opened, the two sides will have a connection, allowing him to recover from his present state bit by bit. His repeated emphasis on his ashes was just a pretense. But herein lies the problem. The environment Zeradol is located in, as presented by Erodes, doesn't resemble the ancient palace at the mountain peak. Otherwise, I would have recognized it back then. What if that's the angel from the Antigonus family who's living as an abject existence? One that made Zeradol suffer after he came to the Hornacis mountain range after obtaining the notebook from Roselle. He had a part of him separated from him without realizing it, thus causing him to go mad during the advancement. Regardless, he is a sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. After all, Zeradol was already a miracle invoker back then. From this angle, Zeradol's goal might very well be the opening of the door, allowing the foggy town's history and fate to become mixed with the outside world, preventing him from being dissociated again. Regardless, that cluster of translucent maggots is probably a sequence 1 that lost control. No wonder the demoness of despair faced a breakdown the moment she saw him. She only managed to struggle a little before being hung up, turning into a marionette that's being hung up to dry. Thankfully, I was lacking in clues back then, and the scenes I saw through divination wasn't clear enough. Otherwise, I would have suffered a terrible blow from witnessing a complete and crazy mythical creature. I would have lost control and mutated. Wait, no matter how strong he is, can he be stronger than the eternal blazing sun and the true creator? Even if a seer pathway beyonder has a certain resistance against the mysterious space above the gray fog, it would at best make them be at the same level. In other words, as long as I endured the pain, with the prerequisites met, I have one chance of prying on its secrets, and a complete mythical creature's state is mixed in with the relevant knowledge. Who knows, I might be able to get 1 or 2 high-sequence formulas, just like how I obtained the unshadowed from the eternal blazing sun back then. At this thought, Klein couldn't help but have a scene surface in his mind. The fool above the gray fog was silently reaching out his thieving hands once again. While reeling in joy, Klein also found it a great pity because, with his present level, strength, and items, he had no way to head to the ancient chair with the translucent maggots and pick up the full card. To see an item that one desired the most, but not being able to obtain, it was often painful. Phew, at least I've already obtained the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. In the future, I still have one's chance of prying on its secrets. The risk I took this time wasn't in vain. All the gold pounds I spent and the marionette I lost wasn't in vain either. Zeradol likely wouldn't give a fake formula. To him, there's no need for him to lie to a sequence 5 beyonder who might not walk out alive. Besides, if he was lying, he had to be wary of me already knowing the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. The reason why I asked might only be to determine if he was worth trusting. I'll divine this later when I'm back above the gray fog. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, and seeing that there hadn't been any anomalies outside for quite a while, he decided to immediately approach the pitch-black cathedral and observe the changes inside. To him, all the problems that he thought about weren't pressing issues. The pressing issue was to leave the secret world, to leave this foggy town. When he came out of the building he was in, Klein, who was wearing an ancient triangular hat and dark red coat, carefully came to the entrance of the ancient cathedral. He carefully passed through the ajar door and walked in. The corpses that looked and dressed differently were no different from before. They remained hanging in midair, swaying with the wind and producing the ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria, Klein walked under them as his eyes got accustomed to the dim environment, allowing him to see more. The half-demonic wolf and half-human statue was still standing there without any signs of damage. The obsidian rock and the tin urn were behind the statue without any signs of cracking. Klein first heaved a sigh of relief as he began to observe his surroundings when his gaze froze. In a dark corner stood a gigantic mushroom taller than he was. The mushroom's cap had scarlet red like blood with interspersed white patterns. Its body was formed out of similar tiny mushrooms. Their patterns drew out a face, Mr. A's face. However, Mr. A's eyes were blank. It didn't have the glint that one would call human. There were mushrooms growing from both sides of the stem, forming into long arms. And on the left palm was a thin human-skinned glove. Both parties had seemed to fuse as one. What kind of abomination is that? Klein involuntarily took a step back. He found his knowledge and mysticism completely lacking at that moment in time. He began taking actions to protect himself. While doing so, having not deactivated his corresponding visions, he discovered that the terrifying mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. It appeared to have long been dead, and its only movements were the results of spasming nerves. Suddenly, Klein had a theory. Mr. A, who had been infested with mushrooms, didn't manage to escape in time and had seen the cluster of translucent maggots. He had seen a complete mythical creature, causing his mind to instantly die as his body collapsed completely. This also resulted in a terrifying mutation. It then merged with Senor, who had disintegrated from the curse, becoming a never-seen-before mushroom monster. Also, creeping hunger has been swallowed. This mushroom is really disgusting. I'll throw Frank into the sea if he ever mentions mushrooms again. Klein's eyes darted around slightly as he subconsciously headed for the obsidian rock. He planned on ignoring the mushroom and first escape. At this moment, he found his mind turning adrift. Everything around him seemed to turn into a blur. Suddenly, Klein realized that he was being forcefully pulled into a dream. He immediately escaped the dream and saw the nearly 2-meter-tall mushroom sliding over slowly. In its hand was a great sword that was a combination of scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. It can use sort of lava. Klein didn't hesitate as he opened his mouth and let out a sound. Bang! The extremely penetrative air bullet hit the mushroom, who had slowed down due to it being engaged in controlling dreams. The bullet drilled through its cap, tearing open a huge wound. Underneath the wound was human flesh and tiny spores. They quickly squirmed and restored the body. To think that's possible, Klein felt a strong sense of danger as he hurriedly lunged to the side, rolling several times in the process. The mushroom sped up suddenly as the sword of lava in its hand dragged scarlet and blue flames, cleaving down at the spot Klein had been standing at. It caused the floor tiles to rupture as flames scattered. At this moment, Klein snapped his fingers, igniting the tiny mushrooms that formed the monster. Then, he ran towards the back of the statue in an attempt to obtain the obsidian rock. But finding his thoughts go adrift for a moment, Klein realized that he was going in the wrong direction. He was rushing towards the entrance. It can distort my will. Klein's heart tightened as he noticed through the corner of his eye that the surface of the gigantic mushroom was covered in a layer of frost. The frost had extinguished the soaring scarlet flames. As his thoughts raced, Klein ran towards the door and snapped his fingers, igniting the tree leaves outside. In situations with zero understanding about his enemy, and him having not made any preparations, he believed that a magician had to choose to retreat and avoid dangers for the time being. More importantly, his strongest marionettist powers were useless because the gigantic mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. Scarlet flames soared up like water, enveloping Klein's body. He quickly appeared in the flames outside as he jumped towards the ground. He was just about to distance himself when he heard a howling wind. The red-capped mushroom had come out of the cathedral with the auspices of a strong gust of wind. It can even fly. Klein snapped his fingers, using flaming jump to open up a gap. Meanwhile, he discovered his nose was itching as he wanted to sneeze. I'm also sick. How am I supposed to fight? I don't have any mystical items, and I haven't been able to fully express my strengths as a marionettist. It really is a magical mushroom. Klein was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry when he hid inside a building. Suddenly, he felt his body become somewhat cold as his mind naturally reflected his present appearance. His ancient triangular hat, dark red coat, white pants, and black boots had vanished. All he had on him was a pair of briefs to uphold his last bit of dignity. 30 minutes are up. The spell for summoning Senor from the past has ended. Klein instantly understood the reason as he began thinking. That mushroom, which fused with parts of Admiral of Blood, has likely disappeared as well. Also, in another 15 minutes, the effects of the fish will disappear. It will lack the main element that forms it. Klein couldn't help but curl his lips. He immediately used flames and leaped out. Indeed, as he expected, the gigantic mushroom had a ridiculous hole in part of its stem. Furthermore, it couldn't fix it, causing its speed to slow and become impeded. Come on, let's play hide-and-seek, Klein silently said as he began circling the town's streets, using the flames and buildings to engage in a merry chase with the gigantic mushroom. During this process, the crimson moon didn't turn clear at all. After more than 10 minutes, the terrifying mushroom finally lost its ability to move as it collapsed on the street. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he slowly and carefully approached. He saw that the flesh and blood of the mushroom was gathering together as points of light converged. Soon, all that was left was a thin human skin glove. This, because of the mutation brought about by the Sequence 1 angel, Creeping Hunger fused with Mr. A. It's an upgraded version of Creeping Hunger? Klein bent his back as he carefully picked up the human skin glove. Chapter 844, Which Symbol? Chapter 844, Which Symbol? The thin human skin glove didn't look any different from the past, but Klein didn't dare to be too careless. He used divination to make a crude inspection. Apart from the 5 fingers, the palm and the back of the palm can each graze one more soul. Currently, all 7 spots are filled. It has signs of similar beyonder characteristics fusing together. It also seems to have the powers of flesh and blood magic. The speed of switching souls has sped up significantly. It has to eat a person a day, or else it will eat its owner. Heh, creeping hunger, you are swelling in self-importance again. You need to reflect on yourself above the gray fog later. I'm temporarily unable to obtain any revelations for the rest. After I leave this place, I'll head above the gray fog to make a more accurate divination. Yes, I'm still not sure if there are any other side effects. All I know is that it wouldn't cause me any harm for the time being. Also, Mr. X, who was grazed, wasn't affected. Travelers traveling and door openings still work. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he wore the upgraded creeping hunger. Then, he rushed for the cathedral, hoping to leave as soon as possible. During his merry chase with the gigantic mushroom, he hadn't forgotten to cast an illusion on himself to make him wear a trench coat and a top hat. As for the beyonder characteristic that Senior left behind, Klein suspected that it was likely in the hands of Demoness of Despair Panatia, and this demigod was being hung inside the ancient palace, under the watch of the cluster of maggots. Flesh can be slowly eaten to be stored for the future, but beyonder characteristics will definitely have appeared and taken form after this much time. Even if Demoness of Despair didn't care too much about it, and threw it somewhere, in this place that isn't connected to the spirit world and highly restricts divination, I'm unable to quickly locate it. And in this sort of environment, who knows what sorts of anomalies will happen next? Who knows if that obsidian rock will automatically teleport and disappear? Thus, I need to make every second count and escape as quickly as possible. Klein returned to the cathedral with a clear line of thought. Although he had promised Miss Sharon to sell Signor's beyonder characteristic to Merrick, the ingredient itself was corrupted to begin with, making it difficult to use for the concocting of a potion. Secondly, his safety was a lot more important. It's not like it cannot be resolved. I can just hunt another wraith or find Septon's help to shatter the beyonder characteristic in Merrick's hands and allow it to be purified. This will have to wait until a particular infant is born. Klein mumbled silently as he passed through the swaying corpses and came to the side of the stone statue. Along the way, he found the iron cigar case which he had used to put the marionette in. It hadn't been devoured by the mushroom. Azek's copper whistle and the lone gold coin inside weren't damaged either. Putting these items away, Klein controlled his spirit body threads to prevent himself from floating to the top of the cathedral as he bent down to pick up the obsidian rock. After confirming that the important item wasn't damaged, he felt a lot calmer. He then inspected Zeratol's tin urn. When he opened the lid and took a careful look, Klein's pupils constricted as his gaze instantly froze. All the ashes inside were gone. There wasn't any left inside. Zeratol achieved his goal? Should I say as expected? Klein threw away the thin urn while feeling doubtful. He stood up straight and inserted the obsidian rock into the wall at the back. The wall emitted light again as it turned transparent, allowing people to see the ancient stone slabs outside, the hold walls, and the floating clouds. At the thought of the cluster of terrifying maggots, Klein wasn't in a rush to draw the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook. He first raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. He had ignited a tree outside the cathedral, in preparation to escape with flaming jump the moment something wasn't right. After making his preparations, Klein used his finger and quickly outlined the vertical eye formed of many secret symbols. Compared to the previous one, a crescent and dotted line had swapped places. With his final stroke, the pure beams of light bloomed as they followed the vertical eye's patterns before blasting into a radiant light. The entire cathedral turned ethereal as it shook. Klein felt as though he had instantly arrived at the top, where the corpses were being hung. In front of him was a pair of illusory double doors. Behind the door was a familiar ancient palace. It was where Panatia and the other corpses were gently swaying. Translucent tentacles with strange and mysterious patterns swarmed over and slammed on the door, but were unable to open it. All it could do was use some of its strength to grab Klein's spirit body threads. Klein didn't hesitate to snap his fingers. While pulling at his spirit body threads, he leaped to the flames outside the cathedral. Right on the heels of that, he snapped his fingers repeatedly and flashed away, escaping to the farthest point of the foggy town. After the ethereal feeling of the pitch-black cathedral vanished, Klein paused and frowned. That also leads to the palace with the rampaging angel. The symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook is as much of a trap as Zeratol's was. However, this symbol only seems capable of triggering the door to escape, but it's unable to open it. Otherwise, I might not have been able to escape. It's the symbol for entry, while Zeratol's one was for exiting. What should I do? How do I leave? Klein subconsciously surveyed the ghastly silent town, which was shrouded in fog, and he forced himself to calm down. He began to think about how he could escape. Perhaps that's not the only wall that allows me to leave, but it's unlikely. All these years, there have been batches of people coming to the foggy town. If there are any clues outside the cathedral, They should have long found it. Try another symbol? What should I try? Klein fell into deep thought as he analyzed the intricacies to see if he could be inspired. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight and the Antigonus family. As for the monster on the huge throne in the ancient palace, it's definitely a rampaging angel from the seer pathway, regardless of his identity. Zeratul, who's also involved in this matter, is similarly an angel of the seer pathway. The Antigonus family's notebook, which provided the symbol, is also directly tied to this pathway. Therefore, the correct door opening symbol is likely related to the seer pathway. Sequence 0 of the seer pathway is likely called the Fool. This can be initially confirmed. Otherwise, that owner of the card of blasphemy wouldn't have been lured to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and become a hanger. The Fool. The Fool. As he ruminated over the word, Klein suddenly thought of himself. He thought of the mysterious symbol behind his high-back chair that represented himself above the gray fog. Perhaps I can give it a try? Klein pondered for a few seconds before deciding to make a bold attempt. After all, he was temporarily out of ideas. He returned to the spired cathedral, and under the gaze of the hanged corpses, he walked to the wall behind the statue and picked up the obsidian rock that had fallen once again. After the obsidian rock was inserted, the door rapidly turned transparent. As Klein snapped his fingers to light another tree, he took a deep breath. He drew the Fool's symbol that was made up of the pupilless eye and the partially contorted lines. Soon, he completed the symbol as he found himself feeling anxious. But this time, nothing happened to the transparent door. It doesn't work. Klein's expression turned wry as he suspected that he would be trapped in there, engaging in murderous battles with beyonders who later entered, doing so until he starved to death or was eaten. He shook his head to dispel his emotions of despair. He began running through ideas in search of other clues. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight and is related to the Antigonus family, and they were obliterated by the Church of Evernight. The one who sent me here is the Eraser Angel who's suspected to be the Mother of the Sky. She was active in the basement of the Church of Evernight's St. Samuel Cathedral. The reason why people vanish if they don't sleep at night in the ruins of the Battle of Gods is said to be a result of the remnant aura and strength of a deity from the Evernight domain. Therefore, this is clearly related to the Evernight's authority or even the Evernight goddess. Areas related to the goddess. The more Klein thought about it, the more he lacked confidence. He was originally analyzing the problem from an objective angle, but he had unknowingly changed the way he addressed the Evernight goddess. And this led him to a new idea. Perhaps I can try the label corresponding to the dark sacred emblem or the symbol that represents the goddess in mysticism. Out of options, Klein exhaled and raised his right hand again, drawing the simplified picture of the dark sacred emblem. Suddenly, the watery scene behind the transparent door shook as a change occurred. Although he could still see the ancient palace and the hole-ridden wall, they were very far away and could only be faintly made out. Behind the door was a bottomless cliff with jagged rocks. It was amidst the clouds in the sky with stars and the crimson moon that hadn't been concealed by the sunlight. It was like some part of a mountaintop. It really works. Klein stared at this scene with a dumbfounded expression as he subconsciously reached out with his palms and pushed the door open. There was a cold breeze outside that produced a howl. Klein was just about to take a step out when he fell into thought and paused. Then, he flipped a gold coin and did a divination. He received a revelation that there was no danger outside. Following that, he drew a crimson moon on his chest in a feigned manner. After doing this, Klein stepped out with his right foot and passed through the illusory door. His vision went dark as he saw an endless night and resplendent stars. Following that, he found himself on a mountaintop. Apart from the unmelted snow, jagged rocks, and morning sunlight, there was nothing. I'm out. I'm safe. Klein didn't observe his surroundings as he directly used creeping hunger to turn transparent as he attempted using traveling. If this succeeded, it would mean that he had escaped the foggy town and returned to the real world. He could then leave the location he was at to avoid any danger. If he were to fail, he would quickly take note of the situation and be wary of any sudden attacks. After a moment, Klein's body turned faint as he vanished from the spot. The colors in front of him saturated as countless, indescribable shadows appeared. He had succeeded in entering the spirit world. Chapter 845, Return. It really is the spirit world. Klein was delighted as he inwardly muttered to himself. Without needing further confirmation, his spirituality and spiritual perception had told him that this was the real spirit world. And this meant that he had returned to the real world, the place with all kinds of delicacies. I nearly cried tears of joy. Klein inwardly made a self-deprecating comment as he considered where he was supposed to head to next. From the position of the stars, moon, and sun, it's still morning. If there's no time difference between the real world and the foggy town, it's at most 7:30 a.m. or maybe earlier. At this point, the servants must have discovered the disappearance of their mate, and they would definitely inform the priests and bishops. Even if they have received the corresponding training and would report to their superiors according to the protocol, they will have to first eliminate the possibility that someone was skiving away or having a stomachache. They would need more than 10 minutes before confirming this and begin taking the necessary actions. And after the report to their superiors, the priests and bishops wouldn't be able to instantly tell the severity of the matter. They would only believe that the servant had escaped, and they wouldn't quickly connect this matter to the keepers. After they do a divination or investigation to figure out the truth, it would be 20 to 30 minutes later. That also means that they likely haven't begun their search in the surrounding area to find the intruder. The identity of Dwayne Dantes hasn't been exposed yet. If the Bizarro sorcerer potion formula given by Zeradol is real, then the identity of Dwayne Dantes still has many uses. If I can still keep the identity going, I should try harder to not abandon it. Besides, the only things that I'm wearing, which are real, are my glove and underwear. If I head elsewhere, I'll be a pervert. Klein already had a choice he was leaning towards. He took out the iron cigar case, which appeared to be inside his pocket, but was actually lodged under a rubber band. He opened it and took out the gold coin inside. Returning to 160 Buckland Street is dangerous, Klein muttered 7 times. And with a flick, he saw it slowly spin in the spirit world, wobbling up and down, left and right, before landing on his palm. This time, it was tails, indicating a negative response. Klein nodded indiscernibly and immediately traveled towards Backland. After 3 stops, his figure finally appeared in his room at 160 Buckland Street. The curtains were drawn tightly, and it was dim. It was very suitable for sleeping. And on the bed, Dwayne Dantes was lying on the bed facing up. His hands were grabbing the ends of the blanket near his neck. From the looks of it, the investigation hasn't reached me. This appearance is ridiculous. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and saw Dwayne Dantes dissipate and turn into a palm-sized mirror. Water ripples appeared on the mirror's surface as silver light bloomed and turned into Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, did you encounter something? Your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, failed to sense you before. It wasn't anything important, Klein answered perfunctorily. This made him confirm that a Rhodes was unable to pry into the secrets that happened in the foggy town. After all, this fellow was able to present the environment where the rampaging Zeradol was. It really is related to the authorities of a deity? Klein's mind stirred as he asked, did anyone look for me? No, no one came to disturb you. The silver on the mirror's surface changed and produced new words. Klein felt truly relieved as he said to a Rhodes, you may leave. I'll summon you again if needed. All right, Master. Goodbye, Master. Like before, a Rhodes produced a drawing of a hand waving on the mirror. After the aqueous light vanished, the mirror was restored to normal. Klein walked to the bedside and pulled out the pajamas underneath and wore it. Then, he took out candles and other items before entering the bathroom. He set up a sacrificial ritual, preparing to send creeping hunger, Azek's copper whistle, the iron cigar case, and the various mysticism materials above the gray fog to avoid any investigations he might face. After doing all of this, Klein didn't delay and sat at the full seat. He conjured the Bizarro sorcerer's potion formula in front of him. Sequence 4, Bizarro sorcerer. Main ingredient, Bizarro Bane's main eye, the true soul body of a spirit world plunderer. Supplementary ingredients, 200 milliliters of a Bizarro Bane's blood, 30 grams of a spirit world plunderer, 10 grams of red hair birch bark, 1 segment of golden grapevines, fingernail-sized self-made rubber mask. Advancement ritual, relying on one's strength and strategy, orchestrate a grand performance before many spectators to kill a beyonder creature at the level of a demigod. Then, at the end of the performance, consume the potion. Klein didn't consider what this ritual actually meant. Beneath the potion formula, he wrote a corresponding statement. Following that, he summoned a spirit pendulum from the junk pile. Holding it in his left hand, he began a divination. Before long, Klein opened his eyes and saw the dangling topaz rotating clockwise. This meant that the Bizarro sorcerer potion formula he had was genuine. Phew. Klein exhaled as he took the opportunity to determine what kind of changes creeping hunger had experienced, as well as what the various negative side effects were. After a dream divination and several direct attempts, he figured out the exact situation in less than 2 minutes. Creeping hunger could now graze 7 souls. During each grazing process, it could obtain 2 or 3 beyonder powers. One of them can be chosen by the wearer. There are currently 8 souls inside creeping hunger. The others completely dissipated from the mutation brought about by the Attendant of Mysteries. And due to the excessive number of souls, it caused a congestion, making some of the powers unusable. 1 soul needs to be released to restore it back to normal. At present, the first of the 8 souls is Baron of Corruption, which is Wormtongue Mither. He fused with the beyonder characteristics of the same pathway that Mr. A had grazed. Apart from distortion and bribe, weaken, There's another area of effect beyond her power called corrosion. It can turn the hearts of people within 10 meters dark and greedy, making them make irrational choices. The second is desire apostle Curtius. He fused with Mr. A's devil and replaced danger premonition, which requires advanced activation before being useful, with sulfur fireball. And language of foulness, slow and sword of lava have been enhanced. Third is traveler, Mr. X Louis Veen. He fused with Mr. A's scribe. While keeping traveling and door opening, it has obtained the beyonder power of record. However, there's a change. It's unable to record ordinary beyonder powers, and it can only be used against targets at the demigod level. The chance of success has been increased. Although it's still very troublesome, 8 times or so would be needed as long as I'm not too unlucky. In addition, it cannot record more than 2 demigod-level beyonder powers, and cannot exceed sequence 3. Fourth is zombie Mavati. There hasn't been any change. It's still the original zombie strength, ice control, and zombie manipulation. Fifth is an unknown demoness of affliction. She can give the user a rather powerful sense of charm. In addition, one's appearance would receive an adjustment to a certain degree. In addition, she can provide an ailment that covers 50 meters. Creatures within that range will slowly be infected, and the effects slowly become severe. In the beginning, it might be oversensitive skin, a cold, or a fever. But 20 to 30 seconds later, it might very well turn into serious illnesses like pneumonia. After 2 or 3 minutes, one can suddenly suffer cardiac arrest or a brain aneurysm. Sixth is an unknown wind blast. There are 3 beyonder powers: short-distance flight, dive, and water control. Seventh is an unknown soul assurer with the 2 beyonder powers of forcefully pulling one into a dream and causing a spirit body to sleep. Eighth is an unknown doctor with the 3 beyonder powers of distinguishing the time, treatment of serious ailments, and stitching souls. At the same time, creeping hunger itself has shadow lurking and flesh bomb. Furthermore, it has the chance and strength to barely graze a sequence 4 saint. It has instantly become so much stronger. As Klein was secretly delighted, he also frowned at the negative side effects. Now, creeping hunger had to eat a living person every day, otherwise it would devour the wearer. At the same time, it would praise the true creator from time to time in the wearer's mind. It would bring about chaotic thoughts and a headache. Apart from those 2, it was also still afraid of mushrooms. No powers could be used if mushrooms appeared within 5 meters of it. To randomly praise the true creator is really troublesome. Same for eating a living person every day. I'll first throw it above the gray fog and let it calm down for a few days. Perhaps there might be some changes. If that really doesn't work, I can only write to Mr. Azek. Klein quickly made up his mind and didn't hesitate to release the soul assurer's soul. He also planned on swapping the wind blessed and doctor later. The demoness of affliction depended on the circumstances. To the side of the bronze table, the soul assurer's spirit surfaced. But due to the mutation, it couldn't be maintained once it lost its host. It rapidly dissipated. His beyonder characteristic was produced. It was entirely black in color. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky with embedded stars. After doing this, Klein didn't hesitate to throw creeping hunger and the other items into the junk pile. He then quickly returned to the real world, ended the ceremony, and cleared up any traces. Following that, he washed his face and brushed his teeth to make Dwayne Dantes look sharp. After leaving the bathroom, Klein, in his pajamas, walked to the door with his usual expression. He pulled open the door and said to his valet outside, "Prepare a set of clothes that's suitable for home wear." "Yes, sir." Richardson didn't ask why as he immediately walked to the wardrobe. Only at this point, with him seeing his servants back, did Klein confirm that he was out of harm's way and had returned back to his normal life. Chapter 846, Find the Target. St. Samuel Cathedral, behind Cheney's Gate. Backlund Archbishop, St. Anthony, stood at the staircase connecting the 2 different stories and watched as the Nighthawk deacons rushed about. Many of them wore red gloves. As a spokesperson for the Church of Evernight in the kingdom's capital, St. Anthony had a clean-shaven face. His face didn't betray his mood, and his deep black eyes similarly hid any upheavals he had. But everyone who passed by him would feel their souls tremble as an indescribable sense of horror arose in their hearts. "Your Grace, an inventory count has been made. None of the mysticism ingredients are missing, including the potion main ingredients and beyonder characteristics. Your Grace, all the potion formulas are in their original locations. It can be preliminarily determined that no one had gone through them in the last 8 hours. Your Grace, all of the prisoners imprisoned on the first level are accounted for. None of them escaped, nor did anyone pass away. Your Grace, none of the information or books suffered any damage or were moved. Your Grace, the Grade 2 and Grade 3 sealed artifacts are all present. None of them have been taken away. Your Grace, the 3 Grade 1 sealed artifacts remain in their sealed states. None of them show signs of having left their confines. Your Grace, The core seal remains intact and didn't suffer any damage. Your Grace, it has been confirmed that there are no new items in here. There are no remnant setups that bring about danger. Your Grace, we didn't find the enemy who disguised himself as a keeper. He seems to have evaporated into thin air. One deacon after another came over to make a report as the matter gradually turned somewhat odd. They found it unimaginable that a scheming and powerful beyonder would take such an immense risk and set up such a tight plan and use all kinds of means to pass through Cheney's gate. Yet, nothing was taken, and the perpetrator had left after circling the area once. This made it seem like the person was only trying to prove themselves, or it was someone who had specially come to find flaws in the surveillance of Cheney's gate for the church. The deacon who led a Red Gloves team surveyed the area and deliberated as he came up with a theory. Your Grace, could it be the requirements of an advancement ritual of some sequence? Having been on a mission to capture devils, he was accustomed to making such guesses. And from sequence 5, different pathways and different sequences had different advancement rituals. The ones that the Church of Evernight was aware of wasn't a large number. If that were the case, Soist could already see the infiltrator's mockery grin that said, "I'm free to go anywhere, even if it's the Church of Evernight's Cheney's gate." It's no different from a department store. Those Nighthawks will only become raged after the matter, feeling useless. He has to be caught. Soist silently clenched his red-gloved hand. St. Anthony was just about to say something when Nighthawk Deacon, Daily Simone, raised a second possibility. Perhaps the infiltrator had attempted to take some sealed artifact away and suffered the negative effects. He died on the spot and was cleanly devoured. St. Anthony nodded in thought and said, "I'll head to basement 3 to take a look." With that said, he steadily walked to basement 2, and in a secret location, activated the path to basement 3. The other deacons were lacking in rank or clearance, so all they could do was wait in their spots. St. Anthony quickly arrived at basement 3, which didn't span too big an area. He basically confirmed that sealed artifacts 1 to 29 and 1 to 80 hadn't undergone any abnormal changes. Following the strict protocols, he observed 1 to 80 with 1 to 29 and found 0 to 17 lying inside with eyes half open, just like always. During this process, St. Anthony approached thrice and opened a distance from it thrice. Sometimes, he changed where he stood, and at other times, he cloaked himself in the darkness of the night. He didn't dare skip the necessary steps. Even as a saint, he didn't dare belittle any of the items in here. Ignoring the powers that would break out of its vessel, temporarily causing the seal on 0 to 17, even 1 to 29 and 1 to 80, which were rather dangerous items, to become ineffective. St. Anthony didn't wish to degenerate into an amnesiac who had to relearn how to eat and drink, much less become part of a dream that existed between reality and illusions. There's nothing wrong. Anthony heaved a silent sigh of relief. He began restoring the 2 sealed artifacts to their original states. A few minutes later, the Nighthawk deacons saw the Archbishop return. The infiltrator might have died from touching a sealed artifact, St. Anthony said, his pronunciation of died being somewhat muffled. He didn't give any additional explanations as he instructed. Regardless, this matter needs to be investigated. The infiltrator might have a partner. To be able to infiltrate St. Samuel Cathedral without causing a stir, it means that the target is very familiar with this place and is familiar with the recent duty shifts of the keepers. He's very familiar with how Nighthawks handle and take over matters, and has the ability or an item to change his appearance. In addition, he had obtained the help from a beyonder with a sacred Evernight pathway item or has one himself. Putting all these conditions together, investigate the servants and priests to see if they have encountered any indistinct spirit channeling or enticement. Check if the bishops have betrayed the goddess, as well as the believers who have recently come to the cathedral on a regular basis. At the same time, check on all the believers and the surroundings of their residences. Perhaps they had unexpectedly divulged something and had something stolen. I'll carry out the investigations pertaining to you. Also, find the missing servant and see if there are any clues. Yes, Your Grace, Soist and the other Nighthawk deacons answered in unison. In the office with a tense mood, Leonard Mitchell wasn't having his feet up on the table like usual. He sat very properly and wore a rather solemn expression. This was the second time he had encountered a matter that targeted items behind Cheney's gate. It invoked the memories that he buried deep inside his heart. And more importantly, he had encountered the fake keeper before without realizing the problem. If I were a little stronger and had better observation skills, perhaps it might not have. Leonard Mitchell's lips pursed tightly as he looked at the documents in front of him, but he wasn't reading a single word. This continued until his teammates entered. That keeper has awoken. He didn't see the infiltrator and only knew that he encountered the possession ability of a wraith. The red glove that entered said to everyone in the room, "How can a wraith move about inside the cathedral?" Many red gloves raised the question, but no one had an answer. Perhaps that wraith believes in the goddess. Leonard mumbled inwardly. While no one was paying attention to him in the corner, He suppressed his voice and seemed to mutter, "Old man, didn't you discover anything abnormal back then?" The slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. "It's not like I'll observe the outside world all the time, especially when I'm near Cheney's Gate." Leonard didn't dare ask further as he joined in the discussion with his teammates. Before long, the Red Gloves team captain, Soest, entered the room and threw a stack of dossiers on the desk. "These are the targets we need to investigate. The bishops have provided the names of the believers who have frequently come to the cathedral recently." Leonard glanced at it, and towards the back was a dossier with a familiar name, Duane Dantes. This old fellow that survived from the Fourth Epoch came to a nearby street for less than 2 months, and Cheney's Gate was infiltrated? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Besides, he has been frequently coming to St. Samuel Cathedral. He might be observing the situation and figuring out the patterns. Old man's excuse wasn't too convincing, but if the infiltrator was Duane Dantes, then everything makes sense. He's afraid that he would expose himself and pretended not to discover anything abnormal. Leonard's mind instantly filled with many ideas as he asked in deliberation, "Captain Soest, what did the infiltrator take? What clues did he leave behind?" Soest surveyed the room and said, "Nothing was taken or left behind. It was like no one stepped inside. His Grace suspects that he died or was vaporized from contact with some sealed artifact. Our priority is to find his partner. No, Duane Dantes wouldn't die that easily. He's a monster who has lived since the Fourth Epoch. However, why did he carry out the infiltration?" Leonard frowned slightly as he hesitated for a moment. Then he proactively included Duane Dantes into the investigation targets for himself and 2 other teammates. After the Red Gloves and local Nighthawks began taking action, Leonard found an excuse to head to the washroom first. He suppressed his voice and asked, "What are your thoughts about Duane Dantes? He didn't expose his parasite's lie." The elderly voice chuckled and said, "Didn't I tell you? I don't know much about him. I only know that there's something special about him. His aura has something ancient about it. However, the case you previously investigated gave me some inspiration. I suspect that Duane Dantes might be related to that matter. He might be a proxy of some existence." "What matter? Which existence?" Leonard muttered softly in surprise. In his mind, the ancient voice replied with an odd tone, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." 160 Buckland Street. Klein had his breakfast and returned to the balcony's half-open room. He sat in his reclining chair and raised his hand to rub his temples. After his tense mood subsided, Klein discovered that his mind had turned somewhat adrift. He would often see the hanging corpses in the ancient cathedral, as well as the cluster of translucent maggots that remained unclear in his deepest memories. Illusory voices would seem to constantly echo in his ears. Hornacis. Phlegria. Although I had quickly cut the connection with my marionette, I had suffered some of the effects. My soul has been slightly corrupted, as expected of a real mythical creature. After the preliminary investigations are done, I'll have to find a way to resolve the remnant problems." Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief and used cogitation to calm himself. Chapter 847. The name hidden in the dossiers. A carriage passed by Buckland Street as Leonard Mitchell and 2 Red Gloves teammates discussed the target they were investigating this time, Duane Dantes. "I still haven't had any direct contact with this gentleman. I've only investigated his servants and neighbors." Cindy, who had long wine-red hair, introduced her findings. "For now, it has been confirmed that Duane Dantes has acted the same since last night to this morning. He went to his bedroom to sleep at 11 and finished washing up at 7:30 in the morning. At times, he would have some supper and in the day after midnight. At times, he would wake up before 7 and head out for a stroll, but that's not the norm." Another Red Glove, Bob, nodded and said, "From this point of view, there's nothing wrong with Duane Dantes." Leonard Mitchell, who sat in a seemingly casual manner, immediately said with a smile, "But the reverse can also be true. According to what we've currently gathered, the missing servant was likely replaced between 11:20 and 11:35 last night. The infiltrator entered Cheney's Gate at 6 in the morning, and we discovered the problem at 7:20 a.m. without finding the target. It can thus be said that during the infiltration, Duane Dantes was sleeping and lacked an alibi." "What you say makes sense." Cindy glanced at Leonard in surprise. Her impression of this teammate of hers was one who often had a judgment or question that pointed at the core of the problem. However, he seldom described his logic in great detail. He was more like a desultory poet who occasionally had epiphanies. Bob, who had a sharp chin, frowned as he shook his head. "If that's the case, everyone on this name list cannot be cleared of suspicion. They were sleeping with no one watching them. Even if they have wives or husbands, they would similarly be sleeping at such times. Also, I don't believe an infiltrator would be so bold. He had already entered Cheney's Gate and managed to successfully escape, completing an unimaginable feat. Yet, he stays nearby and hasn't abandoned his identity or gone far away. How is this possible? The risk involved cannot be predicted unless he's also planning something else." Or he can't bear to part with certain things. But what can compare with infiltrating Chinese gate? What can compare with those sealed artifacts, ingredients, and formulas? If I didn't know that Dwayne Dantes was problematic in the first place, I would have come to the same conclusion. Leonard had already thought of an explanation as he crossed his right leg. I'm just saying why we can't so easily strike off Dwayne Dantes from the suspects. Besides, Captain Soist has said it. The infiltrator might have already died behind Cheney's gate. Even if Dwayne Dantes isn't involved, he might very well be an accomplice. Don't you find it too much of a coincidence? He moved in for less than 2 months, and the church encountered something that might never happen in centuries. Besides, he has been visiting St. Samuel Cathedral too frequently. He had ample opportunities to figure out the corresponding situation. Also, during this period of time, there was a strange sewer explosion along Buckland Street. Cindy bunched up her long, wine-red hair and said, "You've convinced me. This should be a target that we put our focus on." Bob pulled at the ends of his left palm's red glove and said, "There are indeed many coincidences. However, coincidences might not be equivalent to problems. Even if Dwayne Dantes goes to the cathedral daily and listens to the bishop's preachings, all he could do is understand the layout and not obtain deeper information, such as when the keepers will head to Cheney's Gate and how the handover is done with the Nighthawks. Therefore, he's more likely to be one of the accomplices," Leonard said with a shrug. He similarly didn't understand how Dwayne Dantes would understand the internal protocols of the Nighthawks so well. Cindy echoed, "Regardless, we have to do a deeper investigation. Shall we wait till noon and directly enter Dwayne Dantes' dream to question him? He has the habit of taking afternoon naps." Leonard raised his right hand and waved it gently. "There's no need to be in such a hurry. It's not like we've never done any routine inspections in the past or entered his dreams, but we didn't discover anything wrong. If there really is nothing wrong with him, we wouldn't gain anything from entering his dream again. If there's a problem with him, the fact that he didn't expose himself back then means he has the means to resist an inquiry during the dream. We will still be fooled by him if we enter his dream again. Therefore, we should monitor him and see what kind of people he interacts with, so as to prevent him from escaping while waiting for Desi's response about this tycoon's true identity. Once we discover any clues, we will request to use a higher-level investigation method than questioning him in dreams." Cindy was once again surprised as she couldn't help but joke. "It's rare to see you analyze the situation so seriously." Furthermore, his thought processes were extremely clear. Leonard fell silent and gave a self-deprecating comment. "Perhaps it's because I've encountered something similar." Instantly, Cindy felt that Leonard's green eyes had turned darker. She didn't speak further. "Let's take turns to monitor Dwayne Dantes. I'll go first." "All right." Leonard nodded and turned to Bob. "Get the case files on the sewer explosion. Let's see if we can discover any problems. I'll head back to read through the corresponding dossiers and see if there are any other abnormalities on this street." After splitting the work, the 3 red gloves began their work. Leonard returned to St. Samuel Cathedral's basement and obtained the information involving Buckland Street and the cases that the Aurora Order had actively or passively involved themselves in for the past 3 years. The latter was something that sparked off the clue provided by the parasite in him. It gave him an idea. Since the Fool's existence and the corresponding honorific name initially came from the Aurora Order, it means that the Aurora Order was involved in something or had suffered some setbacks. It might be related to the organization that believes in the Fool. After returning to the office, Leonard held back his desultory attitude as he very seriously read through the thick dossiers. In the dossiers related to the Aurora Order, there was the Lenivas case he was most familiar with. This true creator's descent had failed terribly because of some baffling report. A mysterious person had appeared to kill the main criminal. He was suspected to be related to hero bandit Black Emperor. As he targeted evil criminals, he would scatter tarot cards over the target's corpse. That person wasn't able to do it for Desire Apostle Jason Beria only because Leonard had rushed over too quickly. Similarly, Leonard once again saw the name, Sherlock Moriarty, appear in the periphery of the case. Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at the gathering he convened. There were traces of powers at the demigod level left at the scene. At this point in time, Dwayne Dantes had already arrived in Backland. It matches perfectly. Aurora Order's Mr. A and the Demonist sect cooperated to create the Great Smog of Backland. This person vanished as a result. Aurora Order's Mr. A had assassinated the Intis ambassador. Leonard read case after case, but he didn't find anything of use. He rubbed his temples and decided to attack it from a different angle. He began from the cases related to hero bandit Black Emperor. Lenivas case. First murder scene with the tarot cards thrown as a ritual. And the Fool is the beginning of the tarot cards. Capham's case. From the strength and level showcased by hero bandit Black Emperor, he won't and wouldn't mimic others. He similarly scattered tarot cards on the corpse. Desire Apostle Jason Beria. I saw a hero bandit Black Emperor with my own eyes, preventing him from scattering the cards in time. Apart from major events and evil criminals, what other connection do these three cases have? Leonard had previously considered the relevant questions and was certain that Detective Sherlock Moriarty had been partially involved in the Lenevis and Capham cases. Then what about the Desire Apostle case? Leonard found the addendum and began leafing through them. Finally, he spotted a line in an inconspicuous spot. People attacked involved Isengard Stanton, Sherlock Moriarty. Leonard's expression slowly turned excited as though he had discovered a breakthrough. He flipped through the Aurora Order dossier and didn't miss out any of the names involved. He kept expanding his search and requested for all the dossiers that involved every name. Aurora orders Mr. A assassinated the Intis ambassador. The Intis ambassador was in charge of the conflict over the difference engine manuscripts. The clues to the manuscripts came from a spy who usually acted as a private detective. It is reported that another private detective was embroiled in this matter and had nearly been killed by a gang member under the command of the Intis ambassador. Another private detective. Leonard suddenly stood up as he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed for the police station that handled the case back then. Although most of the dossiers had been taken away by MI9, Leonard still found the name of the person who had made the police report. Sherlock Moriarty. I now have reason to believe that this great detective was also involved in the Great Smog of Backlund. Among the various people who are involved, his name appears, right at the periphery of the matter. He and Dwayne Dantes all belong to a secret organization that believes in the Fool. Leonard thought as the corners of his lips curled up. He decided to immediately search for more information to verify his conjecture. 160 Backlund Street, inside the master bedroom. Klein didn't have any Nighthawks enter his dream during his afternoon nap, but he once again returned to the foggy town. He saw Demoness of Despair Panatia, with her smile showcasing blood-colored flesh in between the gaps of her teeth. He saw her slowly being hung up as her eyes rolled back in despair before her head drooped down. The hung corpses, the horrifying gigantic mushroom, the cluster of countless translucent maggots kept appearing one after another, waking Klein up from his dream. As he rubbed his temples, Klein found that his mind was in a terrible condition. And this wasn't a problem that could be resolved by the gray fog. He fell into deep thought and entered his bathroom and arrived above the gray fog. He conjured Gehrman and made him pray. Please pass on my question to Miss Justice about when she will be free. I wish to receive some psychotherapy. Chapter 848. Getting caught in the crossfire. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey had just tried on 3 selections of evening gowns today, and she was sitting on a cushioned chair, wondering how they could be matched with her accessories and which one she was more inclined towards. She also pondered over her mother's opinion. At this moment, she suddenly saw an endless grayish-white and a blurry figure watching down at everything from high above appear before her eyes. Immediately after that, she saw another figure. It was a praying figure that had been shrouded by the gray fog. Her ears resounded with the corresponding words. Instead of being alarmed, Audrey was delighted. Her unease and worry that there wasn't a tarot gathering today was instantly quelled. As expected, it was nothing. Oh, Mr. World really has a psychological problem. He must have been under immense stress recently. It's no wonder he booked an appointment in advance. Audrey sighed as she began to consider when she was free. As she pondered, she scanned the maids who were busy in her room and the golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting by the door. Audrey's lips curled up slightly in an irresistible manner as she bowed her head and secretly prayed in response. Please tell Mr. World that I'm currently free. He can determine the time and location. As long as it's not night time and doesn't exceed the boroughs west of Backlund. In regards to this, the golden retriever who was observing the maid's work seemed to sense someone looking at her. She suspiciously turned her head and looked in Audrey's direction. However, it failed to discover any problems. Above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. She's free at any time. Periods when it's convenient to head out. Won't leave places she's familiar with. Klein rubbed his temples as he interpreted Miss Justice's reply. His first reaction was that it was best done today or tomorrow, and to have her determine the location. Then, he could use creeping hunger to teleport there, but he soon thought of a problem. Dwayne Dantes was part of the Nighthawks investigations. It was very possible that he was being monitored. Therefore, rashly traveling could easily expose him. Wait a few days, or... Klein seriously thought about it as he conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and prayed once again. Please inform Miss Justice that let's do it today. Above the gray fog. Audrey's eyes widened. She found that the answer provided by Mr. World exceeded her expectations. How was she supposed to get Susie to be her stand-in? Besides, there are many details that I'm unable to see or clearly sense while inside Mr. Fool's palace. It will seriously hamper any psychotherapy. Audrey calmed her sense of alarm as she posed her doubts from a position of viability and requested Mr. Fool to pass it on to Mr. World. Before long, she received a reply again. I will request Mr. Fool to remove those restrictions. We'll use other means to conceal our true appearances. That can be done? This is the special treatment one gets from being Mr. Fool's blessed? Our continuous communication is almost like a conversation. I've really troubled Mr. Fool, and he seems to almost allow us to indulge in it. Audrey's thoughts raced as she stopped finding excuses. All right, let's do it between 11:30 to 12:30 tonight. She didn't believe that she would have anywhere to be alone before the end of her birthday ball. At the same time, in a building at 39 Buckland Street, Hazel was looking at the selected evening gown in boredom as she listened to her mother's repeated exhortations. She was to accompany her parents to attend Miss Audrey Hall's birthday ball. Just as Hazel's thoughts were wandering and her mind gradually turning blank, she saw a grayish-white rat appear by the door. It was frantically waving its paws. Hazel patiently listened to her mother repeat herself one more time before finding an excuse to return to her bedroom. After she closed and locked her door, the grayish-white rat appeared from somewhere and arrived by her feet. It sat there in a rather comical manner. I've discovered something wrong with the surroundings. The rat had sent vibrations in the air to speak with human words. Hazel wasn't surprised at that as she asked in puzzlement, "What's wrong?" The grayish-white rat raised its right forepaw and pointed out the window. "There are beyonders from the Church of Evernight investigating this street. It's at a rather large scale. What are they looking for?" Hazel asked with a slight frown. The grayish-white rat slowly inhaled and said, "How would I know? But it's definitely something very serious. This way, they might very well discover something wrong with you." Hazel asked, feeling somewhat worried and confused. How did they make the discovery? Weren't the clues in the sewers blasted away? Weren't the corresponding problems dealt with? The grayish-white was momentarily unsure about what to say. A few seconds later, it vaguely replied, "Official Beyonders have plenty of strange but effective investigation methods. In short, I'll have to deal with your dream. This is where it's easiest to divulge things." Hazel looked down at the rat as her knitted brows relaxed. "All right then, don't look so unwilling. It wasn't easy for me to accumulate this bit of strength, and now it's going to waste once again. Is this street cursed? First it was that demoness with a strange condition. Following that hero bandit Black Emperor appeared. Now, there's some baffling and unknown situation that made the Nighthawks pay serious attention to this street." The grayish-white rat squeaked in frustration. At 7:30 in the evening, Hazel accompanied her parents, Member of Parliament Mocked and Lady Rihanna, to Empress Borough and entered the Hall family's residence. As it was a birthday ball today, she didn't manage to directly meet Miss Audrey Hall. All she did was quietly stay by her parents' side as they exchanged pleasantries with Earl Hall, Lady Caitlin, and Lord Hibbert Hall. To her, these respected aristocrats were, in essence, the same as commoners. Therefore, she didn't appear notably reserved. Her actions and tone were rather liberal. If it wasn't because of her mother's repeated exhortations, Hazel even believed that the beautiful dance floor, the murals with high artistic value, and the elegant and outstanding statues were more worthy of respect. As she smiled at the people she knew and didn't know, Hazel finally waited until the ball began. She saw the star of tonight's show. Miss Audrey Hall held the arms of the Earl and Earl's wife as she walked out of the room on the second floor before arriving at the railings that faced the dance floor. Hazel scanned her and habitually ignored her appearance as she observed the matching of her gown and accessories. However, her gaze wasn't able to move away. On the chandelier hanging high above, whale oil candles produced light that came with dreamy colors. When shining on the 18-year-old Audrey, it made her emerald-like eyes, pure and indescribable face, and lustrous gold hair seem to glow. It made her gown and accessories lose their luster. Hazel was momentarily caught in a daze. She failed to hear what Earl Hall had said until the melody filled the floor as she snapped out of her daze when Audrey Hall began the opening dance with the Earl. The always proud her had suddenly felt a little inferior. She felt that even if this striking lady didn't possess any beyond her powers, there was no way Audrey was inferior to her. Hazel pursed her lips and looked around. She realized that everyone's gaze had been grabbed. The only difference was that they all had different feelings about the situation. Phew. Hazel heaved a sigh of relief. That night, she didn't act that arrogantly again. However, she yearned to leave at every minute of the night. She wanted to head home to busy herself with her matters to obtain more magical and powerful abilities. Finally, the ball came to an end as Hazel's family bade farewell to the family and walked to the door. On the way out, Hazel couldn't help but look back. She saw Miss Audrey standing along the sides of the dance floor with a faint and beautiful smile as she expressed her gratitude to each and every guest that was about to leave. She seemed to remain under the spotlight. After the end of the birthday ball, Audrey took off her accessories and changed into her sleeping gown before entering her bathroom. As she looked at the white steam emanate with her bathrobe beside her, Audrey wasn't in a rush to soak herself inside. She first sat in the corner and prayed to Mr. Fool to indicate that she was ready. In about 10 seconds, She saw crimson light surge at her like a tidal wave, drowning her. Above the gray fog, Audrey appeared by the side of the long bronze table. This time, she didn't see Mr. Fool, who was enshrouded in gray fog. She discovered an ancient confessional. It was a brown crate that was 1.5 times the height of a person. There were doors on both sides, and a wooden plank separated the area in between them. I thought Mr. World would request Mr. Fool to conjure a wall, which we will use to communicate across. Although it's essentially the same, a confessional is cramped and dark. He really doesn't know how to consider a lady's feelings. Yes, I would find it odd if Mr. World did that. As Audrey suffused a smile, she walked to the ajar door of the confessional. She bent her back and entered before sitting down with her legs bent sideways. After closing the wooden door, Audrey, who was treating a patient in the true sense of the word for the first time, suddenly felt a little excited. Immersed in darkness, the environment and her mood made her loosen up from the many rules she had to abide by. She curled her lips and reached out her fingers and gently tapped on the wooden partition. "Hello, Mr. World, are you there?" Sitting cross-legged opposite her, Klein was infected by Miss Justice's cheerful tone. His emotions relaxed as he said, "You may begin." This time, he didn't use the gray fog to enshroud himself, but had turned himself into Gehrman Sparrow. Indeed, Mr. World's mental state isn't too good. He's too tense and worried. Audrey sensed him first and then used a psychiatrist's placate. A gentle, invisible wave emanated over as Klein instantly felt a cool, refreshing morning breeze blow at him during a hot summer day. The frustrations and feverish feelings within him suddenly vanished. Seeing Mr. World having made an obvious recovery, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked softly, "Have you had any nightmares lately?" Chapter 849, Consultation Fees. Nightmare? Klein deliberated for 2 seconds and said, "Yes. I dream of a town that's enshrouded in fog. The crimson moon in the sky would be clear and blurred at random. In the middle of the town is a black cathedral. Corpses are hung up inside. They wear clothes from different eras as they sway in the wind and produce strange sounds. Apart from that, there's a beautiful lady whose gaps in her teeth were filled with blood-colored human flesh, a mushroom man formed of countless tiny mushrooms. To treat his psychological problems, Klein reconstructed his dream in a rather complete manner. However, he didn't say that he had encountered those things in reality, nor divulge that he knew the beautiful lady's identity and the strange mushroom's origins. At the same time, he hid the existence of the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeratul. Audrey listened intently and seriously. Based on her beyonder intuition and knowledge from mysticism and psychological, she said as she contemplated, "Mr. World, I can imagine such a terrifying and sinister dream. I can also experience the immense horror that it brings you." Seeing that there wasn't any rebuttal from the other side of the wooden partition, Audrey grew in confidence. She silently did another round of placate and began guiding. The horror that appears in dreams will often stem from feelings hidden deep in one's heart. And there are only 2 sources of horror in one's heart. One is the unknown, and the second is what cannot be resisted. The terrifying things you see in your dream are only superficial. What you are really afraid of is what they represent and symbolize, the truth hidden behind them. As she spoke, Audrey suddenly asked, "What is it?" Klein was gradually relaxing and scrutinizing himself as he took in Miss Justice's gentle and sweet voice. When he suddenly heard this question, he subconsciously answered, "The existence that created all of that." He paused and hesitantly added, "They are both an unknown and also cannot be resisted." At this point, Klein knew why he was having nightmares, as well as the true reason for his terrible mental state. He instinctively felt horrified over certain matters and instinctively had latent negative emotions. The former included the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeratul's terrifying performance. There was also the Eraser Angel's baffling actions and the fact that using the dark sacred emblem was the key to opening the door. They separately created a mood of despair that seemed impossible to resist, as well as the feeling of not knowing who was friend or foe, and their ploys. Yes, I'm fearful that the cluster of translucent maggots that's suspected to be a sequence one attendant of mysteries of the seer pathway. I'm fearful of Zeratul, who has accomplished an unknown objective by opening the door. I'm fearful of the goddess whose thoughts are an unknown, as well as the Eraser Angel. Klein slowly exhaled as he admitted his fears. Audrey used placate once again and discovered that Mr. World's tense mind had essentially relaxed. She was delighted as she boldly said, "One of the biggest sources of fear is a lack of confidence. Try recalling if you had any oversight or had committed any mistakes in the related matter. This results in your spirit repeatedly warning you and hinting to you. It eventually transformed into part of the nightmare. Oversight and mistakes. Warning from my spirit." Klein pondered over Miss Justice's words and seriously began organizing the details of the matters that resulted in his horror. Soon, his expression turned heavy, bit by bit, as he discovered a problem. I swore an oath with the goddess bearing witness via the holy sword. Although I hadn't become a clown, with the gray fog's powers yet to have entered the real world, preventing me from being noticed by special deities, demigods, and spirit world creatures. However, I couldn't fool fate, which would also be beyonders of the monster pathway. And the goddess has another title. She is the Empress of Misfortune and Horror. She wields control over misfortune and is one of the deities in the domain of fate. Therefore, I was noticed from back then. Klein's heart sank bit by bit as the horror that stemmed from the unknown was greatly alleviated. He didn't reply, nor did he wait for Miss Justice to speak again. He switched to asking, if you will face one or even many difficult-to-challenge enemies, what would you do? Audrey wasn't annoyed by her patient's question. Instead, she felt that it was a good sign. After some deliberation, she said, first avoid them and hide. Try harder to improve yourself. What if the time won from avoiding and hiding isn't enough to make you grow to a level that is sufficient enough to face your enemies? Klein pressed, what if the gap between the two is difficult to bridge? Audrey answered him seriously while also consoling him. Find enough helpers. Helpers. Names suddenly flashed across Klein's mind as his heart felt a lot more settled. He then continued asking, what if the enemies cannot be resisted even with helpers? What if there are helpers who are plotting something that might be beneficial to you, but they might also bring you harm? Audrey drew a blank, and after a few seconds of thought, she replied, you can pray to a deity. She nearly said to the world, you can seek Mr. Fool's help. And from the question and answer session, Audrey was able to confirm a matter. The mental problems that Mr. World was suffering stemmed from powerful and terrifying enemies, but there was a worry that, at a deeper level, the helpers had unknown stances. Pray to a deity. Klein didn't dare to directly say, what if deities couldn't resolve it because the thoughts of deities are even harder to fathom? After all, this was the fool's kingdom, and he was a blessed. He organized his words and said, deities can only provide help in certain areas. And what if that isn't enough? Audrey originally wanted to say that there was always a way and that good was bound to defeat evil, but she couldn't convince herself of it. She couldn't provide any relevant case studies, so eventually, she pursed her lips and said, I don't know. In the confessional, it was a still darkness. The two temporarily stopped speaking as they fell into their respective inner struggles. Finally, Audrey broke the silence and looked at the wooden partition. Regardless, something needs to be done. Work hard at it. You can't just give up like that and not put up a fight. That's right. At the very least, I still have many secrets and things to rely on. Klein closed his eyes as he leaned on the wooden plank. His thoughts slowly rewound from the most recent events as he was no longer constantly tense and often frustrated. Audrey sensed his change and immediately added a placate. With that, Klein's mental condition was completely restored back to normal. I feel much better. Thank you for your treatment. What kind of consultation fee do you want? Klein offered. Actually, I should be the one thanking you for providing me an opportunity to handle a case. Audrey didn't really wish to collect any fees as she looked at the wooden partition in the darkness. She couldn't help but recall Mr. World's usual gloominess and coldness, as well as his experienced and ruthless demeanor. His mental problems likely also have to do with his personality. Audrey suddenly had an idea as she smiled. The consultation fee that I charge isn't much at all. Yeah, wish me happiness. What's going on? Klein was momentarily stunned. He nearly forgot he was wearing the facade of Gehrman Sparrow. This was a request he had never heard of before. Klein hesitated for a moment. Finally, he pretended to coldly say with the world's identity, since you requested, I wish you happiness. Audrey's smile turned into a beaming smile. I wish you happiness too. Mr. World, don't always keep everything inside. Smile more and be happier. It can eliminate most of the latent problems. All right, your mental problems have been resolved, but you will need a follow-up appointment in a few days or by next week. Klein was at a loss for an answer as he tersely acknowledged an affirmation. Then, he heard the door on the other side creak open. With the fool's angle, he saw Miss Justice retreat from the confessional and straighten her body. After sending her to the real world, Klein didn't dare stay above the gray fog for too long. He quickly left and got into bed. At that moment, his mental condition had been restored. With his body and mind at ease, he realized something. He had digested quite a bit of his marionettist potion. The progress had surpassed his expectations. This is because I relied on my marionette to fool a demigod, Panatia, and orchestrated her and Mr. A to complete my planned-out performance at the foggy town? Therefore, apart from trying to hide behind the shadows and let every marionette have their own persona to make it more realistic, the marionettist principles include use one's marionette as a guide to control the enemy, to play the role of a puppet. Klein thought as he muttered inwardly in thought. He believed that he could digest the potion before the end of the year. He exhaled with mixed feelings as he turned his head and looked at the crimson moonlight that penetrated the curtains as he silently said, That missing servant should have been found. The clues I left behind should have been discovered as well. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard, Cindy, Bob, and company looked at Captain Soest, who had returned from a meeting, as they patiently waited for him to introduce new clues. Soest drank a mouthful of aromatic coffee and said, "The missing servant has been found. And in the room he was left in, there were some clothes left behind by the infiltrator. It has been confirmed that it belongs to the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, who had previously been active at sea." Why did it involve another crazy adventurer? Leonard was somewhat puzzled as he directly asked, "When did he come to Backland?" No one knows. The only thing that can be confirmed is that this crazy adventurer had appeared at sea in the recent few weeks and had hunted a few pirates, Soest said in an unhurried tone. The Church of Storms knows more. MI9 also seems to know quite a bit. The higher-ups will send people to liaise with them. Just as Soest finished his briefing, a telegram was sent over. It came from the Nighthawks in Desi. The content, which was decoded, read, "Dwayne Dantes' present identity is fake. In the past 10 years he spent in the southern continent, he had relied on adventuring to amass a significant amount of wealth. Further confirmation will require some time. As this place is very chaotic and there are often wars, the jurisdiction of zones are frequently changed." Chapter 850, The Devil is in the Details. Sounds like a contrived story. Ever since the New Sea route was discovered, there has been no end to stories of people becoming rich from taking risks. Soest casually commented on the content of the telegram. As he thought, he looked towards a particular red glove. "I recall that we had investigated Dwayne Dantes before and had an exchange with him in his dream." "Yes." The red glove, who was responsible for the task, nodded and replied, "I didn't directly ask him about such matters, but I could tell that Dwayne Dantes was very familiar with the southern continent. He had plenty of experience there." "Heh. That might be information that Dwayne Dantes deliberately revealed to you." Leonard had his doubts regarding the contents of the telegram, believing that this was another layer of disguise from an undying monster who had lived since the Fourth Epoch. However, he didn't inform his teammates about his conjectures, because he had no basis for them. Soest didn't pay great attention to the matter as he said, "Do you have any problems with the clues related to Gehrman Sparrow? Since this crazy adventurer was still at sea in recent weeks, when did he come to Backland?" As a nightmare, Cindy repeated her doubts. "What I'm concerned about isn't the exact time, but whether he has the time to travel to Backland. After all, we're rather far from the sea." Soest nodded gently and said, "In the meeting, a deacon raised this question. According to the time and venue of Gehrman Sparrow's last sighting, he normally has no way to arrive in Backland last night and complete an infiltration. Of course, I'm referring to normal circumstances. The missing servant told us that when he was sweeping the square, he suddenly lost control of his body. He froze on the spot and was unable to cry for help. Then, he saw bright colors like an abstract oil painting, and he felt that his body was floating upwards. Later, he lost consciousness, and after awakening, he found himself in a room in East Borough. The former matches with the keeper's description of being possessed by a wraith. The latter is suspected to be a traveler's teleport. If it really is teleport, then Gehrman Sparrow can appear in Backland at any moment." As elites of the Nighthawks, the Red Gloves knew about the various Beyonder pathways far better than their colleagues, which were at the same level. They were no strangers to wraiths and travelers. After listening to the captain's explanation, another Red Glove added in thought, "It's rumored that Admiral of Blood, who was hunted by Gehrman Sparrow, is a wraith." The details matched. And as for Gehrman Sparrow being able to obtain the powers to become a wraith, it wasn't unacceptable. The easiest method was to find an artisan to make one's prey into a mystical item. Cindy recalled even more information with this stimulus. It said that Gehrman Sparrow has the ability to change his appearance, and the infiltrator had disguised himself as the keeper. Another detail matched. Excellent thinking. Soest raised his hand to rub his temples. According to these details, we can come to a preliminary consensus that the infiltrator is Gehrman Sparrow. And this way, the name list we came up with might be erroneous. Gehrman Sparrow doesn't need a companion to frequently come to the cathedral to pray to gather information. He can change his appearance every day and enter to figure out the situation. This will be more indiscreet than using a companion. As the largest and most holy church of Evernight Cathedral in Backland, the number of believers that came to St. Samuel Cathedral on a daily basis was too numerous to count. No bishop could remember every unfamiliar face that they once met. That also means that the names we have here are meaningless? Leonard raised his hand to rub his brows, sounding rather desultory. That's somewhat obvious. Our focus now should be on Gehrman Sparrow. The other targets can be placed aside as we perform the most basic level of surveillance. Having said that, Soest clapped and said, "All right, get busy." Leonard didn't have any objections. He happened to hope to find the machinery hive mind, mandated punishers, and MI9 to gather some information. On Tuesday morning, Klein woke up naturally, feeling relaxed and calm. He had the feeling of joyful emotions slowly coming to life. A psychiatrist beyond her powers are quite useful after all. It really matches the extremely infectious optimism that Miss Justice brings with her. Klein got out of bed and drew the curtains. He leisurely took in the scenery outside and the scattering golden sunlight. He regained his drive and began formulating his plans for the next couple months and even the year. First, get a new marionette. Second, use the identity of Dwayne Dantes and the control over a marionette to orchestrate scripts to expedite the digestion of the potion. Third, during this process, slowly gather the ingredients needed for the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion. In that regard, I can ask Little Son about the Bizarro Bane to see if he has any clues. I'll seek Mr. Azek's help regarding the Spirit World Plunderer. After all, the Underworld is part of the Spirit World. Fourth, I'll continue investigating the Great Smog of Backlund and find the true culprit. This includes Nsangwil, as well as the demigod that killed Crazy Captain. There aren't any targets more suitable than them for my advancement ritual. However, I have to be careful of 0-08. I have to constantly keep watch of any intentional coincidences. I'll just dabble in the matter in an ordinary manner and mainly provide support. The dangerous investigations can be handed to Demonis Trissi. Klein's thought processes slowly became clear. Although he still felt worried and fearful, this no longer affected his mental state and capacity to take action. Retracting his gaze from outside the balcony, Klein walked into the bathroom and washed up. Soon, he opened the door while feeling highly spirited, and he saw his valet, Richardson, and butler, Walter, waiting outside. The gentleman was wearing white gloves as he politely bowed and said, "Good morning, sir. There's only one item on your schedule today. It's to join an event at the East Balham Military Veterans Mess with Member of Parliament mocked at 3 in the afternoon. He's a new Member of Parliament, so by accepting his invitation, it will also indicate your political inclinations. You still have the opportunity to be hesitant about it." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "There's no need. It's my choice." He paused and asked in an inquiring tone, "It will be my first time visiting the East Balham Military Veterans Mess. What should I take note of?" "Praise their work that they have established in East Balham. Use this opportunity to make some donations. There's no need to give too much or little. £500 is a rather suitable sum." Walter provided his opinion. £500. Seriously, no matter which circle I enter, I'll have to spend large sums of money. Sigh, this is because Dwayne Dantes doesn't have any birthright or background. He can only open a path with cash. Klein nodded gently and agreed with his butler's suggestion. At the same time, he quickly did a count of his present assets. The artisan hasn't completed the work regarding the ocean songster, but the money for Mentor of Confusion and Druid has been obtained. That's a total of £16,000. With the cash I originally had on hand, subtracting the £13,000 I used to purchase 3% of the coin company's shares, as well as the daily expenses of a tycoon's household and the donations at the cathedral, there's still £23,985 and 5 gold coins left. In addition, I still owe Miss Messenger 3,413 gold coins. £500 has already exceeded 2% of the cash I have on hand. Klein didn't speak further as he walked out of his bedroom, going to the second floor where the dining room was in order to have his breakfast. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard Mitchell returned to his office earlier than his teammates. He had already obtained the relevant information and had learned of an inconspicuous matter. Prince Edisac, who passed away in the Great Smog of Backlund, had once hired a private detective to investigate the death of equestrian teacher Talon Dumont. And that private detective's name was Sherlock Moriarty. As expected, there are hints of him being involved with the Great Smog of Backlund. Leonard was delighted as he excitedly ruffled his hair. Following that, he pounded down at the documents on his desk with his fist, planning to seek out even more clues. However, he suddenly fell silent for about 8 seconds before raising his cup in embarrassment and drank a mouthful of coffee. He mumbled inwardly, "What did I want to do? I forgot about it after the pounding." After some careful recall, Leonard finally recalled what it was. He pulled out his drawer and took out a deck of tarot cards. Then, he found the Fool card and placed it on a piece of paper. On it, he wrote 3 names: Sherlock Moriarty, Gearman Sparrow, Dwayne Dantes. After some hesitation, Leonard drew a line linking the 3 names to the Fool card, indicating that they might very well be members of a secret organization that believed in the Fool. Among them, he was most unsure of Gearman Sparrow's identity as he wrote a question mark. Later, Leonard took out the Emperor card and stuck it beside the name, Sherlock Moriarty. He labeled it suspected to be. Gearman Sparrow and Dwayne Dantes each correspond to a card? Leonard muttered silently. He took out the crazy adventurer's records and began reading them seriously. Suddenly, he found a date very familiar. Early January. Gearman Sparrow's first appearance was in early January. No way. Leonard drew a gasp as he flipped through another set of documents. At the end of it were the words, "At the end of December, Sherlock Moriarty left Backland and headed south for a vacation. He is yet to return. End of December, early January. Backland, Pritz Harbor. Gearman Sparrow can change his appearance. No way. Leonard mumbled inwardly as he drew a dotted equality sign between Sherlock Moriarty and Gearman Sparrow. This great detective is the key. Leonard found Sherlock Moriarty's portrait that he had drawn via a ritual as he carefully looked at it. After considering the point that looks could be changed, he began imagining the detective in different disguises. As he did it, Leonard's gaze froze bit by bit as he couldn't help but frown.